Imagine working all day lifting weights, and when you finally get home exhausted, the only enjoyment you find in life is playing a virtual reality game. They say that whoever completes this game will gain unlimited wealth. Finally, when he manages to beat the game and more than 1 million lands in his bank account, he goes to sleep happily. But when he wakes up, the world has been invaded by monsters. The game has become reality, and he is the only one who knows everything about it and is determined to hack the system. The story begins on a beautiful morning with a clear sky. Someone is wearing virtual reality glasses, breathing heavily and sweating profusely. Inside the game, he receives congratulations for completing the final test, as he is the only one to finish the game. Happily, he asks if he really finished everything. While a pixelated game screen is displayed, someone mentions a scam game. He explains that this is what the VR game Prophecy Online was called. It was truly an impressive VR experience. Immersive and action-packed, compatible with high resolutions like 16K. It was an open-world online RPG where players could feel, smell, and hear things. This was Prophecy Online. The game promised that anyone who managed to complete it would receive unlimited wealth that couldn't be spent even in 10,000 years. At the time, no one believed in such a reward from the game. He admits that he was one of those people, simply enjoying the game while it asked for money and things like that. Endo says that all changed that day, remembering when someone told his team to take a break. He was at his workplace as usual, asking if they would be clearing debris in the afternoon. After failing to find jobs, he began working part-time as a construction worker, trapped in a routine of working hard under the sun and getting scolded by older colleagues. Suddenly, Endo receives a message on his phone from the Prophecy Online administration. Noticing it's a message from the game, he wonders if he hadn't turned off email notifications. In the message, they congratulate him for achieving first place in the beta test, saying the rewards would be deposited into his account. Smiling, Endo questions if they really still send out these scam emails saying he'll check his account. He looks at his phone and saying it's impossible that they actually deposited anything in his bank. Surprisingly, they had deposited 1 million yen for him. A man approaches him, saying he'll need his help after the break. Concerned, the man comes closer, touching his shoulder, asking if he's feeling unwell. Endo simply starts running, laughing wildly, leaving his colleague on the ground asking where he's going. Running with high hopes, the player wonders if this is real and if he can make money from the game. He questions whether the reward that couldn't be spent in 10,000 years is real, which makes him throw himself fully into the game. This game was ruthless and unforgiving, using its players as sacrifices. The tower's guardian would destroy defeated users along with their data. In the dungeon, the tower's exit was always random. And the best part of all this exploration, they felt the same pain as the characters when they took damage, always confronting the real fear of death, making many players quit. Endo earned just enough to cover his expenses through a part-time job. However, to play more, he went into debt, taking loans from loan sharks and banks. Now he had no choice but to wait for those unlimited assets that couldn't be spent in 10,000 years. Going back to when he finally completed the game, they simply congratulate him, saying the real reward is his experience. With that exhausted, he begins to take off his VR. Completely disbelieving, he wonders if he actually did it. Dropping everything, he rushes to his phone, anxious for the reward. Clicking on the email sent by the Prophecy Online team, they were announcing that they had recently reached their goal, and for that reason, Prophecy Online would be discontinued. Angry, Endo wonders what will happen to his rewards, while he reads the game's thanks to all its sponsors. Feeling unwell, he ends up dropping his phone to the ground, lamenting while his phone remains broken on the floor. Kneeling on the ground, Endo wonders if they will properly reward him now that he has completed the game. The day remains sunny, the neighborhood calm, as if his problems affected no one else. As he walks toward his bed, he tries to convince himself that since it's a large sum of money, it might take time to transfer. Endo lies down exhausted on his bed, saying he'll check tomorrow. The next day, looking at his phone, he admits that nothing else came in besides the 1 million yen, and that he should have given up. After these events, a week passes. He hears a loud noise and wonders what's happening so early. Looking at his phone, Endo realizes the sound isn't coming from it. That's when he looks up and sees a system window. In front of him are notifications saying that the ice trial failed and Moscow was destroyed. Next would be the Earth trial. With a time limit of 43 days, if they failed, the test site would be annihilated, now being Japan. He looks at everything in confusion, not understanding what's happening. On the TV, terrified journalists inform the public of Moscow's current state. While monsters completely ravage the city, the Russian government declares there is no hope of survivors. Not knowing what kind of creatures these are, journalists announce they seem to be dragons. A helicopter observes the monsters from above. The journalist aboard reports that a similar situation is about to occur in Japan according to the gathered information. The warden states that many say this is a disaster coming from a game called Prophecy Online, being completely similar. A geologist says the only possible cause of a disaster on this scale would be the movement of tectonic plates, not monsters. As a monster opens its mouth toward the helicopter, the journalist asks if it's trying to aim at them. Someone screams desperately, ordering them to get out of there and return, but unfortunately, there's no response. The terrified presenter begins to shout the journalist's name, asking if she can hear him. The specialist, horrified by the scene, says that this could never happen with plate movement. While running to his balcony, the protagonist says there's no doubt about it. He confesses that even in this crazy situation, he managed to remain calm. With his extreme calm, only one thought crossed his mind. Elsewhere, a woman was trying to learn how the system worked. Pressing the main event button, Endo also presses this button, realizing the time limit is 43 days and the test location is Japan with 0 progress. He remembers the game's message saying his experience would be priceless. The protagonist assumes the priceless assets mentioned by the game were his experience. After all, he was the only one who completed it. Suddenly, after a long time, his door opens. All stylish, the young man steps out convinced. With a sly grin, he says he'll now get his money. As he runs, he remarks that with the game becoming reality, there will be intense competition for spots and experience points. Still running fast, he notices the nearest dungeon is just ahead of him. Endo hurries toward a large building. Many people are running and panicking, asking how they should escape since the buses and trains are out of service. Anxious and in a rush, he keeps running. Unexpectedly, someone angrily shouts at him to stop. The man steps in front of him, leaving the protagonist surprised. The man asks Endo if he's just going to ignore his reminders and leave. Looking at the man, he realizes it's one of the loan sharks chasing him. The loan shark says he was on his way to Endo's house and orders him to turn around. ground. He throws a cigarette at Endo's face. A year ago, while the protagonist was inside a dungeon, an ad appeared. There was a company offering 200,000 yen interest-free to anyone who passed their selection, but they wanted 50% of all rewards. Endo thought it was a great offer, as he'd get the money interest-free and only pay back after completing the game. However, after spending the 200,000 yen, he was told he didn't pass the selection, so he'd need to pay 50% interest within 10 days. He remembers a time when a gun was pointed at him. From that point, Endo began taking loans from banks to pay off his debts. But when he tried to pay the debt, they brushed him off, hoping his interest would accumulate. Smiling, the man asks if the protagonist had the money to pay off the loan. Irritated, Endo looks at the loan shark, asking how he could pay if they wouldn't take his calls. The man questions if that's true, saying that people who don't want to pay always come up with excuses, calling him despicable. Still smiling, the loan shark says he's lucky to be there for other reasons. He asks if Endo hasn't been playing that game, Prophecy Online. The man mentions that the current state of the world is identical to the game's. Grabbing Endo by his shirt, he asks if he knows anything, and if he does, he'd better spill everything. The protagonist orders the man to get his filthy hands off him. Even angrier, the man asks Endo if he knows who he's talking to. The protagonist then tells Takuo he'll give him a useful piece of information. Activating his skill, Novice's fist, making the loan shark step back. Takuo boosts his fist's power by 50% and starts punching the man. The strength of his blows is so intense that the loan shark is thrown against a traffic sign. Looking at the man lying on the ground, he says that from now on, he's in charge. Seeing Takuo unconscious and bleeding, Endo remarks that apparently the loan shark can't hear him. He just leaves Takuo there and continues running toward his goal. Watching from inside a car, a man in a black hood comments that maybe these are game abilities. With his face partially covered, he says he didn't expect to find such an experienced person so soon. Smiling, the man says that soon law and order will collapse, making things more interesting. The protagonist arrives at a place called the Goat's Sanctuary. Unexpectedly, something catches his attention. Noticing a car, he wonders if someone arrived before him. Endo begins descending into the deep, dark dungeon, still moving through the corridors, searching for something. Suddenly, he smells a strong scent of blood. Surprisingly, dozens of lizard men lie dead in front of him. The same hooded man and his group notice that apparently someone else has arrived. Looking at Endo, he asks if the protagonist is also a prophecy player. A bit annoyed, Endo asks if the group did all that. The hooded man says those were high-level monsters, and without him, the protagonist would be dead. Endo starts questioning whether the lizards are truly high-level, remembering that their level was the lowest of the low. Taking off his hood, he comments that it seems Endao has no friends, asking if he'd like to become one of his subordinates. He says the protagonist will have to hand over half of everything he earns, but in return, he'll protect him since he's very strong. Everyone behind him is charmed by his kindness. Endo apologizes, saying he prefers to go solo. Pointing ahead, he asks if they'd be able to get past the boss. They're shocked at the thought. Talking to his group, the hooded man asks if it's worth killing Endo after they finish off the boss. Making everyone nervous, the man says the fewer people know about the game's information, the better. He says that's his decision, and anyone who doesn't agree with him will face an accidental death. Suddenly, everyone feels a certain fear and becomes uneasy. The man informs his subordinates that the boss here is the Ember Goat, so he doesn't want the protagonist to be the last one to attack it. There were only 5 minutes left until the door opened. Some of them approach Endao, who is surprised. A girl, along with 2 men, moves toward him, a bit nervous. Smiling, he asks if they're going to try to stop him. A bit anxious, they begin to say he's right and that he should stay right there. He thinks of himself that he could easily throw them out, but this time he'll let them go. The door opens as the protagonist thinks it won't be too late, and he'll defeat the boss after most of them have been killed. After the remaining time for the door to open runs out, it finally opens. He simply takes a juice from his inventory and leans against the wall, waiting for his moment. Hearing the gates close, he looks into the boss room, wondering how far they'll manage to get. As they enter, the leader assumes it was convenient that Endo didn't go in with them. The girl mentions that maybe the protagonist understood their intentions to kill him, but the leader says he's not smart enough to notice that. In front of them is a large hall, completely empty except for a single light coming from a crack in the ceiling. Hitting the shield of one of his subordinates, he orders the guy to do his job. The guy says that with his shield, the boss won't be a problem, while addressing the leader as Sir Light. A candle emitting purple flames was burning in a wall sconce. Suddenly, a strong wind strikes them, leaving everyone confused. Surprisingly, a large fire tornado forms right in front of them. The leader, filled with extreme fear, starts questioning what kind of scenario this is. Interrupting his thoughts, a large paw emerges from the flames. That's when he realizes this is actually the Hellfire Goat. The monster was a mix between a goat, a wolf, a horse, and other animals. The goat lets out a loud scream, sending shockwaves and fire spreading in all directions. Many warriors scream as another devastating attack strikes them. Light himself, along with some of his subordinates, is thrown back against the entrance door. He curses, wondering how everything ended up like this, with the monster stopping right in front of him. A frightened girl asks what they should do now, and he angrily tells her to shut up and orders everyone to retreat. One of his subordinates shouts that the door is closed, and the leader says that's impossible, questioning what's going on. He starts yelling, ordering some of them to distract the creature, saying the shield should be able to block the monster's attacks. The man holding the shield tries to say something, but his leader ignores him, commanding him to do as he was told. The shield bearer positions himself in front of the creature, which raises its hammer. The man, completely overtaken by fear, holds the shield in front of him, but with no chance at all, he is crushed by the creature. His companions are utterly terrified and they start to flee. After the boss raises its hammer again, we can see the man lying lifeless on the ground. The strange creature picks up the man's shield with its fingers. Unexpectedly, it places it in its mouth. It begins chewing the shield as if it were nothing. They start saying that this is unbelievable since it was an epic level shield. Light concludes that everything is completely wrong after all. The monster they came to face is a low level one that everyone can handle. He says that this happened after the update. Before, it was a monster called the Hellfire Goat and no player could get past it. Trembling with fear, he reaches the conclusion that this world is based on the game's initial version. Light remembers that the protagonist is waiting outside and that maybe he can open the door. The leader begins banging on the door desperately, begging Endo to open it so they can split the reward. However, as expected, he receives no response. Annoyed, Light asks if the guy can hear him and orders him to open the door. but something passes very quickly and close to his body. When he looks back, Light sees the monster heading toward him, sweeping through all his subordinates until it reaches him. Once again, they are thrown far away, left completely injured. Looking at the monster, he says that with such ridiculous physical strength, soon they will all be annihilated. Opening the door, Endu asks if that was all he could manage after all that talk, saying that Light lacks the talent to be a leader. With a proud smile, our swindler looks at the monster. Even almost dead, the man still mentally curses him. He admits mentally that he'll use the protagonist to escape and starts calling his subordinates, ordering them to retreat. Endu makes the girl trip as he tells her it's not a good idea. With the girl fallen to the ground, she realizes the door is closing. The protagonist looks at the so-called leader. Light runs toward the door, mentally begging that at least he can get through. Suddenly, he starts screaming loudly as the door crushes his arm. The monster approaches the leader, calling him a noisy brat. As it prepares to deliver an attack, it says the boy is very irritating and that it will end his life right there. Light looks back, realizing the monster is coming toward him. Suddenly, a large amount of blood splatters across the room. Watching that terrifying scene, the girl and the man who had tried to stop the protagonist wonder what they're going to do against such a monster. Picking up the sword on the ground, Endu says that what they need to do is obvious. Raising the sword, he says that although Light was weak, he had a good sword, and that's enough for someone like him. The monster, once again preparing its hammer, asks if the protagonist is so eager to die. It strikes him with a powerful attack, sending fragments of stone flying in all directions. The protagonist appears on top of the monster, preparing to counterattack. Smiling, he asks the monster what it's talking about. In the blink of an eye, he manages to cut the monster in multiple places. The monster screams as its horns fall to the ground. Light's former subordinates look at the man, terrified by his level of strength. Calmly, Endu asks what they think. Once again, our swindler says that if they pay him 10 million yen, he might consider saving them. The frightened girl looks at him, not understanding if he's serious. Both the girl and her companion shout, asking if he's really demanding 10 million. He says that's correct and that he'll only charge 1 million per person. Annoyed, they begin to argue that no one would have that amount on hand and that he's just trying to take advantage of the situation. Endu says that if they don't have money, they should pay with their efforts, while asking if they really want to die so young. Then the hero states that they'll work for him, giving him 90% of everything they earn. The girl yells, telling him to stop treating them like fools, while her friend says even Light only charged 50%. As the monster rises behind them, Endu says that it seems there's nothing else to do. The monster stands up even angrier, asking who dared to cut off his precious horns. It launches a massive fireball, yelling that they should die 1,000 times over. The girl casts a spell trying to shield herself. The protagonist jumps through the flames. Both are thrown far back by the force of the impact. Endu gently lands in front of them. With a smile, he says that apparently they managed to escape, but he wonders how long their luck will hold. With that, they both give up and agree to work for him, but they beg him to save them. He starts smiling, pleased with the outcome. He says it looks like they struck a deal, while glancing at the monster and saying it's been a long time since he last defeated it. The monster, irritated, says it doesn't remember ever being defeated by someone like him. They begin asking what he's talking about since the Hellfire Goat was supposed to have been removed before it was ever defeated. Without replying, Endu looks at the monster with termination. He recalls that before the update, he had defeated the monster once, and he confesses that he heard from some sources that the Hellfire Goat was transformed into the Blaze Goat. With just a single movement of his sword, the protagonist manages to deflect the monster's attack. The monster stares in confusion, unable to understand how he managed that. Both his subordinates look at him, wondering who Endu really is after all, stopping that creature so easily. The protagonist confesses to the monster that if its attack had hit him, he'd definitely be dead. But, he adds, its attacks aren't dangerous once you know the tricks. The monster keeps attacking while he dodges and blocks them all with relative ease. The monster grows increasingly frustrated, wondering how this is possible, while the protagonist leaps behind it. Brandishing his sword, Endu manages to strike the monster's eyes, saying its patterns are exactly like in the game. As he steps away from the battle, the new subordinates notice he's pushing the monster back. They begin cheering him on, rooting for his victory. Annoyed, Endu tells them they're being too loud, prompting one of his subordinates to call him frustrating. Suddenly, a powerful attack passes close to Endu, leaving him surprised. Slamming its massive hammer into the ground, the monster says the protagonist's evasion skills are commendable, but it all ends here. With his back against the wall, the player realizes he's cornered. He asks the infernal goat if this was his plan all along to trap him. Ignoring his question, the monster asks if he has any last words. With a smile, the protagonist simply tells the monster to drop dead after all, it can't even land a hit on him. Even more enraged, the monster says it will fulfill his wish as it summons flames around itself. It opens its mouth, concentrating a huge core of fire in the center. The subordinates begin to wonder what these black flames are. Endo explains that this is the flame that burns everything, capable of killing even a level 99 player instantly. It's an attack that incinerates the entire ground, leaving no escape route. This is the goat's ultimate move, its last hope. With a purple gleam in his eyes and a grin, he says it's no big deal. Endu says he's been waiting for this moment, activating his novice kick skill on the ground, adding just 50% of his strength, creating a bright flash at the spot where he stood. Skillfully, he jumps for the monster, saying that even though it's a powerful attack, it leaves the user completely defenseless. And besides, he adds, its mouth has nowhere near the strength of the rest of his body. Positioning himself on the ceiling to gain momentum, he says, in other words, this level 1 strength is enough to keep it closed, stabbing the monster's mouth from above downwards. The monster falls to the ground, desperately trying to open its mouth as the flames burn it from within. Endu is exhausted from the battle, explaining that once this ability is activated, it can no longer be contained. With that, there's nothing left for the monster to do but feel the flames burning through its entire body. He jumps back, creating some distance as he asks if the monster can withstand its own flames. A little further away, they watch as the monster is charred by its own attack. Looking at the monster, he bids it farewell. When the Hellfire Goat finally opens its mouth, it only manages to scream. After a while, the monster was completely charred. The system notifies that the unique boss, the Hellfire Goat, has been defeated, while the girl and the guy can hardly believe they're still alive. Looking at the protagonist, they notice he killed the boss without even a scratch. The system congratulates him, announcing that Endu was the first to defeat a unique boss. He's awarded the title title of the first Slayer. This leaves him a bit confused, as he doesn't remember anything like this in the game. This title grants him an additional 50% damage when fighting a boss. Additionally, as an extra reward, he can choose his secondary occupation. The system asks if he wants to select his secondary occupation now, and he replies that he does. The system also explains that once his secondary occupation is chosen, it can no longer be changed. With determination, he chooses the occupation of Soulsmith. Endo extends his arm, resolute in his choice. Suddenly, a bright light surrounds his body. With a smile, he says that it looks like he's about to make a lot of money. Collecting the boss's drops, he finds a dagger and a key. The girl informs him that it's the key to the underground sewer. It's a great place to level up quickly and earn money. The man accompanying her says their main objective initially was the ultra-rare drop the boss had. Endo starts spinning the key on his finger. He explains that this item isn't that rare. In fact, the drop rate is 100% with the Hellfire Goat. They're horrified at how casually he treats an item that's so hard to acquire. Looking at the dagger, he assumes it was pure luck to have obtained it. Endo walks over to the rubble. As he points the blade, yellow and blue sparks begin to emerge from it. With just a downward flick of his hand, he slices one of the pieces of rubble in half. Both his subordinates stare in shock, asking what's up with that dagger. While remarking that it's still not good enough, he starts using his secondary occupation ability, hoping the required materials will be simple. Even though the term secondary occupation might sound optional, Endo explains it's actually the main thing. He explains that the Soulsmith occupation allows him to use small soul fragments to create or enhance something. It's the only occupation that allows him to reach the endgame. The protagonist activates his soul sight ability. Looking at the sword, he discovers that it can be awakened with a soul fragment from an F-type mage. Looking at the girl, he realizes she's a mage and that there won't be any consequences if he extracts the fragment by forming a contract. He admits he wishes he'd known that before agreeing to take 90% of their earnings. As he thrusts his dagger into the ground, he says there's still something he can use. Looking at the two, he asks if they didn't want that key to be able to level up. Confused, they ask if he's really okay with it. Endo says that in exchange, they'll have to give him all the items on this list, slightly reducing the fee they'll need to pay. Both are ecstatic and begin thanking him. The protagonist tells them they don't need to thank him. After all, the more they earn, the more he profits, fulfilling the extraction conditions. He successfully acquired a soul fragment from an F-type mage. With the materials in hand, Endo activates the Soulsmith ability once again. He commands the sword to awaken, and it begins to glow radiantly. As fragments swirl in a tornado of power, the sword's blade turns purple. Raising the dagger in front of him, he notices he's gained a new skill called Soul Slash. The hero activates the skill to test it. While his subordinates look on terrified, he slashes forward, cutting through everything in his path. The attack is so powerful that it slices through the warehouse, revealing a forest beyond. Both subordinates gaze at the massive crater in awe of such strength. Everyone stares at the power released with a single movement of the dagger. They collapse to the ground, wondering if a human could possess such power. Looking at the dagger, he comments that this seems to be its limit. As he looks at the girl, Endo says that he has a weapon and a minimal amount of skills, but should be ready for the next step. The protagonist simply stops in front of the girl, scaring her. Quickly, Rumi covers her face, thinking he's going to kill her. To her surprise, Endo simply walks past her, leaving her confused as to what's happening. He crouches in front of the bodies of his subordinates, former companions, and begins to pray. Ruby watches him, captivated, wondering if Endo is mourning the dead players. However, in reality, the protagonist just wanted the wallets of the extras. The little thief starts grinning, saying they had quite a bit of money on them. Both concluded that he's more dangerous than the Hellfire Goat. Somewhere, numerous black feathers fall from the sky. Around a shrine, several crows are flying as someone stands before the gate. It was Endo, observing the place. He calmly approaches a well. As he descends the stairs, the protagonist mentions that beneath this well, there's a large number of monsters. Usually, they'd only be challenged by a group of 3 or more people. But Endo says that this doesn't apply to him after all. He has the goat dagger. Upon reaching the bottom of the stairs, he looks around. Suddenly, he hears the sound of a coin flying toward him. He quickly slices it in half, avoiding contact. Positioning himself for battle, the player raises his dagger in front. Noticing something, he glares ahead, irritated. Unexpectedly, 3 men appear, asking if there's a new visitor. The man with a bloodthirsty look tells the protagonist that this place belongs to them. Pointing his blade at the men, he questions who decided that. The man says that whoever arrives first wins, asking if that isn't the game's rule. One of the men says they'd let him use the area if he pays a fee. Realizing these men are like him, Endo asks what the price would be. The man says he'll charge him 50,000 yen per hour, since even so, the protagonist would still be making a profit. He hands the money to the men, who thank him and inform him that he has 1 hour starting now. Going deeper into the dungeon, he enters the wolves' cavern. Suddenly, the player hears a howl. A white wolf quickly runs toward him. Before he realizes it, he notices he's surrounded by dozens of wolves. He comments that these are diamond wolves, mid-level monsters that are great for earning money, and that this cave is the only place they appear in groups. He says he could use the soul blade, but it's better to save it for now. In an instant, all the wolves leap at him. Skillfully, he charges at them. In the blink of an eye, he slashes through all the wolves. He continues killing them, walking through the pack and decapitating them. After finishing them off, he simply stops his attack. He sits among all the corpses to catch his breath. Smiling, he says that, as expected, it didn't yield much. Unexpectedly, one of the men who confronted him at the entrance appears behind him, preparing to strike. With relative ease, the protagonist manages to block his enemy's attack. Brandishing his dagger, he counters. Surprisingly, the man dodges his attack. However, the attack hits the top of the cavern, causing a strong explosion. His enemy, with a cut on his forehead, admits that was dangerous. The protagonist notes that the man managed to dodge his attack even with difficulty, showing his combat experience. The player tells the big guy that apparently he likes to play dirty. After all, he waited for him to kill him monsters and lower his guard. With a manic grin, his opponent says he loves it. The protagonist concludes that their real objective is to wait for other players to gather equipment, then kill and rob them. Overhearing their conversation, the group's leader says that it seems he figured it out. Smiling, the protagonist says this is a secret spot used by all cheers, so it'd be strange if they were the only ones there. Endo says that if they wanted to deceive him, they should have at least planned a fake round. The player admits to himself that, in reality, he only noticed this after seeing their weapons. He notes that the big guy is using a kind of knuckle duster blaster, the famous rocket punches. It's a risky move, but greatly enhances the speed of its user. He also mentions the skinny guy's weapon, a sword that cuts through vibrations. As for the ring on the leader's finger, that's truly a problematic item. The leader apologizes for the misunderstanding and says he'll even give him compensation for the trouble, reaching into his coat. He throws hundreds of coins for the protagonist. Endu is startled as the coins fall, but he's also extremely angry inside, saying the guy is throwing 10,000 yen like it's nothing. As the man's ring glows, he says his hand slipped and asks the protagonist to pick them up for him. Noticing the trap, the protagonist asks if it's really worth making his enemy kneel. He explains that the ring's ability causes small explosions with coins and wonders if his enemies are underestimating him. As he tosses his dagger upward, the protagonist says they can't return alive after hunting someone of a higher rank. As the three gather in front of him, they ask if Endu forgot it's 3 against 1. While preparing his dagger, the protagonist says that even together, they wouldn't be worth 1 yen. The leader, even angrier, curses at him, glaring fiercely. The man snaps his fingers, activating the explosion ability. A large blast occurs. The leader orders his subordinates to cut him limb by limb until he's dead. The big guy appears behind him, positioning himself to strike. With some difficulty, the protagonist manages to dodge his attack. Something catches his attention while he's still midair. It was the skinny guy, saying he isn't very good at holding back. The protagonist manages to block his enemy's sword while his companion lands a series of punches to his back. However, to everyone's surprise, the player makes a single move, throwing both of them away. Looking at the leader, the protagonist says that apparently the deal not to bother him for 50,000 yen was broken, so he'll charge them with interest. He unleashes several attacks toward the leader. While smiling, he says he'll pay him back with interest, but in explosive coins. From above, we can see that the protagonist is in the center, raising his dagger, with 2 of his enemies on the ground and the leader still standing. The long-haired one activates his explosive coin ability again. Endu runs, dodging the coins as he moves. Without wasting time, the skinny guy attacks him from above. With a certain ease, he manages to block the skinny guy's furious attack. However, his fury turns to fear as he sees his sword breaking. Without even giving him a chance to understand what's happening, the protagonist strikes him again. The leader, seeing the scene, wonders if the protagonist's dagger really is a rare item. While Endu fights against the 3 of them, the leader assumes this is still within expectations, and that, in any case, they won't be defeated by someone like him. Quickly, the player tries to dodge the explosions. Again, Endu gets angry as they throw money around like it's worthless. The big guy appears behind him once more, trying to strike him. The protagonist dodges the attack, causing a huge explosion. The explosion's force is so strong that even his allies need to shield themselves. The player's blade spins in the air as if announcing his defeat. The big guy starts celebrating, saying it was a great challenge, while his friend tells him he needs to learn to hold back. The skinny one, holding his sword, admits that the visitor was indeed strong. The long-haired one crouches to pick up the dagger, saying that no matter how good a weapon is, if its user isn't alive, it's worthless. Suddenly, Endu activates his soul restriction ability, chaining both the skinny guy and the big guy, leaving only the leader, who is terrified. Both warriors start screaming in pain as the chains tighten around them. The concerned leader starts calling out their names. Emerging from the mist, the player explains that he used his soulsmith ability to cause unparalleled pain. The enraged leader charges at the protagonist, wielding the goat dagger. Before he can even get into position, the protagonist grabs him. Looking at him, Endu calls him slow. Furious, the man says he won't lose no matter what. He jumps back, unbuttoning his coat, sending numerous coins flying. Confidently, the leader commands him to be amazed. But now even angrier, the protagonist reactivates his soul restriction ability. In the blink of an eye, his opponent is completely chained. He tries to scream as some of the chains tighten around his neck. The long-haired man doesn't understand why his ability won't activate, and Endu explains that with a significant level difference, he can nullify the enemy's power. Still bound, he asks what level difference he's talking about since he's already level 7. As he tightens the chains further, the player tells him he's done well for a beginner. Looking at them, Endu tries to figure out the conditions required to obtain their soul fragments. The big guy's condition was to satisfy his hunger, the skinny guy's was to introduce him to his older sister, and the leader's was to genuinely fear him. With a menacing look, the protagonist says that the leader's condition is one he can fulfill right now. As he strangles the leader begins to beg for his life. Holding his dagger, the player says he would be only one at a disadvantage if he left him alive. The terrified man, in extreme fear, starts asking what he means. Endu says he'll sell parts of his body since there are always people willing to buy. Once again, our scammer says that the interest rate on the 50,000 yen was pretty high. The skinny guy starts shouting, saying the protagonist really does seem like the type to do such a thing. He feels offended, saying there's no way a freelancer like him could have connections in the black market. Endu says that if they don't like that idea, they should think of another way to make money. In complete terror, the leader begs for his life as tears stream down his face. A system notifies that Koki fears him deeply and that the conditions have been fulfilled, granting him a mage's soul fragment. After that, the protagonist simply releases them from their chains. They collapse to the ground, gasping for air. The protagonist hands them several contracts, ordering them to sign. They're all outraged by the fact that they'll have to give up 90% of their profits and still obey his every command. With a bloodthirsty look, Endu glares at them, asking if they have any complaints. Terrified, they both answer that they have none. He says that from now on, the 3 of them are his subordinates, and that if they ever think of betraying him, the operating table will be their fate. Unexpectedly, Endu asks them to lead him to the real leader. They're all utterly horrified, asking how he figured it out. He explains that the items they're using couldn't have been obtained by weaklings like them, obviously meaning someone else is behind them, and asks if he's right. Kaki starts begging, saying that if the boss finds out, he'll kill them. Placing his foot on his subordinate's head, Endu asks if he's going to betray his former boss or have his organs transplanted. Trembling, the skinny guy starts muttering something. Suddenly, he starts crying and running, saying he he wants neither, leaving the big guy shocked. The player points his finger at the man, asking if he really thinks he can escape. With that, the soul restriction chains grab the man once again. His two companions are utterly terrified by his total control, as their friend is suffocated and he say they'll lead him to their boss. But Endu still demands all their weapons and money. The protagonist notes that the security in this world is terrible. Unigame's security was better. With a grin, Endu laughs, saying there's probably no one left who could hurt him now. In his status window, we can see that the protagonist is on a completely different level. At dusk, we can see a circus. Like any circus, there's a spot where the tightrope walker performs, along with rings of fire and other things. Then we're shown someone being beaten by a man. The person being attacked falls to the ground, bleeding. Some people inside a sort of cell say that he'll be next and express their sorrow. A man with a bloody face tells the person being beaten that he didn't even complete the task. The man asks if he won't apologize to the boss. Another man in the cell shouts, begging for him to stop, saying that the person will die. With a sadistic smile, he says the person should just die and that they're all causing the boss a lot of grief. Someone holding a whip asks why they're talking about him. The sadistic man starts stuttering, calling him boss. The boss, with a clown-painted face, asks his subordinate if he's done disciplining him. Helping the man on the ground, the boss says that if he had broken a bone, it would take a long time to recover. He tells his subordinate that, no matter how incompetent they may be, he shouldn't simply break them. Trembling and sweating, the sadistic man starts apologizing to the boss. With tears in his eyes, the beaten man thanks the boss, saying that next time he'll definitely. However, his thanks are cut short as the clown lashes out with his whip. In an instant, the man is struck in the face with an extremely powerful blow. He keeps whipping the man, saying that this way is better since it doesn't break bones but shreds flesh. Still beating him, the boss says that not even animal welfare organizations would help him if he remains this lazy. Suddenly, someone says that they've returned, catching the boss's attention. With a sinister look, the boss remarks that they're back too early. The long-haired one says they need to report in as they're in no condition to continue the operation. The clown notices his hand and realizes the ring is gone. He becomes extremely angry as he looks at Cookie. The boss demands to know where the ring he lent him is, saying it's worth more than his own life. The long-haired one bows, apologizing and saying they were robbed by a man who was practically a monster. Ignoring his explanation, the boss just attacks him. Cocky falls to the ground from the impact. Furious, the boss says that even with so few people in his guild, he shouldn't be surrounded by such incompetent scum. Both of Cookie's companions confess that most of them quit because of his abuse of power. The boss says there's only one job left that Cookie can do and calls his other subordinate Locke. The clown orders him to bring Johnny. Suddenly, a large white tiger's paw appears. The animal moves towards the long-haired man. The animal growls, looking at him furiously. Stammering in fear, he begins to beg the boss not to do this, saying that he's been loyal since the beginning. With a smile, the clown gives the order for Johnny to feast. The large tiger opens its mouth toward Cookie, who remains paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, someone appears, swinging from one of the circus apparatuses. It's the protagonist who saves his new subordinate by kicking the tiger away. With his incredible strength, he manages to throw the animal far. Concerned for his animal, the boss looks at it while shouting its name. The player, with a smile, apologizes but says he couldn't let him kill his source of income. The boss rushes over to his animal, asking if it's okay and saying it must have been very frightened. Desperate, Cookie asks why Endu took so long to show up, but the swindler only complains that there wasn't much to loot. Not surprisingly, the boss attacks him from behind with his whip. However, to his surprise, the protagonist cuts his whip even with his back turned. In the blink of an eye, the boss is left without his whip, which falls to the ground in pieces. Now a bit nervous and afraid, the clown asks who he is. As his blade glows purple, Endu says he's the new boss of those guys. Locke, outraged, begins to ask where their gratitude for the boss is. The men ask why they should be grateful, and they only obeyed him out of fear. But now the protagonist is scarier than he is. Staring him down, the protagonist asks if he hurt him. Pointing to the other men who were caged, Endu says that if they sign a contract, he'll protect them from this weakling. The man who was just assaulted asks if he'll take them out of this hell. With a malicious smile, the protagonist says he promises. The player announces to everyone that he'll only take 50% of everything they earn. This makes his other subordinates angry as he charged them 90%. Annoyed, he says it's because they tried to kill him. Trembling with rage, the clown asks if, besides hurting his animal, he also wants to steal his subordinates. His eyes glow purple as he vows to kill all 4 of them. Endu says they're in Japan and asks since when such barbaric behavior has been tolerated. Taking out an ID from his inventory, the clown says it's because he has this. It's a guildmaster ID and a certificate from the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. The protagonist is surprised to learn that he's a guild master. He explains that the Japanese government grants guild leaders the authority to act above the law and conquer dungeons. Andre says that not even the police can lay a hand on him. In Japan, those with power face no consequences. With a grin, Endu asks if that means becoming a guild master would allow him to conduct shady business without consequences. The clown calls the protagonist a foolish man as he grabs a gun and explains that to become a guild master, he has to be at least rank B. Pointing his gun at the protagonist, the guild master says he'll die so he doesn't need to know anything else. The man starts shooting, saying he'll turn him into a sieve. Endu merely stares as the bullets fly toward him. The protagonist uses his ability called Soul Barrier. It's a barrier raised from level 25 using Type E magical soul fragments. While continuing to shoot, the clown curses and praises him at the same time, calling Endu clever. The protagonist says that Russia used nuclear missiles during the ice test and still failed. He asks the guild master if he's never stopped to think about it. After all, there are many players, but none use firearms. Still shooting, the boss asks him not to approach. Suddenly, he receives a huge shock, causing him to drop the weapon. The barrier that was approaching finally reaches him, beginning to push him. Desperately, he forces himself against the barrier, trying to stop it. Still moving toward the man, the protagonist asks him to take a good look. While trying to hold back the barrier, he realizes he's being crushed. He's completely pressed against the wall, causing several cracks. The man starts spitting blood while Endu laughs. The former guild master falls to the ground, powerless, after the protagonist releases his barrier. Looking at the man, Endu says that abilities surpass weapons, and Andre shouldn't think he can defeat him with these toys. The former subordinates start saying that even the boss couldn't do anything against that man. With a smile, the protagonist asks if they want to make a deal with him and promises promises that if they agree, he will even let them get their revenge. They all agree to the contract as long as they can do whatever they want with the scoundrel. Lying on the ground, the master asks how he, a person without a license, could do this, and that the authorities wouldn't stay quiet. Endu says he doesn't care. After all, the man himself told him that power is everything nowadays. Still with his head down, the clown notices some footsteps approaching. When he lifts his head, he realizes that it's all of his subordinates. As the former subordinates beat up their boss, the player thinks about how much money he made today and that they'll give him much more. Looking at the system window, he says it's better to finish the test when people start to panic. He realizes that only a month is left, concluding that this is the perfect moment. At the headquarters of the player association, the rank certification exam is taking place. The protagonist goes to take the exam. He notices 3 people talking behind him. One of them says that if you're a B rank player or higher, you'll have a very high salary in the tens of millions of yen. His friend tells him not to get his hopes up since only 1% of the Japanese population is rank B and only 9 are rank A. They continue discussing while the protagonist just listens. Endo says that 2 weeks have passed since the game became real. The government offered a 100 million yen reward to whoever could end the trial, but as expected, the result was disastrous. That's why it's now mandatory to apply to the player association. If you don't participate and take the tests, you won't receive any rewards for it. While walking to the association, the protagonist thinks that a lot of money is involved and he wants a share, but someone is watching him from above. He realizes he's being observed and tries to find out who it is. Suddenly, an object flies toward him. With great ease, he dodges the attack. The people around start to get shocked, saying the traffic cone fell from the sky. It's Takuya, who calls out to him, saying that he had it good before. He shouts that the protagonist won't escape his debt anytime soon. The protagonist asks if the lone shark came to take the exam too. He says that a weak person who could be defeated with just one hit from the novice fist ability should give up on being a player. Convinced, Takuya says he's not the same anymore and that now he has the strongest class, Spearman. The protagonist starts laughing, saying that this class is only for amateurs who don't know what they're doing. The protagonist says that class can't keep up with the power inflation, and the lone shark asks what class he has. With a wicked look, Endu says his class is novice. The man laughs, saying that's the same as having no class. The player mentally says that his main class is indeed novice, but he doesn't need to mention his subclass. As he raises the traffic sign again, Takuya says he'll get revenge for the other day, and that this is the true power of a spearman. He begins to unleash several attacks for the protagonist. The protagonist just dodges all of them while closing the distance. The man, startled, asks how he can do that. Facing the lone shark, Endu says that he really didn't want trouble before the exam, but he can't do anything when the problem comes to him. Simply moving his arm, he throws the man into the air, causing panic all around. The lone shark screams desperately as he falls to the ground. Everyone looks at him, and the protagonist continues walking, saying it was self-defense. Inside a very luxurious place, the attendant informs him that the registration fee is 8,000 yen, which he thinks is extremely expensive. Sometime later, he's sitting, depressed for losing 8,000 yen, but suddenly someone approaches him. It's a girl who apologizes for the delay. With a smile, she says they'll now begin his rank certification exam. He was facing a large black rock. It emitted a strong purple light. Endo notices that the exam is apparently as they told him and asks a win if he needs to place his hand on it. He begins to extend his hand toward the large rock. As his hand gets close to it, several rays connect the two. He brings his hand even closer while the strong blue light is emitted. When his hand touches the rock, a massive explosion of light occurs, causing panic even in the assistant. There were several rays along with an extremely strong light emanating from the stone. Still startled by what she is seeing, the woman begins to wonder what this is. In another place, the woman, still surprised, calls his name. She says the result is in, and he is equivalent to rank A. Endo receives a document with his classification. A bit nervously, she says he probably knows this, but players can change classes. She begins to explain that he could be a master swordsman, a master mage, or an archbishop. He declines and says that even though he wants to, his class isn't available yet. Confused, the woman asks what class that would be, but the protagonist replies that he doesn't intend to share it. She informs him that to change classes, he will need a special item, and asks if he would like help from the association. Endo just coldly refuses. He asks if that's all she has to say. The woman, a bit nervous, asks if that wouldn't be problematic for him. The player questions her as to why she's asking that. She explains that he has more power than any rank A they've seen, but since he doesn't have a class, he will be downgraded to rank E. The woman informs him that rank E has many restrictions, like not being able to create his own guild, which would be a disadvantage for him. Endo says that the government loves to create useless rules, while mentally he thinks that all he needs to do is turn a subordinate into rank B. He remembers that only one class can clear this game, and he has no intention of changing until then. The protagonist asks if even rank E can receive the 100 million reward for clearing the test. She says yes. The woman says she understands and that his registration will have to be issued as rank E. A little later, he was walking down the street while some people were holding up posters. They were guild members trying to recruit people who had just finished the test. The protagonist, with a smile, notices that people are really putting a lot of effort into this. 2 girls say they are looking for rank D players and ask if he wants to join their guild. Endu informs them that he is rank E. The girls begin to lament for him, saying they understand. The protagonist notices that rank E players are being treated like pests, but he convinces himself that he doesn't care about any of this. Suddenly, his attention is caught by a man in a suit walking through the crowd. The man had an orange aura surrounding his body. His eyes also glowed orange as he stared intently at Endu. As he approaches, the man says it's a pleasure to meet him and asks if his name is Endu Ri. Suddenly, he hands Endu a card, saying that these are his details. It was a card for a guild called Genesis Wings. People were discussing if that was really the strongest guild, Genesis Wings, and if he was the Stinker. The protagonist asks what Stinker means, and the man awkwardly explains that it was his nickname in the game. The player realizes that he is famous and wonders if he should make friends with him. After all, he can make money. He asks Shinji what he wants from him, but their conversation is interrupted by the lone shark, who asks if the Stinker was looking for him. Takuya approaches, saying that even though he's a rank B player, he won't be influenced by bad decisions. The protagonist wonders if this weak guy is really rank B and guesses that he may have threatened the examiner. Shinji asks who he is, and the lone shark, angry, calls in a little girl. Takuya gets enraged and grabs the man by his highest high, threatening him, saying he's strong. However, with a single movement, the man easily twists his arm. He places the lung shark on his knees while complaining of pain. A bit more seriously, Feeder says that with each passing minute they are getting closer to destruction, so he doesn't have time to waste on him. Takua storms off angrily, saying Shinji shouldn't cry and try to recruit him later. The man apologizes to the protagonist for the commotion, but Endu says it's fine as Takua was a nuisance to him as well. The protagonist asks what he wants after all. Someone like him wouldn't have anything to say to a rank E. The man just laughs, calling him humble. Feeder says that the only reason he's rank E is because he refused to change classes. Laughing, the protagonist says that apparently the association is very loose-lipped. A bit awkwardly, the man says that with Japan's end drawing near, they can't afford to let their guard down. Shinji asks the protagonist what he thinks about working with them, offering the same amount they paid for the information. Looking at the check, Endu is shocked to see it was for 10 million yen. He says it's an amount he had some time ago, while internally he screams that he wants the money. The player returns the check, saying he doesn't want to join any guild. Shinji says that strong people really don't settle for less. With that, the stinker makes another proposal, asking if Endu isn't interested in the information they have. He says that his guild is supported by government agencies and even other guilds around the world. Looking at him, the protagonist asks if they could find out who the player was that completed Prophecy Online. Smiling, Shinji says it's impossible after all. No one has completed that game. The protagonist, extremely irritated, says that in that case, he'll have to decline. The man becomes very afraid when he sees his reaction. He says it's fine, handing him a piece of paper, saying that if he changes his mind, he can contact him. As he leaves the place, the man wonders why he gave up so easily. He questions whether he was worried about tarnishing his guild's reputation by insisting too much, but he concludes it wasn't that. Shinji confesses that he was terrified, as if every part of his body was telling him not to get into trouble with such a monster. Causing the stinker to nearly soil his pants, the protagonist pats him on the shoulder. Endu hands him a paper, leaving the man even more confused. He says that if he needs help, he can call him, and depending on the amount, he might accept. Taking the paper, still very nervous, the man thanks him for his kindness. Still disoriented, Shinji wonders who he really is. Later, at the headquarters of the Genesis Wings Guild, someone was walking hurriedly down the hallway. On the top floor, Feeder enters the guild master's office. He formally announces his return to the master. Suddenly, the master turns around, revealing herself to be a woman. She asks how it was to meet the newbie deemed the strongest by the association. Still a little nervous, Shinji says that he is genuinely a monster. Still trembling, he admits that the protagonist was the only player who made him feel fear through a conversation. With a terrifying look, the guild master asks who is stronger between her and Endu. He stammers, hesitating to answer. She says she'll take his silence as an answer while looking at the protagonist's file. Still very nervous, Shinji says he's sorry. Tsukino says he doesn't need to apologize, as his job is to relay all the information without hiding anything. The guild master says that among the 10 transcendent players, she is certainly the lowest ranked, and that it's not surprising that there are people stronger than her. She explains that the 10 transcendent players are the best from the beta test of Prophecy Online, those who receive a cash prize. Tsukino also informs that in a world where a game has become a reality, the appearance of someone powerful disrupts the hierarchy of power. She notes that since Shinji returned alone, it means the negotiation failed. He says that apparently the protagonist isn't interested in the information they possess, let alone the 10 million yen offered. With her arms crossed, she says that if Endu is truly one of the 10 transcendent players, fame and money will come to him in no time. She observes that there's no way for one of the 10 transcendent players to remain a rookie voluntarily. Tsukino says that on the other hand, there are hidden items that are extremely powerful but also come with side effects. She says that in any case, Feeder should continue to assess the man with his own eyes, and if his assessments are correct, he will surely become the strongest in the world. The master says that in all cases, the strongest person in the world could only be one of the 10 transcendent players, whose name is unknown. Nervous, Shinji asks if she is talking about first place. He informs her that even the United States looked for the data on the top 10 players. However, the data for number 1 was corrupted. Tsukino raises the possibility that the United States is lying about the number 1 data, secretly hiding them in their country. Shinji says he also believed the rumors, but after seeing Endu in person. Remembering the protagonist, Feeder says it's very likely that he really is number 1. The master says that for him to be saying this, it means there's a good chance they are right. Looking out the window, she says that Shinji must inform all members that hostile actions against Endu are strictly prohibited. She says that a nuclear bomb, which they don't know when it might explode, must be handled carefully. Still very nervous, he says he will do as instructed. On the other side of the city, in another large building, Endu says that a few weeks have passed and they were looking for places to use as a hideout for their source of income. He was looking at the view when suddenly someone called out to him. His subordinates were positioning the TV and asking for his opinion. Kaki presents him with a suitcase full of money, saying he managed to collect the taxes for the day. The protagonist praises him and asks how the attack group's preparation is going. He says they are easily leveling up in the underground sewers and making 1 million yen a day. Excited, he informs that even the new recruits are making 100,000 yen per day. Extremely happy, the long-haired man says he never imagined making so much money while thanking the protagonist. The player reminds him that he said he would make the money. After all, if they make money, he profits too. He says that the taxes are practically fees for information. Kaki mentally thinks that paying 90% is really a lot, but without the information, he wouldn't even be able to make 10%. Looking at the protagonist, he realizes that this man has very valuable information. The long-haired man asks what they will do about the judgment since there are only 10 days left, and the reward is already at 400 million yen. The protagonist tells him that he will wait a bit longer. Suddenly, Endo's attention is drawn to the TV, which is broadcasting something. It showed the location of the test, informing that if they don't complete it in 10 days, Japan will be destroyed. Another presenter says that just like at the beginning, the situation seems hopeless. His colleague says they have new information. She announces that the Japanese government has stated that they will pay 1 billion yen to whoever manages to complete the test. Looking at the announcement, the player says that if they take too long, foreign guilds might try to intervene. Picking up a piece of clothing, he says that now is the best moment. He gets dressed, saying he'll go out for a bit, while the long-haired man asks if he's going alone. Endu says says of course after all he can't put his source of income in danger. Everyone is fascinated by him. However, the 171 personality takes over and he says it's 1 billion yen, and for that he'll take everything. Kaki snaps back to reality, realizing that it's all about the money. It was already night when he finally arrived at the test location. There were many people in front of the gate that led to the test. The protagonist approached while Shinji noticed his presence. As always, the player was calm as if he were going to a market. Happy, Feeder asked if he really came. Passing by him, Endu said he had no intention of cooperating. However, Shinji said that was a shame as he wanted to make a profitable deal with him. He informed him that he just needed to transport some things for 100 million yen, making the protagonist pay full attention to him. Shinji led him to a space where hundreds of backpacks were. He said he wanted the protagonist to take one of those backpacks to his members inside the test. Curious, Endu asked what was inside them that made them worth 100 million yen. Shinji replied that they were provisions. Opening one of the backpacks, Endu noticed that it was full of supplies. He asked what this was, with Feeder saying they were the guild master's favorites. Shinji explained that they were in the deepest layer of the test, and because of that, they were running low on provisions. With a smile, the protagonist asked what the problem was. After all, with that amount, many people would accept. A little embarrassed, Shinji said that in fact they were in a difficult situation. Shinji informed him that he had asked 39 groups to help, but all of them were completely annihilated. The player began to say that the first 4 layers should only have formalities and wondered if it was different from the game. Still very nervous, the man concluded that he was sure Endu knew something. Shinji said that as far as they knew, they were the same as the game, but most people couldn't reach the 5th layer. Everyone who made it to the 5th layer was waiting for supplies. He also said that the only people who could call the 4th layer a formality were Endu and his guild master. While picking up the backpack, the protagonist asked if they were really that sure on manpower, but either way, he was making money. Looking at Feeder, he asked if he would get a reward if he delivered it quickly. While grabbing his phone, he said he would talk to his superiors. Watching the man talk on his phone, Endu wondered how much money he could make with them. He informed the player that if he delivered it within a day, they would add 50 million more. Suddenly, Shinji heard a noise. It was the protagonist turning quickly while saying that he would be there in an hour. Inside the test, on the 3rd layer, some people were facing a giant insect. The man was trying to withstand the monster's attacks while being pressed to the ground. Still holding onto the creature, he told the woman to run, even if it was alone. She called out to him, pleading for him to come with her. Her husband smiled, looked back, thanked her for everything, and asked her to go. She screamed his name, stretching her arm, trying to reach him. Unexpectedly, the protagonist sliced through the insect, saying that they were in his way. The man fell to the ground in shock as the large monster's pieces crumbled around him. Still in shock, he couldn't understand how he was still alive, while his wife thanked Endu for saving them. But in the blink of an eye, the player was already far away, leaving the two behind, not understanding what had just happened. As the protagonist ran through the cave at an absurd speed, they continued to wonder if he was already gone. He finally reached the 5th layer, stopping his sprint. Endu realized it hadn't even taken an hour and concluded that these 150 million yen would definitely be profitable. But suddenly, he became confused upon noticing something. It was a man asking if he was Endu. Placing the backpack on the ground, the protagonist asked if the man was from the Genesis Wings, to which he confirmed. He said he brought the provisions that Shinji asked him to deliver. The man informed him that the payment had been deposited into his account as soon as he left, since Feeder had assured them that he would deliver it. Opening his bank app, Endu saw that 150 million yen had indeed been transferred to his account. Satisfied, he simply thanked him for the deal. As various players appeared, their leader informed them that they had been waiting for food for a long time. They began to divide the provisions, saying that they were finally saved, while one of them said he would inform the front line. The protagonist said that it seemed horrible, while the leader responded affirmatively. He informed the player that they had already lost many people. Unexpectedly, many people started to run. They shouted that they would be caught. As they neared the camp, they said they were safe now, while the leader asked what had happened. But before they could answer, a loud noise echoed through the cave, causing pain to everyone. They looked ahead, where a large cloud of smoke was emerging. To everyone's surprise, a large swarm of giant insects was heading toward them. The protagonist was preparing to attack when suddenly, a huge flame passed by his side. Completely taken aback, the guild master passed by him, burning all the insects. After destroying them all, she stopped, her blade still surrounded by flames. The insect bodies fell, completely charred. Endu noticed that this was a high-level secret skill, the elemental sword, Hellfire. The woman approached him, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. She thanked Endu for taking on the transport mission. As she sheathed her sword, she introduced herself as the guild master. Hey everyone, did you enjoy this story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys. Endu looks at Tsukino, trying to understand her. Still sheathing her sword, she walks toward him. She casts a severe glare at him, but breaking all the tense atmosphere, Tsukino ends up tripping. She apologizes, saying she hasn't eaten for 2 days. While the other members argue over food, the protagonist remarks that it seems they really are having trouble with supplies. At another moment, both of them are heading toward the tents. Seated at a table, Endu asks the guild master if she's the strongest there, to which she affirms. Still with her mouth full of food, Tsukino says that even though she is the weakest among the top 10, she is still part of the Transcendence. Not quite understanding, he asks who would name themselves something so ridiculous. Embarrassed, the guild master says she didn't name herself, and that all the top 10 players in the game are called that. Confused, the protagonist asks who measure her power. Tsukino explains that the names of the top 10 were revealed after an investigation conducted by US intelligence, except for one, the one at the top of the list, number 1. She explains that they received a reward from the organization and questions whether Enda received anything. Curious, he asks how much she got. Tsukino explains that it can vary depending on the country where you live, and that since she's in Japan, she received 1 million. He recalls that this amount is what left him in that state. The protagonist concludes it would be better to hide the fact that he is number 1, as it might jeopardize his plans. He questions whether this amount isn't too small compared to what you earn after clearing a dungeon. Tsukino admits it does seem small, but thanks to the game, she acquired much more valuable knowledge. But even with this knowledge, she wasn't able to defeat the challenge boss. The protagonist asks if not even someone in the top 10 was enough, and she replies that in the end, they are still human. The woman says that if she had her levels and equipment from the game, she could do it, but in her current state, it would be practically impossible. He places his hand on the table as he stands up. Endu says he has completed his mission and that if she wants more of his services, she can hire him with a good reward. The protagonist begins to leave, deciding that he must defeat the boss as quickly as possible and secure his 1 billion. Suddenly, Tsukino gets up, desperately shouting for him to wait. She asks if Endu could help them defeat the boss. Her subordinates oppose the idea, saying they don't want a guy like him with them in the battle. Irritated, the guild master asks if she didn't prohibit any kind of insult toward Endu. Tsukino says she understands them, but in any case, she doesn't intend to lose more of her friends while remembering them being killed by a giant spider. She also recalls when she attacked the spider with extreme abundance and still couldn't inflict any damage. Her companion screams, saying they couldn't hold on any longer. She orders them to take the wounded and leave the area. One of the soldiers opposes her decision, saying that if they flee, the others will have sacrificed themselves in vain, but she insists that she wants to avoid more deaths. Another guild member steps forward, asking Tsukino to leave it to him and get out of there. But before anything can happen, the man is sliced in half. The guild master is horrified by what she sees. The man's body falls in front of her. She becomes extremely enraged by the sight. With her head lowered, Tsukino admits that if there is even a chance Endu can defeat the boss, she wants to bet on it. Everyone falls silent, visibly uneasy and nervous, unsure of what to say. The guildmaster shouts that they must restore peace to Japan, honoring the sacrifices of all those people. Many of her subordinates are moved by her words. At the exit, Endu says he doesn't want anyone slowing him down. With a smug smile, he states that he can handle the boss on his own. Seeing his confidence, Tsukino admits that he really must be one of the Transcendents. Watching the protagonist leave the cabin, the guildmaster wonders how he plans to fight and decides to witness it during the battle against the boss. She follows him, asking if he hadn't said he'd accept any job as long as the reward was good. Desperately, Tsukino pleads with Endu to join her group to face the monster together. The cunning thief senses a big profit on the horizon. Turning toward her, Endu asks if the guild master isn't eyeing the reward. Tsukino says he can keep the reward as a fee for the inconvenience. With a sly grin, Endu agrees but sets 2 conditions. Each person must pay him 10 million. Half of the payment must be made upfront, and the other half is conditional on not disclosing anything they see during the battle. He also clarifies that he doesn't guarantee their safety, and that they can split the money among whoever survives. To everyone's surprise, Tsukino says that it seems the negotiations are over. Annoyed, the guildmaster orders everyone to prepare to depart. As he watches them, Endu internally concludes that he'll easily secure 1 billion after everyone pays him. Suddenly, they hear a series of buzzing sounds approaching. They look in the direction of the noise, trying to understand what's happening. It turns out to be a swarm of giant insects heading their way. The protagonist remarks that he could deal with them all for a good reward, but Tsukino declines, saying it's unnecessary. She begins summoning her flames, declaring that they are interrupting her meal. The guildmaster unleashes an attack called Infernal Firestorm. Endu mentally notes that it wasn't bad at all. After her attack, Tsukino sheathes her sword once again. She quickly finishes eating her energy bar. With great dignity, the guildmaster turns and calls for the protagonist. He shows his phone, indicating that he's already received the payment. With that, they can now liberate Japan. The group moves toward the boss's chamber. They proceed deeper into the dungeon, defeating all the monsters along the way. One of the players asks Tsukino if Endu isn't a bit too simple. The bald man remarks that given the protagonist's extreme confidence, he imagined Endu would use grand and flashy attacks. Clearly exhausted, Tsukino tells the bald man to pay attention to how he kills the monsters. The man observes that the monsters were killed with a single strike, leaving no visible trauma on their bodies. The guildmaster acknowledges that Endu is indeed very skilled, leaving her subordinate even more puzzled. Mentally, she notices that the protagonist doesn't make unnecessary movements, as if he doesn't even need to exert himself. Still watching him, Tsukino comments that if he lives up to her expectations, the boss will indeed be defeated. After some time, they stand before the boss's door. Staring at the massive gate, Endu remarks that it's been a long time since he was last here. Unexpectedly, the bald man starts complaining about feeling very cold, while the healer tries to assist him. Tsukino walks past them, stating that they need to proceed. Drawing her sword, she declares that they must avenge the sacrifice of their comrades. Preparing to enter, the guildmaster tells everyone to give it their all from the start. They follow her, shouting and brandishing their weapons. Above them, the massive spider looms, while the protagonist calmly steps into the area. This was the boss of the 5th floor, the Scarlet Spider. Suddenly, Tsukino, along with 2 other subordinates, launches an attack on the spider. A massive explosion engulfs the area. Some guild members begin to celebrate, claiming they've finally defeated the boss, but Endu coldly denies it. He states that it's not over yet, while Tsukino looks upward in shock. The monster unleashes a powerful counterattack among them. To everyone's surprise, the boss remains completely unscathed. Shocked, Tsukino starts questioning why their attack didn't work, even though the boss is supposed to be weak against fire, being an insect-type enemy. Apathetically, Endu explains that the monster is still weak to fire, but they simply lack sufficient power. Suddenly, the spider launches a massive attack against the guild master. With great effort, she manages to evade, but her companions aren't as lucky. Tsukino warns everyone to be careful with the webs, as they are sticky and hard to escape from. Another attack comes their way. Unexpectedly, Endu grabs 2 guild members who are nearby. Skillfully, he leaps to save them, holding them securely. He lands on the ground and sets them down. Still on the ground, one of the men apologizes to the protagonist. Looking at him, Endu says there's no need to thank him, as he'll lose 10 million if one of them dies. He coldly adds that if he has to save him again, he'll charge an extra 1 million. Watching the fight, Endu internally concludes that it would be beneficial to let the battle drag on so he can save them more and earn additional money. But he decides that behaving this way might hinder future negotiations. After this thought, he activates his soul eyes. He realizes that to acquire his soul fragment, he needs to deliver the biggest surprise of Tsukino's life. Endu prepares to attack, deciding to make make it as flashy as possible. In an instant, he is already above the monster. The protagonist grabs his dagger, invoking a powerful attack. He strikes, severing one of the monster's legs. The giant spider tries to attack him again. A massive impact shakes the area, cracking the entire floor. Due to the force of the blow, all the guild members, along with their master, shield themselves with their arms. Looking at the large craters, Tsukino is stunned and begins to lose hope, realizing that even Endu couldn't manage it. But surprisingly, the protagonist is holding the monster's leg in his hand. He is using a skill called Soul Strength. Everyone is utterly shocked by his feat. With that, he begins spinning the monster like a beyblade. He hurls the massive spider to the side. Still disoriented, the monster remains on the ground as the protagonist approaches it. Staring at the boss, he recalls that the spider's weak spot is its abdomen. With a single swing of his dagger, he slices through the monster. The attack is so powerful that it creates a brilliant flash of light. One of the guild members shouts in celebration of the protagonist's victory, but Endu asks if they haven't misunderstood something. Unexpectedly, a red mist begins to emanate from the giant spider's body. The mist forms a large cloud above them. They notice their visibility is being affected. Suddenly, the giant spider begins emitting red lightning surrounded by a dark aura. They are shocked to see it has regenerated. Not only that, but it has also grown even larger than before. With a smirk, Endu explains that this is the spider's second form, which is even more ferocious than the first. Terrified by the unfolding events, they question what they can do now, considering they couldn't even handle its first form. While activating his soul thread ability, Endu calls them weaklings. He then starts running circles around the monster. In the blink of an eye, the protagonist appears above the spider. His threads are wrapped tightly around the boss. At that moment, he activates a skill called Soul Incineration Matrix. Tsukino orders everyone to retreat as quickly as possible. Raising his dagger and with a deadly glare, Endu commands the monster to burn. A massive flame engulfs the giant spider's body. Both the bald man and the guild master watch in shock, realizing that his firepower is dozens of times stronger than Tsukino's. However, Endu looks at the monster with a hint of confusion. A massive curtain of flames form in front of him. Everyone was happy, believing it was finally over, but one of them noticed something strange. It was a large mountain of crystals that had formed from the spider's body. They wonder how rare a drop like this could be. The protagonist ordered everyone to leave, but the other players grew angry with him. Suddenly, surprising everyone, the monster's crystallized legs began to tremble. Both Tsukino and Endu immediately understood what was happening. He explained that this was the final form of the Earth's judgment monster, and if he could defeat it, he would finally be able to live peacefully. Everyone present prepared themselves again as something emerged from the monster's body. Like her subordinates, the guild master was both surprised and apprehensive about what was happening. Unexpectedly, some people were attacked by what seemed to be antennae. The spider began destroying everything around it. While dodging the attacks, Tsukino noticed that this strike was much wider and faster. With great difficulty, she managed to avoid another attack that came dangerously close to her body. Nervously, she glanced back, trying to comprehend the situation. Suddenly, Endu approached her, ordering her to lead everyone back to the entrance. Tsukino asked what he was going to do. The protagonist said there was no need to state the obvious. As he continued dodging attacks and closing the distance to the monster, Endu declared that he would finish it off and claim its drops. Watching the scene, Tsukino was astonished, realizing he was effortlessly avoiding the spider's strikes. The protagonist explained that the monster would attack indiscriminately until everyone was gone and told them they were getting in his way. Still closing the gap, Endu admitted to himself that even though he could dodge everything, his main concern was figuring out how to defeat the monster. He struck one of the antennae. Surprisingly, it didn't even leave a scratch. The spider looked at him as if mocking him. When another attack came his way, the protagonist realized that even his goat dagger couldn't pierce it. He leaped, deciding that he needed to create a weak point. At that moment, Endu activated his soul reserve. The soldiers questioned what he was doing, flying so high and leaving himself exposed. With a maniacal grin, Endu began taunting the monster, urging it to attack him. Obliging his request, the spider drove its antennae through him. Everyone was utterly shocked and horrified by the sight. Tsukino screamed, calling out to the protagonist. However, the madman kept smiling. Looking at the spider, the protagonist laughed and said he had finally caught it. Even the monster seemed frightened at this point. Quickly, Endu raised his dagger. He activated his soul barrier ability. Unexpectedly, the protagonist began launching multiple air slashes toward the monster. The strikes targeted the base of its antennae. With precision, he managed to sever the antennae, forcing the monster to release him. Even as he plummeted to the ground, he continued glaring at the spider with a grin. The monster exploded into countless pieces, triggering a massive explosion. He landed on the ground as numerous crystals flew toward him. Opening his system, he decided he needed to recover enough to avoid dying. Suddenly, some artifacts were used on him. High healing, elemental cure, and damage recovery. Surprisingly, Tsukino, accompanied by some of her subordinates, had approached his body to heal him. Endu sat up, thanking them for their help, saying it spared him from having to use his own skills. Looking at his fully healed body, the protagonist remarked that the guild master had excellent healers. Irritated, Tsukino asked if he had taken the attacks on purpose. Standing up, Endu affirmed, "This is the true prophecy online." Once again grinning like a madman, the protagonist stated that taking hits without dying was a basic skill. Both Tsukino and the soldiers were horrified by his words. Still shaken, Tsukino reminded him that they were in the real world now. Endu explained that when it came to combat strategies, everything worked exactly the same, whether in the game or in reality. Her fear of him grew even more, concluding there was undoubtedly something wrong with the protagonist. Suddenly, the system notified him that he had fulfilled the requirements and earned a soul fragment of the swordsman Type D. The system also announced the end of the trial, causing everyone to begin celebrating and praising Endu. The players were ecstatic that Japan was now safe. Endu called for the guild master, saying they needed to discuss rewards before the session concluded. He mentioned that even though it was agreed he would take everything, Tsukino could claim the rewards in his place and send them to him later. Confused, she asked why he wanted her to claim them instead. The protagonist explained that he wanted to give her the credit, reasoning that it would be better than reporting that some unknown rookie defeated the boss. Furthermore, if they reported that a major guild guild had taken down the spider, it would increase the reward for the next boss. While everyone else remained uneasy, Endu decided it would be harder to earn money if the truth came out. Somewhat hesitant, Tsukino asked if this was all about the money. She explained that taking credit for something she didn't feel right. Endu replied that her guild had hired him for the job for 1 billion. The guild master finally gave in, saying she would do as he asked. After Tsukino registered her guild's name, the protagonist felt satisfied that his information was secure. After all, if his details leaked, the guild would effectively be announcing that they took credit for something they didn't do. A helicopter began flying over the area of the trial. The journalist reported that the earthquakes had not stopped since early morning, with their epicenter located at the trial of the Earth. As they flew over a crater, she explained that the area was collapsing, forcing the players to retreat. The entire mountain began to crumble as some people tried to escape. Everyone who was in the boss's room started to be teleported. They were brought back to the surface. The protagonist calmly landed on the ground. The couple he had saved embraced each other, overjoyed to have survived. Ahead of them stood a large and imposing structure. Gazing at it, Tsukino affirmed that it seemed everything was over. On the structure, it was written that the name of the team that completed the trial, Wings of Genesis, would be engraved there. Dozens of reporters began running toward the players, asking which guild had managed to defeat the boss. They pointed at Tsukino and her subordinates, declaring them the members of the subjugation team. Watching the crowd, the guild master realized that the journalists were gathering. She turned and asked Endu if they could really take the credit. At that moment, everyone noticed that he had simply disappeared. The blonde subordinate informed his leader that the protagonist had left a letter. In the letter, the sly guy wrote that if she had any profitable jobs in the future, she could feel free to call on him. The reporters swarmed Tsukino, bombarding her with countless questions while her team tried to block them. The guildmaster reassured the blonde man, saying it was all right. Suddenly, she began preparing to make a speech. With a smile, she announced to the Japanese people something she felt proud to say. With her chest puffed out, she declared that Wings of Genesis had conquered the dungeon. Still seeking more information, the journalists waited eagerly for further details in her speech. Koki and the thin subordinate had gone to look for Endu. He remained clearly satisfied while Tsukino expressed her gratitude to everyone who had participated. All the guild members, including the guild master herself, bowed before the cameras to thank everyone. Even the reporters found this gesture admirable and dubbed them the strongest guild. She raised her head again, smiling. Returning to his hideout, Endu noticed that Tsukino had performed exceptionally well. He mentally acknowledged that he could profit greatly if he were famous, but he would always be pursued by the media. With a sinister look, the protagonist decided he needed to craft a public persona. He told his subordinates he was hungry and ordered them to stop somewhere. News about the end of the trial of the Earth spread quickly. A group of people gathered at a table, watching TV as it reported that Japan was the second country to surpass a trial. The audience watched the broadcast with a certain hostility. In the building where the protagonist's office was located, someone weighed feelings against money. Sitting at his desk, Endu noticed he had received the 1 billion payment. Some of his subordinates debated what the protagonist had said, but quickly gave up, knowing they wouldn't see any of that money. They were crafting some sort of coins, complaining about not even knowing why. One of them asked the reason they were doing this, but another told him to shut up and keep working. After all, the words of scribe Endo were absolute. Suddenly, the protagonist asked if Rumi's guild had been registered. The girl confirmed that it had, and they were already approved. Feeling a bit awkward, Rudy questioned if it was really okay for her to become the leader of the Golden Farm Guild. He explained that only rank B or higher individuals could become guild masters. Smiling, Endu pointed out that someone like him ranked at E couldn't open a guild. The protagonist recalled that after analyzing everyone's stats, he realized his farmers had all reached rank B or higher. Even so, some excelled further than others. He noted that while Rumi might be the least suited to lead, her ability to get along with everyone made her ideal for filling out the guild. Unexpectedly, the long-haired subordinate approached Endu, saying they were already trending online. Ruby and the entire guild were being dubbed a high-ranking guild since all its members were rank B or above. Seeing this, Endu concluded that becoming the scribe had been the best decision. Kuki asked why the protagonist wanted a guild when his strength alone could already make him a fortune. He explained that one of his goals was to pass the trials. Endu further clarified that some trials affected entire countries, others continents, states, or cities, and so on. Only guilds recognized by national governments could accept such missions. Rumi approached him with a tablet presenting a list of easy challenges with high rewards. He dismissed the list and said they would take on the test described on a particular document. Rumi noticed the reward was 5 million and asked if there weren't better paying requests of similar difficulty. Koki approached the thin subordinate, questioning if the protagonist had lost his mind for taking on such a task. But Rumi pointed out that if the mission had caught Endo's attention, there was probably more to it than they realized. With a frightening gaze, he confirmed this and ordered her not to mess up his requests. Terrified, the girl said she understood. Rumi informs him that they have completed the protagonist's previous request and confirms that the reward is 5,040,000 yen. However, Endu doesn't show much excitement and simply tells her she did a good job. He also informs her that he will be in the designated test area in about 30 minutes. An interesting thing to mention here is, remember when you used to be impressed by just 1 million? Well, humility has left the building. While he's talking to her, he gets another call on his second phone. When he picks up, it's Yuji. He's speaking in a hushed tone while standing in front of the massive white location, saying that he's following the protagonist's request to monitor the test site. The problem is that some strange people have arrived at the location and entered. When the protagonist asks how many, Yuji responds that there are about 5 of them, and according to him, none of them noticed his presence. The protagonist takes note of this, deciding to deal with him later. When he hangs up, we see that the contact name he has for Yuji is Moneymaker 2. If you don't get the English slang, it means someone who rakes in cash. After hanging up, the protagonist starts thinking that anyone entering a test site unauthorized probably isn't a decent person. So with that in mind, he decides to conceal his face by creating an item called the Mask of Illusions. Logically, he uses some materials, including the one he obtained from Tsukino, the sole fragment of the Type D swordsman. However, using this, the success rate of of automatic creation is only 0.23%. Instead, he cancels it and opts for manual creation. The problem is that the probability of success is completely uncertain. If he fails, the result will be either psychological or physical damage. The system even goes out of its way to ask if he really wants to go through with this nonsense. But since our protagonist Endu is cunning, he proceeds with full confidence, diving straight into the soul world. As he enters this so-called soul world, his body flips completely upside down, observing a vast library. The system warns him that he must harmonize with his own soul, and that the success rate depends on the integrity of his soul. He soon notices a large number of pieces, like Lego blocks, that he must assemble to harmonize his soul. Since the success rate is below 1%, the difficulty is extremely high, and he only has 60 minutes to complete it. As he continues assembling and shaping the pieces to fit best, he eventually manages to form an almost perfect sphere. Even the system acknowledges that he has harmonized his soul perfectly. So you know what that means, let's go. The probability rate, which was 0.23%, combines with a harmony bonus of plus 99.77%. Thanks to that, he returns to the material world with a 100% success rate, and the item is complete. Back in the real world, he now holds the mask in his hands, the soul blacksmith who successfully completed his creation. As soon as he stores the item in his inventory, he tells his driver to drop him off right there. He steps out onto the street, puts on the mask, and his appearance changes completely. He transforms into a blonde man with blue eyes, dressed in white clothing. Without wasting time, he enters the test site where Yuji saw 5 people go in. As soon as he steps inside, he notices the corpses of slain monsters scattered across the floor. These monsters are dismantled suits of armor, and the scent of something burnt still lingers in the air. From what he sees, it seems like there were no issues with the people who entered before him. He continues advancing to the lower level, where he notices a secret door already open in the middle of a massive bookshelf, proof that someone has already passed through. As he suspected, they were aiming for the secret challenge. Challenges are divided into large and small scales depending on their purpose. Large-scale challenges involve multiple active countries, while small-scale ones can be handled by cities, villages, and guilds. Naturally, small-scale challenges are much easier compared to large-scale ones, but their rewards are significantly lower. However, there are exceptions, those that contain secret areas. These are generated from small-scale tests, but have much higher difficulty levels inside. Even though they are not directly related to the main mission, they often hold rare items. That makes it clear why these people are here. In other words, players with a lot of information will always prioritize these locations. As he descends a staircase, he senses the presence of others. Shortly after, he comes face to face with a group of 5 hooded individuals. One of them, a white-haired man with green eyes, steps forward and asks the protagonist if he's from Gold Farm, saying that they've been expecting him. This surprises the protagonist, but to keep up his disguise, he simply asks what that is. The white-haired man then says he must have been mistaken. However, he adds that from what he has observed, Endu has the skills and abilities needed to clear this secret challenge. But the protagonist immediately cuts him off, saying he has no intention of completing the test they've hidden. According to the man, though, that doesn't matter. He simply states that they have already conquered the challenge anyway. Then he pulls a box from his inventory, the evolution box, and asks if Endu came for it. Of course, the protagonist recognizes that they were indeed faster. However, since the atmosphere is anything but friendly, he grips his sword, keeping it hidden behind his back, and asks what would happen if he wanted to take it. Surprisingly, the white-haired man simply tosses the box to him, saying that they're willing to give it as a token of friendship. In exchange, they want the protagonist to accept a mission. The mission is quite simple: prevent people from completing small-scale test challenges. He could do anything he wanted as long as he stopped players from clearing small-scale tests. Endu carefully considers why they want him to obstruct test completions, but then he stops thinking because he finally understands. He asks aloud if they are, by any chance, a shadow guild. Then he questions if they plan to do the same thing they did in Argentina. Looking back a few weeks ago in Mendoza, Argentina, a simple small-scale test failed and the entire city was completely destroyed. The real issue was what happened 1 week before that. A massive number of companies and businesses in Mendoza suddenly had their stocks sold off in extreme quantities. It was as if someone had foreseen the city's destruction. Everyone blamed a shadow guild, but the protagonist never imagined they would also have operatives in Japan. The white-haired man simply says that he'll leave the reasoning behind his request to the protagonist's imagination. Then he asks whether he will accept or not. Of course, Endu refuses. It's a tempting offer, but if it means destroying an entire city, he won't agree to it. The leader of the Shadow Guild group remarks that it's truly unfortunate. Since Endu rejected the offer, he simply asks for the box back, claiming it belongs to them. However, they say they'll be charging a small interest fee for having loaned him the box, even if just for a moment. Naturally, the protagonist questions what this interest fee is. According to the white-haired man, it's Endu's life. From the moment he heard their request, he had no other choices, either cooperate or die. However, Endu questions if they really think they can defeat him. Even the white-haired man admits that under normal circumstances, it would be impossible, but since they were the ones who cleared the secret test, the protagonist shouldn't underestimate them. Then, they all pull out syringes and inject them into their own necks. With his glowing green eyes fixed on the protagonist, the white-haired man warns him. Before the Shadow Guild, a player's abilities become completely useless. They all throw the syringes to the ground after using them and begin to act in a very strange manner, as if they had been poisoned, their bodies contorting and writhing in pain. However, their leader starts laughing and our protagonist braces himself, already expecting the worst. It seems that these syringes they use are doping items. Additionally, Endu wonders if such a thing truly exists within the trials. Upon closely observing their bodies, he notices no visible changes and realizes that he knows nothing about such items. But after examining the box more carefully, our protagonist finally understands what is happening. However, he decides to toy with them for a while. While he thinks about this, the white-haired man pulls a remote control from his pocket and activates it, causing the box in our protagonist's hands to explode completely. All of them start laughing, commenting on how easy it is to deceive players since they all fall into such simple traps. Because he pretends to want to fight as if inside the game, players follow along and challenge him in the same way. Then he draws attention to the their bodies and retrieves a small box. But he says this is the last attempt, as he hasn't managed to find anyone to complete his request so far. From the middle of the smoke, the protagonist nonchalantly says that he might not fulfill their request, but he will take a good look and decide what to do with their items. This revelation shocks everyone, as it becomes clear that the explosion never hit him. Only the box was affected, and by the time they desperately look around, it's already too late. Our protagonist swiftly takes them all down, one by one, with rapid and precise attacks. Logically, they try to fight back. The leader of this small shadow guild group attempts to launch a fire spell at our protagonist, but ends up hitting all his allies instead. When they try to complain, calling out to him as Ridge-san, he simply tells them to hurry up and die, intending to burn them along with Endu. However, Endu disappears within the flames and reappears behind the man, now without his disguise. He then sarcastically asks if Ridge really committed friendly fire just to hit him, though as they can see, it was a complete failure. Seizing the distraction, Endu uses the soul restraints, binding Ridge in multiple chains. The white-haired man is visibly furious, demanding to know how our protagonist can move after taking an explosion to the chest. Endu merely asks if he truly believed that of all people, he wouldn't recognize the true weight of an evolution box. He explains that he had realized from the beginning that Ridge had stuffed the box full of explosives. Naturally, just like the white-haired man, we're also wondering why Endu did nothing if he knew in advance. The answer is simple, isn't it? The explosion meant nothing to him. In fact, Ridge has severely underestimated high-level players if he thought such a trick would cause him any harm. However, as for the cost of his damage and torn clothes, he would make sure to settle that later. As he finishes speaking, he calls Rumi and tells Ridge that if he hands over everything in his wallet, you will forgive him. The man panics, asking if he is calling the police, but Endu simply denies it. This is far more important than a mere arrest. Rumi answers from her office while organizing some paperwork and asks if our protagonist has already completed his task. Without wasting words, he instructs her to investigate any locations in Japan where large-scale stock sales have been occurring, as they are likely being targeted by the Shadow Guild. That area must be protected. She confirms her understanding, and our protagonist hangs up while Ridge, still tied up, begins to question whether Endu is trying to act like some kind of hero of justice. Even our protagonist finds this amusing, asking Ridge what he's talking about. He then explains that if a Shadow Guild is attempting to manipulate the market so that all shares are being sold off rapidly, it means that right now, those stocks are incredibly cheap. If he buys them all and then completes the trial, he stands to make an enormous profit. This revelation leaves Ridge completely horrified, realizing that Endu truly intends to go against the Shadow Guild's plans head-on. But for Endu, money is all that matters. He doesn't mind making them his enemies. Moreover, he intends to make them cooperate with him. The injured individuals on the ground, still suffering from the beatings and burns they received, wonder why he's including them. But Endu simply asks Rumi over the phone if the preparations for the re-education treatment are ready. As she asks whether he plans to use a recovery ability, he opens the box and examines its contents. While he does, she mentions that she believes he can use the items now, though she isn't sure if they will actually work. As she talks about experimenting with different methods, Endu remarks that he has found the perfect test subjects and will send them to her later. Meanwhile, he uses the evolution box to upgrade the Type F Magic Soul Fragment into a Type E Magic Soul Fragment. We then cut directly to the front of the Modern Art Museum. Naturally, he questions whether this is truly the location the Shadow Guild is targeting, and Rumi confirms it, saying that Ridge and the others were very cooperative in the investigation. In the background, we see the entire group tied up by their feet, being as cooperative as possible. Endo, disguised with a mask of illusions, walks through the crowd while Rumi, concerned for his safety, asks if he's really okay being in public like this, given that they don't even know how many enemies are around. He assures her that it's not a problem and instructs her to focus on monitoring the stock prices, as that is far more important. She confirms, and after he hangs up, we see a social media post from a man looking for a team to help clear the challenge. There would be no rewards. This was purely to aid the city in its current situation. The meeting point is right in front of the location. At the site, the man who made the post stands on an elevated platform, calling for those interested in joining the team. Soon, they will be setting off, and he asks them to gather in front of him. This man is Takeza, a leader who desires to protect everyone. Among the crowd watching him speak, we see a blonde man, our disguised protagonist, commenting on how this is quite the gathering. There must be at least 100 people here. He makes this observation with that familiar smile, the one that says he knows he's about to make a fortune by the end of this. The man in the center expresses his deep appreciation, saying he is touched to see so many people coming together to protect the city without expecting any reward. He thanks them from the bottom of his heart. Of course, our protagonist finds it hard to believe that so many people would willingly join such a challenge without any compensation. But with this many people, it's easy. All he has to do is identify the spy before the challenge even begins. Takeza warns everyone to stay alert and to call for help as loudly as possible if they encounter a particularly strong enemy. The special forces will assist them. At the very least, Endu appreciates the lack of strategy. It means he can act freely without worrying about being watched. Either way, he's already seen everything he needed. Now he just has to decide whether to let his guard down and flip the game in his favor. At this location, out of the 107 players participating in the test, the number of infiltrated Shadow Guild members is exactly 106, excluding only one ordinary person, himself. As everyone enters, Takeza warns them to proceed with caution. In the middle of the crowd, our protagonist, using the illusion mask that looks more like glasses, knows he's being watched. If you pay close attention, you can clearly see a person staring at him within the crowd. Moving forward into the test, which is quite beautiful due to its clean appearance, a white space with several statues, even our protagonist notices that they seem quite expensive. But while he observes these statues, some people suddenly surround him in a suspicious manner. Since he already knew they were all from the Dark Guild, he wasn't surprised when they grabbed spray cans, shook them, and then, all at once, ignited a massive flame against him. The problem for them is that our protagonist simply leaps away to dodge the flames while drawing his sword, and you already know what comes next. Sequence of hits and strikes. Within moments, everyone is defeated. Adding to his swagger, he taunts them, telling them to bring someone stronger next time, calling them undisciplined dogs. In the midst of this fight, someone suddenly starts running towards them, shouting and asking what's happening. It's a desperate Takeisa. Our protagonist coldly responds that they attacked him, so he simply retaliated. Takeisa says that this is truly terrible and asks if he's okay, but in the middle of his run, he suddenly pulls out a knife and tries to stab our protagonist. But to add even more flair to the moment, our protagonist simply catches the knife with his fingers. Even Takeisa himself starts questioning why he couldn't get closer. Could this be the name of comfort our protagonist holds? Realizing he wouldn't succeed in his attack, Takeisa simply jumps back, escaping our protagonist's reach, leaving his knife behind. Our protagonist, gripping it, effortlessly crushes the blade, separating the handle from the blade. He then mocks that the knife isn't even a proper in-game weapon and accuses them of severely underestimating him. He also states that they no longer need to pretend, as he already knows they are all lackeys of the Dark Guild. Takeisa's demeanor completely changes in front of Endo, revealing a malicious grin. He declares that since our protagonist knows too much, they no longer need to use dirty tricks. The people around them naturally start questioning what he means, as they were supposedly called to protect this place by an environmental protection group, not the Dark Guild as the protagonist is claiming. Takeisa confirms that they are indeed an environmental protection group, but one controlled by the Dark Guild. He wonders if he had forgotten to mention that to them. Regardless, he then directly asks our protagonist if he would like to join them. His job isn't to kill the protagonist, but rather to protect this test. If they can avoid a fight, it will be better for both of them. If he agrees to help, Takeisa offers him 50,000 yen per day. No, he rethinks it and offers 100,000 yen per day. Not a bad deal. However, upon hearing this, the members of his group become furious, complaining that their pay is only 30,000 yen and calling the offer unfair. Our protagonist, however, is more focused on how even low-ranking members of the Dark Guild receive around 30,000 yen. That's a lot. If it were his old self, he might have considered it, but the current him simply refuses out loud. Since he rejected the offer, Takeisa states that they will proceed with the original plan. He shouts that the first person to take down our protagonist and eliminate him will be considered the best player in the test and will personally receive a 100,000 yen extra reward. He orders everyone to work together and finish him off. The problem for them is that he already expected this outcome, as they charge at him in a completely unorganized and random manner. Our protagonist swiftly moves through them, knocking each one unconscious with precise strikes to the neck or face, using only his bare hands. Their leader, Takeisa, attempts to catch our protagonist off guard from behind, yelling that he shouldn't underestimate a judo graduate. However, Takeisa ends up getting a knee to the face from our protagonist. Bad joke? Hey, I tried. Where'd your like? Did you hit the button yet? After delivering a knee strike to Takeisa's face, our protagonist jumps up and places his hand on his head, using soul imprisonment, instantly incapacitating the leader. He then slaps the back of Takeisa's neck, declaring that he's finished. Looking at the two remaining people, he considers that they are probably just scared and unaware of the Dark Guild's involvement. Since they are not guilty, there's no reason to attack them. However, he wonders if he could use them in a more cost-effective way by recruiting them later if possible. Setting that aside, he calls Rumi and informs her that he has accepted a gift from the Dark Guild. He states that he has made a large collection and has just added around 100 candidates to the money farming group. Rumi, understanding, asks if he really plans to put 100 people through the same re-education process that Ridge and the others underwent. However, she warns that the instructors won't be able to handle that many. The protagonist dismisses this, saying that they will be regular recruits and that only their leader requires re-education. In the middle of the conversation, a sword imbued with black lightning is suddenly thrown toward our protagonist. He barely manages to dodge it. When it strikes the ground, it creates a shockwave reminiscent of the Conqueror's haki from One Piece. Lightning everywhere, people being blown away. The protagonist leaps, but with style, holding his phone like someone who just financed an iPhone in 12 installments on a credit card. Upon landing, he looks up and says that this person has finally decided to show up. A man wearing a bizarre mask asks since when he knew. Our protagonist replies that he has known from the beginning. All the ones who fell so quickly were merely bait. It was obvious. Furthermore, out of everyone, this masked man has a completely different aura. The protagonist states that although tried to hide it, that doesn't work on him. The masked man pauses, impressed that our protagonist noticed so much. He admits that it's no wonder he couldn't find an opening against him. He then suddenly leaps forward, drawing two lightsabers out of nowhere, shouting to see if the protagonist can withstand this attack. And just like that, the fight begins. One attacks, the other defends. Then the protagonist counters, and the masked man blocks. The masked man comments that he didn't expect the protagonist to keep up with him using only a simple dagger, noting that he has become much stronger since their time in the game. Our protagonist, finding that remark strange, immediately lunges forward, slashing straight at the mask, cutting it in half. As the mask falls to the ground, our protagonist realizes it's him. For the first time, he has encountered someone he knew from his professional gaming days, Yudo. Yudo, smiling, says he's happy to see our protagonist, calling him King, his old nickname from the game. However, he admits that he never expected to meet him like this, as he now has to kill him. With that, he assumes a powerful stance, almost like a Jedi, preparing to attack with both swords. Endu looks at him as he removes his mask and asks if he really thinks he can do that. Yudo doesn't even bother responding to the provocation, simply positioning both swords and activating his dual sword skill. Shouting at our protagonist while surrounding himself with a purple aura, he has no choice but to be faster than him. At the start, he dashes forward like a lightning past our protagonist, making a cut on his shoulder and continuing with multiple attacks without the protagonist even managing to react. However, amidst this barrage of attacks he was receiving, he remarks that Yudo is indeed impressively fast, but unfortunately for him, he can activate the Eye of Souls, enhancing his vision. He stares at Yudo. At his level, the acceleration should be running out soon. We also see Yudo's stats, level 38, with the main class being Dual Blade Fighter, 1050 HP, 145 Strength, 154 Intelligence, 215 Dexterity, and 253 Agility. It's incredibly fast, like he aimed for the flash but hit Shadow instead. In the middle of these consecutive attacks, attacks, Yudo tries to catch our protagonist off guard by attacking him directly from behind. But to his surprise, Endu simply blocks with one arm, positioning the blade behind him, then turns around and lands a kick to his face, launching him against a wall that shatters from the impact. The poor guy even coughs up some red liquid. Our protagonist remarks that his speed is truly impressive, but his swords lack the power to strike him. And as always, when he defeats someone, he uses soul imprisonment. Yudo is utterly confused, unable to move, saying that this shouldn't be possible unless there was a significant level gap between them. However, the protagonist confirms that not only is there a gap, but there is an abyss of difference in their levels. This makes Yudo question once again how such a thing is possible, with Endu simply responding that he is just a very talented player. Then, with a heartless tone, the protagonist asks why Yudo doesn't leave the Dark Guild and join him instead, where he could truly make a fortune. With his skills, he could definitely earn a great deal of money. But unexpectedly, Yudo replies that it's impossible. When the protagonist asks why, he says he cannot answer. Thinking that Yudo is just making excuses, the protagonist tightens the soul imprisonment, making him feel immense pain. That's when Yudo shouts that it's not that he doesn't want to answer, it's that he literally cannot. When he attempts to speak, he stops as soon as he tries to mention a certain person and what they would do. The protagonist immediately notices this and asks about that person, also questioning him about Hisashi, wondering if for some reason he was taken hostage. Even Yudo is impressed by the protagonist's perception. Realizing that there's far more to this story than he initially thought, he releases Yudo, who collapses to the ground like a sack of potatoes, and once again reflects on the past, Prophecy Online, a game so ruthless that it drove away anyone who attempted to play. While the low difficulty areas were manageable and could be maintained, the high difficulty zones were nearly impossible and devoid of any challengers. In this unforgiving game, finding companions who shared the same conviction was a rarity, but he found people like Yuto and his younger brother Hisashi. However, as time passed, our protagonist started defeating bosses alone. While at first the three of them took on bosses together, the level gap eventually separated them. Due to the difference, they could no longer adventure together but still kept in touch through the in-game chat. Returning to the present, inside the test, the protagonist is now thinking about how he lost contact with Hisashi. Of all places to reunite with Yuto, it had to be here, while he was working for the Dark Guild. But getting to the point, Endu asks Yudo where Hisashi is, but even Yudo doesn't know. The people who imprisoned Hisashi never told him his location. Suddenly, Yudo has a realization and nearly shouts, asking if the subclass the protagonist chose in real life was Soul Blacksmith. He asks if he could use his ability to find his brother. The protagonist confirms that such an ability does exist, but unfortunately, the world isn't 100% like the game. This is reality, and in this reality, he is only motivated by money. Without even hesitating, Yudo offers everything he has in his wallet, begging the protagonist to save his brother. Since our protagonist never refuses money, he asks Yudo if he has anything that belonged to his brother. Yudo confirms and hands him a blue cap. The moment the protagonist takes it, he initiates the soul search, targeting Yudo's brother, Hisashi Miita. The problem is that according to the system, the user he was searching for could not be located, because he was already dead. Both of them question if Hisashi had really been killed, and another system message appears, revealing that the one who finished him off was Raven. Yudo begins cursing, furious that this bastard killed his brother. The protagonist asks if he knows this man, and Yudo confirms, stating that it was Raven who held his brother hostage all this time and forced him to work in order to keep Hisashi alive. But now he has only one certainty. He will kill Raven, no matter what it takes or what happens. Since he can't do it alone, he asks the protagonist how much he wants. If necessary, he is willing to work his entire life, earning as much money as needed to get the protagonist's help in taking down Raven. But the protagonist simply states that he is genuinely a bit saddened by Hisashi's death, as he was like a younger brother to him as well. This gives Yuto a sliver of hope, thinking that the protagonist will help him. However, Endu quickly tells him not to jump to conclusions, as this is the perfect time to make money with the highest possible profit. He has no time to waste on unnecessary fights that won't bring any revenue. Yuto tries to plead with him to wait, but the protagonist prefers to check his phone as he received messages from Tsukino. She asks if he really went to fight against the Dark Guild at the Modern Art Museum, questioning if he truly accepted the mission. The protagonist wonders where she heard that from and asks what mission she is talking about. She explains that recently the government commissioned a mission to eradicate the Dark Guild's base with a reward of approximately 1 billion yen. Logically, the protagonist presses for confirmation, questioning if such a mission really exists and asking where she heard about this request. She confirms that it was an unofficial request made to Wings of Genesis, asking him to keep it confidential. Since it's classified, he even asks if she is sure she can share this, but she assures him that she's only telling him. She also reveals that, according to research, the Dark Guild's headquarters has over 10 billion yen in assets from various companies. If he destroys the base and reports that nothing was there, the government will likely turn a blind eye. Hearing about such an enormous amount of money for simply cleaning up and combining business with pleasure, he directly asks Yudo if Raven is at the Dark Guild's main headquarters. Yuto informs him that Raven is only the leader of the Dark Guild's Japanese branch, and he rarely leaves the main base. Upon hearing this, the protagonist flashes a mischievous smile and, giving Yuto a thumbs up, tells him that he has changed his mind. He will help him with his revenge. Moving slightly into the future, Tsukino informs our protagonist that the police have identified the base of the Dark Guild and that the local police were heading to the location to investigate. He asks if it is the one on the 12th floor of a building, and naturally, she questions how he already knew since she received this information firsthand from the government itself. However, he simply states that he has been conducting his own investigation and informs her that he is heading there at that very moment. Since Tsukino is not naive, she directly asks our protagonist if he is nearby and if he could assist with the investigation, as the police would not be able to handle the situation if the Dark Guild resisted. Upon hearing this, the protagonist asks what the reward would be, offering 100 million yen for each Dark Guild member he captures and another 100 million for each police officer he protects, asking what she thinks of the deal. Naturally, she feels cornered and informs him that she will negotiate with the government, enrollment, but if they refuse, the Wings of Genesis Guild will cover the costs and personally pay him. The protagonist states that the deal is done and informs Yudo. From what he has heard, the police have also identified the Dark Guild's base in this region. Naturally, Yudo gets excited since this means they can catch them faster. However, the protagonist denies it, explaining that as far as the Dark Guild is concerned, Yudo is still completely dead, and he prefers to keep his association with him hidden, as it makes it easier to act. Since Yudo understands what he means, he simply says he will wait for him and tells him to be careful because if the Dark Guild has noticed the police movement, the location will be completely filled with traps. After separating, the protagonist heads toward a large crowd gathered around a police yellow tape barrier. As he tries to enter, a man stops him, informing him that he cannot enter the area due to a gas leak and the police have restricted access. However, knowing that the man is just a government officer, the protagonist states that he was sent by Wings of Genesis to assist in the investigation, asking if the officer was not yet aware of this information. Not wanting to risk his job, the man apologizes and tells the protagonist to follow him, showing him the way. Upon being led inside, the protagonist approaches a table where several people are gathered, listening to what seems to be the operation leader. When the protagonist arrives, everyone celebrates the arrival of reinforcements from the auxiliary guild, Genesis. However, the leader does not seem to like this idea and questions why they would need reinforcements. He asks what good it would do to have a player who does not even know the regulations or what to do, stating that the investigation is in their hands and they do not need the protagonist's help. He informs him that orders from above made it clear that the officials should act alone and that he should not get involved unless he wants to receive a major reprimand, while he orders the troops to move forward. Endo remains behind, listening to a man's warning without advancing, stating that he does not recommend them proceeding. However, since they ignore him, he simply waits. As expected, shortly after, a massive explosion occurs on one of the floors, causing large chunks of debris to fall towards the team below, including the protagonist. Everyone is shocked by the amount of rubble, but the quick-witted protagonist uses his soul threads to create a web-like structure that holds all the falling debris, preventing it from hitting anyone. It also forms a nearly real web around the building as a guarantee to prevent them from escaping and to hold the structure in case they decide to detonate the supporting base. The protagonist begins to complain about having to rescue the men who went up earlier despite his prior warnings. He uses the threads to ascend easily. As soon as he enters, he notices all the officers who had gone in earlier lying on the floor, including their leader. As expected, the room is empty, just a trap. Seeing that none of them have serious injuries, he remembers that he earns about 100 million yen per person and states that none of them should die yet. Using his threads, he wraps them up like cocoons and then descends like Spider-Man, carrying all of them together. With this stunt alone, he has already earned about 700 million yen, having saved 7 people. If he counts those who nearly died from the debris, his total reaches 1.2 billion yen. After rescuing these people, he simply begins to leave, saying that he has already done his part, leaving the others behind who wonder if this is really how a player operates. Even the previously skeptical leader ends up bowing and thanking him for saving his life. Still with his hands in his pockets, the protagonist approaches Yuto and states that he has finished what he came to do. Yuto asks how the police ambush went, but the protagonist simply informs him that they have already fled, as the police's actions are completely exposed. He asks if Yuto has any clues about another base where Raven might be hiding. However, Yuto says that the only one he knew of was the one they just raided, and he discarded everything the Dark Guild had given him, including his phone, on the same day he met the protagonist. He suggests that if they return to the Modern Art Museum, they might find some clues on the phone. Sensibly, the protagonist rejects this idea, as going there would likely expose Yuto's location. Additionally, due to the situation, he has given up on the relocation goal, explaining that with the police investigating them, securing a proper office or warehouse would be difficult. Moreover, security cameras could reveal their positions or appearances. Yuto begins thinking of a perfect location based on these requirements. A place without surveillance cameras, easy to defend, and unlikely to draw attention despite occasional gatherings. In this case, a rarely visited dungeon with poor resources could be the perfect hiding spot. The protagonist confirms this idea, stating that his guild has already been investigating such locations. Yuto is even impressed that the protagonist has a guild, wondering why it is named Golden Farm. The protagonist explains that his guild is what it is, and regardless, Yuto is now being forced to join it. Yuto realizes that he has no choice but to work hard to sustain himself, and confused, asks if he really has no say in the matter. Putting that aside, he asks why the protagonist does not call his guild for help in combat. The protagonist explains that they have other jobs and are occupied with their activities. He could call them at any time, but doing so would reduce his own profits. While speaking, the protagonist receives a large message, which is report number 37. It states that in the last month, around 36 dungeons across the country have shown no activity, 7 of which are in the capital region. Among them, the only closed dungeon with fixed respawn points is the Slaughter Fortress in the mountains of Shiba Province. Since there is no official address, they have sent a location link on the mapping system. Reflecting on the message, the protagonist thinks about Slaughter Fortress and considers that being outside the mountains, if they have managed to eliminate enemy spawn points, it truly is a highly useful base. As a low-level dungeon with poor rewards, it has no visitors due to these factors, making it the perfect hiding place. Setting his thought aside for now, he directly asks Yuto if he prepared what he had requested. Yuto confirms, then asks if the protagonist has prepared the other thing he requested. The protagonist also confirms. Meanwhile, Yuto presents the protagonist with a brand new car, stating that it can easily enter the mountains. Without hesitation, the protagonist drives as fast as possible. As they both get into the car, Yuto jokes that if they receive any speeding tickets, they should not worry, as the protagonist himself will pay for them. With a smirk, the protagonist assures him of this. Yuto then demonstrates that a car can indeed fly without wings, while the protagonist declares that this time, they will capture their targets before they even think about escaping. As they follow the GPS route, our buddy Yuto ended up arriving at a location where the road didn't lead to the destination anymore. He asked if it was time, but the protagonist simply told him to leave that for him to handle and that he should just focus on driving safely. Yudo pounded his chest and said to leave it to him. Better to trust him than his father, since he had a gold-tier driver's license. And as soon as he finished that sentence, that psychopath started accelerating straight toward the edge of the road, which looked like a cliff, and took a leap, breaking through the barrier meant to prevent people from going off the road. Plunging down while still accelerating toward the base, the protagonist even wondered if this was actually serious, while the lunatic kept laughing, finding it incredibly fun. At one point, not content with just jumping off the road, he went ahead and leaped straight off the literal cliff, knocking down some rocks along with the car. In the middle of the free fall, our protagonist used his skills to maintain the car's center of gravity at the bottom, ensuring it landed wheels down, while Yudo kept saying that this was real excitement, and in that, he wasn't wrong. The moment they hit the ground, even taking out a tree that had been peacefully standing there, Yudo celebrated the fact that they had landed on all four wheels. Meanwhile, our protagonist asked if this was, by any chance, the safe driving he had been talking about, but Yudo explained that he thought it would be harder for enemies to track them if he simply decided to descend the cliff with the car instead of following the road. He argued that since the car was a high-performance one, they should take full advantage of its potential instead of just using it in a normal way. After they got out of the car and stood looking at the dungeon, the protagonist pulled a huge suitcase from the trunk and then pointed out that Yudo had forgotten his luggage. Yudo got irritated, asking why, first, he had to be the driver and now had to be the luggage carrier. More importantly, he questioned why the suitcase was so damn heavy, demanding to know what the hell was inside. The protagonist casually responded that it was weapons, stating that since it was just the two of them against an entire group, they needed to be heavily armed to deal with the situation. He then asked if Yudo agreed. There was no way to deny it, just like you can't keep holding back on giving this like. Almost at the fortress, the protagonist and Yudo observed the gate, where a few clearly shady and well-prepared individuals were standing guard. One of them complained about how boring it was and asked if there was any chance a girl might show up. But another immediately crushed his excitement, saying that no one came to this godforsaken place. At least though, they could have some fun dealing with whatever idiot tried to get inside. And of course, the real fun only started after they got to kill those players. Endo remarked that this place was truly a den of scum, while Yudo noted that those shady-looking men were at the last base they had visited. The protagonist celebrated the fact that their guess had been completely right, and even though he wanted to attack that bunch of idiots right then and there, he still made a point to ask Yuto about their level of security. But our dear employee simply told the protagonist that since the last base had been an office, they didn't need much security there. However, this one was completely different. Not only had they destroyed the other bridges leading to the entrance, but they also seemed to have created a barrier using abilities on the walls. That meant the only way in had to be through the gate those men were guarding, and they were smart to concentrate all their offensive power on a narrow entry point. In other words, as long as they controlled the gate, they could block any intruder from entering. Yudo added that they really couldn't afford to be careless, since besides the 5 men guarding the gate, there were likely more people hidden inside waiting for an attack or invasion. By his count, at least 30 people had left the last base and come to this one. When the protagonist asked if they were strong, Yudo denied it, saying they were just subordinates and wouldn't be much of a problem. However, from what he had heard, 3 people inside were on the same level as him: Jack, Croaky, and Raven. He warned that mid-tier players wouldn't stand a chance against these 3. Endo was even impressed to hear that there were 3 people on the same level or higher than their buddy, remarking that this invasion was definitely going to be worth it. Moreover, our third employee was impressed by the protagonist's calmness and confidence, even in a situation like this, saying that this was exactly why he was so reliable. The protagonist warned that while they were fighting those 3 stronger opponents, they couldn't let a single subordinate escape since there was a bounty on each of them. The best thing they could do was completely lock down the base. Yudo was a little taken aback that all of this was just for money, but the protagonist asked if there was any other reason for him to be doing this. If they were talking about the total reward, they could take the risk and move forward directly. But before that, he logically asked if Raven was quick to escape. The moment Yudo remembered why they were there, he got pissed, saying that none of them were getting away, and they would begin a full-scale lockdown plan. Since that was the case, the protagonist said that for a long-term blockade, he would ask Genesis for help, but if they contacted Tsukino, a spy could leak the information. The employee simply asked if they needed to trap the members of the Dark Guild there until the Genesis Guild arrived to stop them, and he was absolutely right. Even so, he asked if just the 2 of them could handle it, and the protagonist confirmed they were more than enough. Without wasting any time, the protagonist sent a message to Tsukino, stating that they had found the enemy base and that she should send enough capable members to secure the location as soon as possible. However, since there could be spies in her guild, she should only call people she trusted completely. After sending the message, he informed Yuto that they should now head to the gate, take down the guards, and establish a total blockade. As soon as Yuto said he understood the plan, the protagonist started a countdown from 5 to 1. The moment he finished, both of them got ready to charge full speed at the guards. Our dual-bladed buddy activated his acceleration skill, instantly surrounding himself with purple lightning and shooting toward them like a bolt of lightning, cutting them all down the moment he reached them, not even giving them a chance to react, not hesitating, not sparing them, and certainly showing no mercy as he slaughtered them all. The protagonist even congratulated him, noting that despite carrying such a heavy load, he was still so fast. But Yudo simply said that something like that wouldn't slow him down. Now, it was time for them to prepare for the real battle ahead. The protagonist then started spinning and throwing a bunch of suspicious-looking white spheres across the ground, scattering them all over the area in front of the fortress. He then declared that everything was ready, and now they just had to wait for the enemies to come out. After he said that, it became clear that a camera had been watching their every move. Moments later, a large group of people began pouring out from inside, shouting orders to kill the invaders. The protagonist, however, just grinned and remarked that 1,000,000 yen had just thrown itself at them, announcing that this was the perfect time to rake in some cash. As those idiots rushed toward our guys, the protagonist simply declared that the money explosion was about to begin. All those white spheres started exploding in sequence, completely defeating the men who were totally unprepared for the attack. The 2 of them just watched the explosion, and after the enemies fell to the ground stiff, our protagonist remarked that, as expected, it was much better to take them all down at once. Those who were still standing after the explosion, having avoided direct hits, couldn't see anything due to the enormous amount of smoke left behind. Even though they were alerting each other about an imminent attack, it was already too late. Our protagonist had already dashed past them, landing a crushing blow while sarcastically questioning whether just being alert was really the best they could do. The protagonist celebrated the fact that they had already taken down at least 100 people, each worth about 1,000,000 yen, meaning that in the end, he would probably make more money than from a simple weak test. On the other side, Yudo declared that he was almost done with his opponents as well, dealing powerful, unrelenting blows to them. So fast, they couldn't even try to react. While fighting, Yudo noticed a man about to attack the protagonist from behind. He shouted for him to be careful, but it was apparently too late. Too late for the guy who simply forgot to bring his head along with his body as Yudo dashed past him at Deadpool versus Wolverine speeds. Despite that, Yudo already knew the protagonist had noticed the attacker, but couldn't reveal his tricks in front of the camera watching them. Additionally, he told Yuto not to call him by his name, since even though there didn't seem to be a microphone on the camera, someone could still read his lips. In the end, it seemed like they had already provoked the enemies enough for now. The protagonist glared at the camera, saying it was in the way, so he might as well break it. He prepared to slash at it, cutting off the vision of those monitoring them. His strike not only destroyed the camera, but also took a chunk out of the wall. In a room filled with several executives of the Dark Guild, they had been watching through the camera when Raven announced that their enemies were finally coming. A woman who seemed to be a secretary informed them that one of the attackers was the traitor known as Yudo Maeda, while the other's identity was completely unknown. Even after cross-referencing with national databases, they couldn't find anything about him. Raven acknowledged the situation, stating that if the little rat Yudo was betraying them, he must have finally discovered his little brother's death. Don't call our guy Yudo a rat. He may be a piece of crap, but he's not a small piece of crap. In the end, Raven said that both brothers were nothing more than a nuisance to him. He recalled a past event. Inside the Dark Guild's building, Raven and Hisashi had a conversation. Our guy expressed doubts about his next mission, but Raven simply told him it should be an easy job. It wasn't about the difficulty, it was about the reason for the kill. The order came from someone vengeful and nothing more. There was no real reason behind it. Within the organization, Hisashi had been given the codename Rat, but as Raven listened to his complaints, he simply asked why that information should even matter, as all he needed to do was kill and receive the reward. Even as Hisashi argued that they were trying to destroy Genesis, Raven pressed him, saying that he must have something interesting to share. Hisashi then admitted that his assassination target was an old gaming friend from the past, a healer, completely moderate, someone who would never make enemies. Since healers were valuable targets, the only reason to kill him would be to cripple Genesis. If he abandoned the organization given his influence, they wouldn't be able to let him go. Raven then questioned what kind of reward they would get for this, since even the Dark Guild didn't have time to waste on things like this. Hisashi explained that currently the greatest test completion force in Japan was concentrated within Genesis. In other words, if they destroyed wings of Genesis, they could easily stop most of the test completions. The Dark Guild in turn could profit from these failed tests. Raven praised Hisashi's intelligence but said he was wrong about one thing. If they wanted to do this, it would be much easier to simply destroy the entire country. As long as Genesis existed, it was possible for them. If another national level test appeared, they wouldn't be able to do anything against it. They would simply be erased from history. And that was none of Hisashi's concern, as his life would end right there. While they spoke, Raven used his abilities to form a shadow rope that wrapped around Hisashi's foot. With the power of shadow binding, he imprisoned him. Even while restrained, Hisashi said that Raven could kill him. But if he did, Yudo would finally be free. Yudo had only been kept as a hostage to control Hisashi's actions, since Raven couldn't control him using shadow powers. Surprisingly, Raven responded that Hisashi was wrong, all people. He would never consider himself inferior to a rat. Despite the situation, Hisashi continued resisting, saying Raven would never be able to manipulate his brother the way he wanted. But Raven simply asked if Hisashi even knew the reason he wasn't allowed to contact his own brother. As he pulled out a massive spear with a glowing tip, he declared that it was precisely because he had been hiding everything from him. With a single direct strike to Hisashi's chest, he was finished, pinned against the wall. Raven coldly remarked that if Hisashi had simply not noticed something unnecessary, he could have continued living being tortured as always. Returning to the present, an old man declared that it would be better to cut off a limb and make someone useless than to deal with the problems they cause. He also said he could have played with Hisashi as if he were a mere toy. However, Raven explained that given their situation, they couldn't afford any information leaks. The old man agreed, stating that if things went well, Japan would soon disappear, and they could enjoy life at a resort. He even asked whether they should relax in Hawaii or the Maldives. This was Croaky, a member of the Dark Guild. He even considered taking a vacation in Dubai, but a blonde-haired boy remarked that the old man was getting ahead of himself, saying he would get bored at a resort within a day. He insinuated that Croaky was better suited to playing with his horrible toys. This angered the old man, who demanded to know what the boy meant, questioning whether he thought he could say anything just because he was a child. The blonde-haired boy's name was Jack, one of the 3 fighters on Yudo's level, along with Croaky and Raven. One of the men suggested that wiping out an entire country can earn them a promotion to headquarters, as they would gain a lot of prestige. But old man Croaky disagreed, saying that was exactly why the guy had no success. According to him, it was far more fun to kill people than to overthink things. Cutting off the conversation, Raven remarked that this was typical of the old man, but changed the subject, asking what happened to the men downstairs. The secretary informed him that even though she had sent reinforcements reinforcements. They had all been eliminated. Clearly irritated, Raven declared that since their enemy was the damn rat Yuto, it was obvious that weaklings wouldn't stand a chance against him. He decided to go deal with them personally and called Crookie and Jack to assist him. On the way to the fight, Crookie commented that they seemed to be trying really hard, asking Raven if he really thought all of them were necessary to handle those rats. But in an intimidating tone, Raven warned him not to underestimate Yuto. After all, even a cornered rat could bite a cat if it let its guard down. Moreover, he remembered the protagonist and told the others that because they didn't know his strength, they couldn't afford to take any risks. They had to crush both of them with everything they had. After saying this, he started spinning and showing off with his spear before slamming it into the ground, declaring that they needed to make sure their enemies would be thoroughly impaled by it. Returning to the midst of that endless battle that our protagonist and our buddy Yuto were unfortunately facing, the protagonist comments that this whole situation is really thought-provoking, wondering how many more there were since no matter how many they took down, more kept arriving. After he says this, our employed buddy comments that he's not sure, but he thinks they've taken down at least half of them. Even though it's exhausting, at least our protagonist knows this is profitable for him. Suddenly, both Yuto and the protagonist notice that amidst the silence, a person begins to approach. Yuto clearly becomes nervous, making the protagonist ask him what was going on and if something was wrong. Yuto then responds that the man approaching was precisely the one they were hunting, Raven, who approaches holding a spear with an extremely serious expression, commenting that it had been a long time since he last saw the little rat, referring to Yuto. He asks if Yuto came there already knowing everything that had happened, to which our buddy responds that he did, clearly stating that he was there to take revenge for his brother. Without wasting any time, he immediately activates his acceleration ability, gripping both swords to charge at Raven. Unfortunately, his ability was on cooldown, with more than 3 hours remaining before he could use it again. But even without being able to use his ability, he rushes at full speed to attack the third-rate villain that is Raven. In the midst of his charge, even the protagonist notices that Yuto has completely lost his composure. However, he decides not to intervene and just observe, since this is Yuto's fight. Unfortunately, just as our buddy is about to strike, Jack suddenly appears out of nowhere, using his wide-cut ability to prevent him from approaching Raven, almost hitting him in the process. Luckily, Yuto manages to dodge and immediately asks who the hell he is. The small Jack just sneers, saying that Yuto is an idiot for coming there just to die, then asks Crookie if that wasn't hilarious. The old man merely says that laughing at him would be rude, but scolds Yuto for throwing his life away for someone who is already dead anyway. As soon as Yuto realizes that these two are Jack and Crookie, he understands that they must take them seriously. Meanwhile, our protagonist calmly asks who those two are and if he should just blow them away like coins. Ignoring his question, Yuto demands to know why Hisashi had to die. However, with the utmost arrogance, Raven simply replies that there wasn't much of a reason, stating that a mere rat tried to bite its master and was therefore discarded. Yuto asks if Hisashi was killed just because he challenged them, and Raven confirms, stating that experimental animals that are no longer useful are simply discarded in the incinerator. He adds that this simple rule must have been very difficult for the two brotherly animals to understand, enraging our buddy, who demands to know how they dare to insult them. However, Raven's two other allies were still there, and they both charge at Yuto in a cowardly attack, telling him not to take his eyes off them or he would be killed even faster. In the middle of their attack, our protagonist suddenly intervenes, using his soul barrage ability to hit both at the same time, sending them crashing to the ground like sacks of potatoes. He then tells Yuto to take care of the third-rate villain, Raven, while he himself deals with the other two on the ground. Yuto thanks him, and then turns to Raven, telling him to prepare himself as he charges toward him. However, Raven doesn't take him very seriously, asking if Yuto really thinks he can kill him without his acceleration ability. He then uses his skill that creates an ice fortress in front of Yuto to block his approach. Even though he is prevented from advancing, Yuto says he won't be underestimated as he combines his two light swords, forming something akin to a double-bladed saber from Star Wars. He then leaps over the wall, using an overheat explosion ability to melt a good portion of the ice wall. The problem is that our protagonist notices Raven's trick as he smirks, but even while fighting Jack and Crookie at the same time, the protagonist still has the reaction speed necessary to create an explosion using coins, blasting Yuto backward. Naturally, Yuto is confused since he was attacked by his own ally. However, our protagonist simply tells him not to lower his guard anymore, asking what would have happened to him if he hadn't intervened. When Yuto looks ahead, he sees a massive ice pillar-like crystal emerging from the ground right where he had been standing. He realizes that he would have been hit head-on by that attack if not for the protagonist, who continues fighting the two while speaking. Before Yuto can even thank him, our protagonist warns that every rescue he does will cost Yuto another million out of his pocket, and he shouldn't forget to pay up after they get out of this situation. Besides, if he dies, he won't be able to complete his revenge. However, he shouldn't worry too much, as our protagonist has faith that he will win. Raven then comments that he doesn't know who our protagonist is, but since he's with a little rat, that must mean he's the one who got in their way during the mansion test and the modern art museum test. Endo, however, claims he doesn't know what Raven is talking about and tells him to stop making strange accusations, while internally noting that even though they are aware of the Golden Farm's involvement, they still don't know the protagonist's true identity. Still thinking he has the upper hand, Raven asks why the protagonist is siding with Yuto despite the huge risk. Smirking, our protagonist simply says that the reason is very simple, because of money. This genuinely surprises Raven, who's taken aback that someone would go against the Dark Guild just for money. But our protagonist cuts him off, saying that nothing in this world is more necessary than money. While saying this, he defeats Raven's two subordinates using only one hand, adding that besides having a bounty on Raven's head, he also has the opportunity to make Yuto work for him for free. He asserts that Raven killed Hisashi for the sake of the Dark Guild's money, but now it's time for Raven to die for the sake of his own money. He declares all of this while emanating a massive blue aura and activating his soul limit break ability. In front of Yuto, a screen appears notifying him that player Rie is attempting to use limit break on him, asking if he wants to accept. However, the ability involves a significant drawback after it ends, prompting the system to ask if he wants to proceed despite the risks. Without even thinking twice, Yudo accepts. With his limits surpassed, he emanates a massive blue aura, all his skill cooldowns are removed, and the system informs him that he has received a temporary power blessing from the protagonist. Endo, with a sly grin, simply tells Yudo to go ahead and beat the hell out of Raven. As soon as he finishes speaking, Yudo uses his acceleration ability. But unlike before, the color of the lightning is no longer purple, it's now blue. He then charges at Raven with everything he's got. Raven comments that this is a huge foolishness, preventing him from getting closer by using a large number of ice thorns that he throws in Yudo's direction. After that, he asks if he had forgotten, since no one knows his movements better than Raven himself. From his techniques and abilities, his fighting skills, even his speed and dual sword techniques are really impressive. However, he still has 3 weaknesses that put him at a disadvantage. The first is his very short range, the second is his lack of power, and he says all this while starting to attack our man from close range, making random attacks in different directions trying to hit him. Even our man Yudo realizes that using a spear and the required distance, their speeds are almost equivalent. After that, he lands a full blow that Yudo blocks with great difficulty, getting thrown a little backward. The third disadvantage is the long cooldown time of his abilities, which are much longer compared to Raven's. Once he already used his acceleration at the beginning of the battle, victory had already been decided for Raven. That's why he needs to break that ability before it activates. As he thinks this, he manages to break Raven's defense, with Raven wondering how he possesses such power. But just to annoy him, Yudo says, who could know? He thinks that the blessing that the protagonist gave him is truly powerful, as he is managing to fight on equal terms with Raven himself. However, due to a mistake from our man Yudo, Raven warns him that he was really very naive, while his retaliation ability sends the damage back at full force, breaking Yudo's defense and throwing him against the wall. After that blow, he can't even move, and Raven says he will send him to the same place where he sent his brother earlier. But by an unbelievable stroke of luck, Yudo manages to tilt his face a little to the right, dodging a sword from our protagonist that rips through his cheek and embeds itself in the wall. This makes the third-rate villain extremely angry, shouting at our protagonist to leave him alone. He would be the next anyway, so he shouldn't get in his way. But the attack wasn't meant to hurt him. Our protagonist simply tells Yudo to use that sword, and realizing that he fell into the trap, Raven still tries to act, but it was too late. He is pierced by the sword wielded by our man. Yudo says that the thing is, Raven had even learned to read his movements, but he didn't expect that Yudo had learned to use the dagger techniques from our man Rie. After pulling the sword out of Raven, he simply falls to the ground completely stiff like a sack of potatoes. Yudo is deeply moved, realizing that he had truly avenged his little brother while recalling the past they had. As he remembers these events, the recoil of the protagonist's ability reaches him with the end of the soul breaker. Yudo wanted to kill Raven with his own moves, but to console him, our protagonist simply holds him as he starts to fall and says that it wasn't his ability, but Yudo's effort. Despite nearly fainting, Yudo asks what happened to the old man and the child. Our protagonist simply tells him that he had taken care of them a long time ago, pointing to the 2 unconscious figures behind them as we return to see what happened. While our protagonist was watching Yudo fight Raven, the 2 tried to catch him off guard. Our protagonist was truly impressed, seeing that they were still alive after everything he had done. Jack activated his aura of death, and our protagonist realized that it was essentially a field where his abilities would be progressively enhanced. Inside, he tried again to use that wide cut that he had thrown at Yudo before all the confusion started. After our protagonist jumped to dodge, the old man tried to use a charged penetration with his sword from behind, while our protagonist was still in midair. He challenged the protagonist to dodge in midair, with Jack's attack coming from the front and the old man's from behind. That's exactly what our protagonist did, not only dodging but finishing Jack in midair, almost teleporting behind the old man after slicing his sword in half. Behind the old man, our protagonist simply says that he is stupid for throwing his weapon away, and just like Jack, Croaky was finished. We return to the present time with Yudo laughing at the situation. Our protagonist had wiped them out in an instant, but our protagonist says that this was predictable, considering the difference in their abilities, making it very easy. Yudo, all beaten up, just apologizes to our protagonist since after such a fight, he won't be able to move for a long time, asking if he can rest a bit. Naturally, our protagonist tells him to lay down in the corner since he's in the way of his money. But another voice interrupts, asking if it's too early for them to rest. A man holding a pickaxe tells him that he truly didn't expect the little rat Yudo to defeat someone like Raven. But just by looking at him, it was clear that he was almost dead, so they didn't need to worry about him anymore. Our protagonist simply says, ah, so the reinforcements from the Dark Guild arrived before the reinforcements from the Genesis Guild I had asked for. Our protagonist just smiles, looking at the group of around 20 people, remembering that they're worth about $1 million each. He says that this dungeon has become a very lucrative hunting ground for him as he prepares to attack them. The next scene is unbelievably disappointing, with our protagonist simply poking the body of the fallen man on the ground, saying that he's way weaker than he seemed, but in any case, he would receive the reward anyway, so it doesn't matter. As soon as he says this, several cars start arriving with the wings of Genesis symbol, and the protagonist sarcastically celebrates that they finally arrived, commenting on their delay while removing his mask, which looks more like glasses, and returning to his original appearance. The guild leader, Yamagata Tsukino, looks at our protagonist and congratulates him for the good work, saying that the 2 of them managed to completely clear out the base of the Dark Guild alone. She really can't believe that he actually pulled this off, but our protagonist simply says that it was incredibly easy for him. Anyway, Tsukino asks where Yudo is, and the protagonist points to the lazy guy who is just passed out on the ground, snoring away in dreamland. But poor Yudo is still celebrating because he's actually alive. Tsukino comments that it seems like it was a tough battle, considering Yudo's condition, but she announces that Genesis will help with the complete lockdown of the next base. In the background, Yudo was healed by a healer who appeared to assist him and thank the healer. Along with the protagonist, one of the men with the captain complains that blocking the base is really a problematic approach and questions that since the criminal criminals are all inside, it would be easier to just extract them as quickly as possible. A bald man agrees, saying that Genesis' force is much greater than the Dark Guilds and they could capture everyone in one sweep. But Tsukino rejects these ideas, stating that the commander is our protagonist, called by his player name, Ri. Tsukino affirms that they have to follow his rules and everyone is forbidden from questioning. Eventually, someone interrupts their conversation, saying that the discussion is getting old. She scolds the two men, reminding them that the captain had already said this earlier, asking if they weren't listening to her. This is Hoshino Iori, a member of their guild, and the bald man gets irritated, saying that it's none of her business, but she challenges him, asking if he thinks he can speak to her like that just because she's a woman, calling him Baldy. Our protagonist cuts them off, explaining that the strength of the enemy lies in their numbers, and to prevent any unforeseen events, they need to contain the fights in a very well secured area, just like they did this time. He warns that if anyone disagrees, they're free to do as they please, but he won't cooperate with them, and also won't take responsibility if they die. Finally, the protagonist asks if anyone still disagrees with his plan, and if so, to raise their hand. The only one who raises his hand is the bald man, and no one else dares to raise a hand pretending nothing happened. Naturally, they try to argue again with the captain, but she simply says that she doesn't know how she feels about it and doesn't give the bald man a chance to speak. However, the protagonist doesn't let it slide, telling Yudo to keep a close eye on those two, whispering to him that they seem very suspicious. As night falls, the captain orders that all the prisoners they captured in the area should be taken back to the guild. In the background, a massive barbecue is taking place, a quality gathering with everyone reunited. Even though all the work was done by our protagonist, they still celebrated. They are basically camping, waiting for the members of the Dark Guild to arrive or for any deliveries or something like that. However, it doesn't seem very practical because they're basically having a barbecue under the moonlight in front of the old enemy base, a signal that screams, "We're here." But anyway, Tsukino is talking to Yori, saying that even though they've been there for more than 3 hours since their arrival, no one has shown up. Yorda complains that the enemies are very persistent, but the most impressive thing about this whole place is seeing our protagonist wearing a pink apron, saying that the information about Genesis reinforcements must have leaked to the enemy. But they can only wait there slowly, as when the enemy gets desperate and tries to break the barrier, they'll be there to stop them, and slowly they'll starve since they can't get food with the entrance completely blocked. Yudo interrupts, saying that at least they have delicious meat, while the Dark Guild members are suffering inside from the smell. Our protagonist responds that in any case, it was the Genesis Guild that prepared this food. Tsukino and Yori explain that missions requiring camping are extremely tiring, so the more comfortable they feel, the better they can rest and eat, and the better they'll be able to fight at full strength. But as she talks, she interrupts herself, saying that it looks like their short rest is over, as two suspicious men are heading toward them. The protagonist asks if they should just send one or two, and the bald man says that since there are only a few, it seems more like a reconnaissance team than an attack one. But the protagonist disagrees, saying that in a player versus player battle, quality always wins over quantity. A pair of very skilled opponents is much more troublesome than 100 completely weak ones. He then asks Yudo if he recognizes any of them, and surprisingly, Yudo confirms, saying that they are definitely two high-ranking members of the Dark Guild and probably stronger than the late Raven himself. He recalls 3 individuals with codenames Beta, Gamma, and Alpha. Beyond that, he doesn't know anything else about them. Eventually, Tsukino shows footage of the reconnaissance team where 2 people, one with white hair and the other with purple hair, appear in the footage. She asks if he recognizes any of them, but both faces are new to him. Based on the situation, he thinks they might be Beta and Gamma. The protagonist says he understands and starts thinking that the other high-ranking member is likely inside the castle and will probably try to flank them. Leader Tsukino asks if the protagonist prefers a strategy where she would take care of one, suggesting that he handle one and she and the others handle the rest, and says this plan seems well balanced for their forces. But the protagonist simply says that she can do whatever she wants. Yudo, however, warns them to be very careful since, even though he met Alpha only once, he's never seen anyone as terrifying as him before or after that encounter. Ignoring this for a moment, the protagonist asks the guild leader if the stronger enemies would have better rewards. She denies, saying that all rewards will always be the same, regardless of the strength of the people involved. The protagonist grumbles that it's boring and prefers simply killing the weak ones for more money, telling Yudo to take charge of the other team. As night falls, the captain asks if everyone is ready, and once they confirm they're ready, suddenly a huge energy tremor shakes the area. They begin wondering what the heck is happening. Before the captain can give the order for everyone to get down, a small red energy sphere appears in front of them, lasting completely through the wall and the entrance, causing a huge lightning strike that knocks most of them down and injures some. Everyone wonders where this incredible destructive power came from and if anyone was injured. It turns out some people were severely injured, so the healers need to help them. From the middle of that bridge, the 2 people from the footage earlier begin to approach. The one with purple hair says that he really expected to have killed all of them with that attack, but since it didn't work, the one with white hair asks him to fire another shot of energy. The captain comments that it doesn't seem like either of these guys will fall so easily, and Yudo says he wants to go take care of the man with dual blades. But Tsukino says that won't be possible, as she's charging energy in her sword. She channels the fire into the blade and unleashes a cyclone of fire at both of them, hitting them with an explosion of flames. She says she'll handle both of them herself. Go Tsukino. While the sky turns completely red due to the ash from the fire, someone on top of the castle starts complaining about the noise they're making, saying that it's incredibly rude while biting on a piece of straw, glaring with red eyes, and warning them not to mess with Tsukimi. While the captain was standing in front of that huge wall of flames she created, making everyone admire how incredible the size of the flame was, she warned them that originally the fire cyclone was not a skill meant for fighting against people. However, from the middle of the flames, surprisingly, a man with white hair holding a long sword resembling a cleaver charged at her without having taken a single hit. By sheer luck, she managed to block it, asking him if he was really the guild leader, saying that she wasn't bad for a woman. But with the attack he landed, he broke her guard, and the man with the dual sword swords and purple hair was coming to hit her hard with both blades. Luckily, Gori stepped in front, using a dagger to block the attacks, and the purple-haired man even complimented her, saying that there were indeed some strong people here. And I don't know why Tsukino thanked him for that compliment. As she continued blocking the attacks from the white-haired man, who kept forcing her guard, he asked if, in case she hadn't been there, that girl would have already died. He warned that transcendent beings are exactly like that, very strong against monsters, but without real battle experience. She told him not to underestimate transcendent beings, saying that when it comes to experience, her whole team has much more than the two of them. But he denied it, saying he wasn't talking about monsters, but about the experience of killing people, jumping back in midair and activating a skill, spitting a kind of shining needle that hit her right in the shoulder. This took her by surprise, and she felt to her knees, her vision completely distorted, and this system notification appeared, informing her that she had received the condition of being mortally poisoned. Of course, all the members of her guild began to worry and tried to heal her, but unfortunately, it didn't work and she simply felt more pain. The white-haired man, who seemed more like a psychopath, and indeed he was, said that it was all useless, since none of the healers there could cure the poison. Even though Tsukino confirmed his words, she was still able to get up while channeling all her energy and creating a huge flame on her sword, saying that she just had to finish the fight before the poison spread completely, and that was the only thing she had to do in order not to be affected further. The white-haired man jumped, dodging the flames while saying that this was truly scary as it was very powerful, but he mocked her, saying that those who fight against monsters really love such flashy techniques, but in the end it doesn't do much against him, giving a little jab at the captain's ego, saying that she had already said that these skills were useless and didn't hit people who hunt players. But even as he tried to attack her again, she responded with another cyclone of flames, only this time much larger than before, but he remained in the middle of the flames as if it were nothing, and indeed, it was nothing, as he soon revealed that he had a skill that completely lubricated the flames she was throwing at him, so it was just a waste of energy for her. However, for his bad luck, he didn't notice that behind him, a member of her guild wielding a huge hammer imbued with lightning had advanced, landing a blow and using a hammer-smashing skill that injured him by surprise, knocking him hard into the ground. In the end, the blow did hurt the white-haired man's arm a bit, and he complained, calling the hammer wielder a muscular idiot, but he failed to notice that 3 other people were coming from behind him to attack. One with a spear using a deep penetration skill, another with a bow shooting with a fatal shot skill, and the third using a true circle to make a cut with a katana. The 3 attacked him from behind simultaneously, without giving him a chance to dodge. In the end, Tsukino warned that area of effect attack skills lose power because they're dispersed over the area and are only effective against weaker enemies. But large-scale fire attacks can cause enemies to lose some of their vision, and in situations with numerical advantage, they end up losing that advantage. She ended by saying that you really didn't know much as she fell to the ground, passing out. The system then notified that since the player Chow Farron had been killed, the negative status of mortal poison was removed from her. Finally, the big guy from earlier, who was wielding the hammer, helped her get back up a bit, saying that her idea of using smoke to disorient the enemy was really clever and had worked very well. She confirmed, saying that they had practiced a lot and it had paid off. She said that the strength of the Genesis Guild wasn't just in individual power, but in the strength of the organization itself, and that's exactly why they put in so much effort. As they looked at the huge cloud of smoke she had created with her skill, on the other side of the smoke and flames, we saw our buddy Yudo fighting directly against the man with purple hair and dual swords, landing a thermal cut that landed squarely on his shoulder. This man thought that he had indeed heard about the little rat betraying them, and while his power was definitely inferior to his, the real problem was that girl Hashino Iori. He started thinking about her characteristics, how her weapon was a dagger, and the class they predicted for her, an elite rogue. She was about 28 years old, not married, lived in the city of Musashino, and was a former member of a theater troupe. She had fairly average physical features, but even though she was Tsukino's right hand, she didn't have any notable accomplishments in battles. He was wondering if the spies had really gotten their report wrong, as he couldn't land a single hit on her. With the control she had, he was always being pushed into the range of Yudo's attacks, and he asked himself why they hadn't warned him that her combat skills were so high. While he thought this, he kept defending against some of her attacks, but in the end, one of her attacks ripped across his chest. Our buddy was coming from behind using both swords, and just when he was about to finish him off, the purple-haired man used a storm of blades, making several cuts to push them back a little, as he realized he had to retreat as soon as possible. However, in the middle of the attack, he noticed a huge grid of golden lines starting to surround him, and he realized that this was the skill of Endu Rie. But when we saw who was actually using the skill, it was really Iori. As the man asked who the hell she was, she used a domain expansion, jokingly, but she really made a symbol with her hand to use the skill, and started setting fire to all the golden lines. In the end, she completed the full skill of Soul Thread, Soul Incineration Matrix, burning the man completely until he was completely wiped off the map. After this battle ended, we saw the protagonist approaching in a strangely disconnected way from his usual personality, asking Iori if she, Rei-san, was done. Oddly enough, Iori confirmed, saying everything went well, referring to his body as Iori. And logically, the man with the cap was extremely confused about what was going on, along with a muscular man who used a hammer. After finishing speaking, the body of our protagonist begins to use a visual transformation skill, revealing that in fact the two of them had swapped appearances. Iori says she really got nervous with everything, and she was complaining because it's very hard to interpret our protagonist. And here's the trick. Remember that the protagonist was previously wearing a pink apron, didn't appear in the battles, and the man with the purple hair had commented commented that she had taken theater classes. Well, it's all connected. Take that anime, simply more intricate than Marvel films. Anyway, the bald man becomes extremely confused with this information, questioning whether she really had transformed into Endu, wondering what was happening. She explains that with the visual transformation ability, she swapped places with him since. Whether they like it or not, the Wings of Genesis Guild is entirely focused and specialized in clearing dungeons and completing them in the shortest time possible. So the best thing she could do was leave the combat against humans to their protagonist, who is a professional in that field. Endu says that this whole idea was actually conceived by Tsukino and Yori, and in the end, everything turned out better than he had expected. At the same time, he thinks that he's not exactly an expert in human combat, as she said, but in the end, it doesn't matter. He says that now the only person left is Alpha, calling him to come down, asking how long he expected to keep watching them from above. From up high, we have that man who had been waiting earlier, complaining about the noise, wondering who our protagonist really was, telling him not to be so arrogant. He then says that it doesn't matter how many weaklings gather, in the end, he'll turn this entire place into a shared grave for them, which leaves our protagonist extremely thoughtful, preparing to receive an attack. And that's exactly what happens as the man leaps down, using his sword to launch a huge slash at the ground, dismantling the entire temporary camp. Since he was already expecting it, our protagonist manages to see it and dodge, and Yudo helps Yori so she doesn't take a hit to the head. She ends up blushing as he holds her, and everyone here knows the rule, right? Blush. Our protagonist tells Yudo and Tsukino to evacuate everyone, while he simply realizes that the attack from that man was heading straight for his face. Fortunately, he dodges, but the blade, apparently controlled by mana, continues pursuing him, and he keeps evading. After this, we see Alpha, with several blades surrounding him, looking just like Gilgamesh from Fate, preparing to attack our protagonist with all of them at once. He says he wants to see how our protagonist will escape this and unleashes a barrage of attacks from all directions. With a lot of experience, our protagonist manages to dodge, and in the end, he uses his sword to slash the air, revealing that all these swords had phantom-like arms controlling them. When he cuts the arms, they stop moving immediately, falling to the ground. Alpha congratulates our protagonist for blocking his skill on the first try, saying it's not such a big surprise, since he has to consider that the protagonist managed to solo the Earth test, but it is impressive that he is floating. While Tsukino and Yori are surprised by the arms and him just floating, our protagonist thinks about the Berserker spirit and the soul of the invisible hands, summarizing that these abilities are essentially where cloned arms attack the enemy without giving rest. Realizing this, our protagonist shouts to Tsukino, explaining that his skill consumes a lot of stamina, and if they cover the enemy's healer, he won't be able to show himself and heal, so she needs to prevent him from getting close so he doesn't recover. As soon as he finishes speaking, she tells her team to cover the castle, not letting anyone escape while using long-range attacks. Meanwhile, our protagonist continues fighting Alpha, who is really not allowing him to gain any advantage, saying that it seems like a war of persistence and claiming that this kind of strategy is useless. Our protagonist realizes that he's really not letting him gain any advantage at a distance, and the Berserker spirit is considered one of the strongest low-level classes, with a number of attacks being vastly different and overwhelming. While our protagonist runs, he still gets hit in the cheek, with Alpha mocking him, asking how long he plans to keep running. The captain and vice captain of Genesis realize that our protagonist is being completely cornered, with them noticing that Alpha's skills, speed, and power are extremely overpowered. But our man, the number 3 employee, Aka Yudo, says it's not quite like that, and they need to take a closer look. He says that claiming the protagonist is being cornered or a little discouraged is wrong, since he's only blocking the attacks that could cause fatal damage to him. As he explains this, our protagonist continues fighting and blocking those attacks, thinking that since Alpha's class consumes an extremely large amount of stamina, if he keeps fighting this way, it's only a matter of time before he gets exhausted. And if he stops attacking, he won't be able to block an attack from our protagonist. So he wonders what Alpha will do in this situation. But given how much time they've already been there, our second-rate villain gets irritated, launching an extremely powerful slash that almost hits our protagonist, who says it was close. He then calls him extremely annoying, holding his sword and conjuring a huge number of blades in the air, saying they would settle this right now, calling our protagonist by name and then using the spiritual overload skill. Our protagonist looks at the enormous number of blades staring back at him, really thinking that this is going to be annoying while all the blades are thrown toward him, causing massive explosions on the ground as he jumps to avoid it. In the midst of the chaos, everyone watching gets startled as our protagonist uses the Soul Servant skill, summoning a huge bluish serpent that looks somewhat like a dragon, which stares at Alpha with a bloodthirsty gaze while saying that he had prepared a huge amount of food for it. Naturally, Alpha gets furious, questioning what a mere snake could do against him, launching a huge number of skills and swords at our protagonist, hitting him consistently. Thanks to the healers, they managed to heal him with various types of healing, such as elemental and advanced healing and even damage recovery. But the 3 healers at the same time say that they can't keep up with the amount of damage being inflicted on our protagonist. Alpha notices this situation and tells them to observe what the true power of a berserker is. He says to our protagonist not to even think he can compete with the main class and calls him a beginner. And I think it's here that he'll really regret calling our protagonist a beginner, as that offends his ego. Regardless, Tsukino orders the healers to do everything they can, but impressively, they realize that our protagonist's health isn't dropping, and as they realize this, Alpha also notices, wondering what's happening. That huge blue serpent starts to tremble, disintegrating and transforming into several smaller snakes, with their number increasing tremendously, while our protagonist stands atop one, saying that he'd told them he would give them a huge amount of food, asking if he thought it wasn't normal for their numbers to grow so much. All those swords begin to be devoured by these snakes, with our protagonist saying that apparently the food had run out, but they shouldn't worry, while pointing at Alpha and saying that there was still one very fresh piece of meat right in front of him. Naturally, after hearing the protagonist being called food, he gets visibly angry, staring at Froda and asking if he was really being called food by someone like him. He tells him to regret saying that in the afterlife. While saying this, Froda seems to be directly directly confronting our protagonist, cutting through the serpents entirely and killing almost all of them in an instant using a skill he possesses called spiritual territory. Even the protagonist was a little impressed by the incredible number of swords being thrown at the same time, realizing that the number of swords and arms and even the power had increased at the cost of losing some range. However, this type of combat consumes a lot of his life force, so they wouldn't last much longer, defeating the snake completely. So logically, he thought it must be him. And as soon as he thinks this and almost gets attacked from behind by a spear, our protagonist is saved at the last minute by Yudo, who uses acceleration to appear before the spear touches him. Yudo stares at the bald man and the man with the cap, saying that they finally reveal their true identities. He moves towards them, saying he would punish them himself, and before the poor guys could do anything, they both receive 2 slaps on the back of their necks, falling to the ground unconscious. Shifting our attention back to where it really matters, we see our protagonist, who is paying attention to you two, capturing them, forgetting to focus on the fight he was having with Alpha, who cowardly attacked our protagonist from behind. The protagonist managed to dodge and suddenly turned around with his sword, stabbing him in the chest and throwing him to the ground. He logically asks how our protagonist managed to block an attack that was perfectly designed to be a surprise, one that could be dodged. Our buddy says that there was never a surprise attack since he knew from the beginning that those two were spies, proven when he simply told Yudo to pay attention to those two earlier. Alpha spits some blood while asking our protagonist if he thinks he will be able to live a normal life after making enemies like them, warning him not to think that he can. Surprisingly, he vanishes in a cloud of smoke and glitter. Meanwhile, our protagonist, standing above the snake with the moon behind him, says that with this, most of the strength of the Dark Guild has been completely undone. Now all he had to do was collect his rewards. Skipping directly to the next day, we see some captured people, and practically with a count of 1 million pine trees for each person, the total being 452. Our protagonist received around 452 million yen, which was being carried by a gold transporter. After the loading was completed, our protagonist tells Tsukino that things seem to be over. He says she can do whatever she wants with what remains of the castle. She wonders if there's still anything left, saying she thought everything was already finished. But the protagonist raises a small bag with suspicious white powder, saying that since she mentioned it, he found it at that location. She simply says that she doesn't need anything like that. Directly heading to the Gold Farm Guild, the protagonist meets Rumi, who tells him that all the transfers for his reward had been completed. He compliments her for doing a good job. Additionally, she informs him that in recognition of his contribution to the guild, it seems that a government assistant would be assigned to him. He logically questions what this would be, saying he wouldn't accept any type of government surveillance. Naturally, she thought he would say that, so she asks what they should do with such an exorbitant amount of gold, all acquired through murder and theft. Yudo grabs a large amount and asks if a gold shop could buy all of it, then says it might not be possible. Even Rumi confirms that due to the huge amount, it really seems impossible. The protagonist simply says that, in any case, it's still property of a criminal organization. Exactly as he finishes saying this, someone enters the room, asking for permission and asking if our protagonist was there. When the protagonist asks who she is, she asks if he really doesn't remember her, saying that they met during the player ranking certification and association exam. He denies it, saying he doesn't remember anything that doesn't make him money. Nervously, she introduces herself, asking him to remember her, calling herself Sukuma Miza. Sukuma Roo Manian, the king of QRCs. Wrong script, it's Sukuma. As soon as she says her name, Rumi remembers having spoken with her and that she was someone from the rank exam records. Our protagonist simply asks if she's going to make money for him again, then says that she looks a bit different. She confirms, saying that the Japanese government sent her to be his assistant. In other words, a free assistant who works hard and saves on labor costs. But our protagonist simply says he doesn't need her, pointing to the large number of muscular men behind her, saying that he already has a great amount of brute force and that all of them work for free. Desperately, she says she'll do anything he needs, asking if she can stay. Naturally, all the men behind her start thinking dirty thoughts as there's simply a girl throwing herself at our protagonist completely out of the blue and for free. But the oblivious protagonist doesn't have time to think about it, as she starts saying that she knows everything from cleaning offices to arranging cars for him, even exchanging assets that shouldn't be made public or searching for illegal weapons and explosives, anything that is absolutely illegal. Our protagonist just looks at this government operation, thinking that it is really interesting, and she continues saying that, for example, she could exchange all the gold bars for him without needing to reveal their origin or whether it's done cleanly or not. She asks what he thinks about this, saying that she'd basically smuggle it to sell it abroad and then secretly transfer it to him without anyone knowing. She says that if they did this with a small special commission for the player association, nothing would seem suspicious. Finally, she asks if the gold bars were found in Takiji Mountain with a somewhat malicious look, asking if the protagonist would like to try this. He simply cuts her off completely, saying that he didn't trust her enough. But suddenly, she switches to a language the protagonist understands, asking what he thinks of 5 billion yen all at once. She says the real value of the gold bars should be a bit higher than that, and that she would transfer a little more to him later. Naturally, he asks if she can really do something like that. She confirms, saying she can move that amount entirely independently and would do it in less than 10 minutes. The protagonist takes this very seriously, set a 10-minute timer, saying that he wants to see her in action and telling her to try. Even the protagonist's subordinates were impressed by his words, as he really took this seriously, and it seems she did too. She said she understood and started heading somewhere. Jumping to 10 minutes later, Rumi is shocked and trembling as she looks at the tablet screen, seeing that 5 billion yen had been transferred to the protagonist's account. The sender's name was the Player Association, and she simply began to ask if he had finally understood, saying she thought she could be very useful to him and the Gold Farm Guild. Hey everyone, did you enjoy this story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys. Sukuma tells the protagonist that all the gold from the mountain had already been fully exchanged, and he received some basic pocket change, 1,200,000 won. The protagonist comments on how useful she seems to be, but before fully accepting accepting her, he needs to ask a simple question. The question itself is about the true objective of the government. Since this would soon become very obvious, she is completely honest. The government opposes the recruitment of its players by other countries, as powerful players are currently highly sought after by different nations. Given this, the protagonist lays it all out. If he can't make money properly in that place, he will definitely leave the country. So she had to do her best to keep him in Japan. She acknowledges his demand and immediately shows him the massive workload she has to deal with Rumi taking advantage of her and piling up a mountain of paperwork. On top of that, she assigns poor Sukuma to handle the selection of missions for the third week of the month. However, at the very least, she doesn't seem to mind. Yudo talks to the protagonist about how Sukuma doesn't seem to care about the workload and how Rumi is incredibly demanding when it comes to work, which is precisely why the protagonist made her the guild master. Endu approaches to ask what's going on, but she simply explains that even after checking the mission database, there hasn't been a single mission in the past few days. The protagonist finds this situation strange, and since that's the case, he asks her to confirm the issue directly with the government and put everything else on hold until it's verified. Following his request, she pulls out a staff from her drawer full of junk, one that looks straight out of Sailor Moon, and activates a remote telepathy skill. But calling it telepathy is a stretch, as it looks more like an obliteration beam shooting into the sky, similar to a flare signal. Surprisingly, it actually works, and Sukuma ends up receiving a transmission from 3 different sources: the government cabinet, the Players Association, and the Geospatial Information Authority. And indeed, it's not a mistake. There hasn't been a single mission in all of Japan during this entire period. Even the observation satellite hasn't detected any new missions or dungeons appearing in Japan. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs confirms that this situation is happening in other countries as well. Endo, who has already experienced, comments that he knows this is a prelude to a much larger mission coming soon. He advises prioritizing the collection of all high-priority missions that appear since there won't be any regular missions for a while. In a somewhat unclear time transition, we see that a new mission has begun. It's the Trial of the Waterfall, which has a 90-day time limit. The victory condition is to defeat the boss of this trial before time runs out. And if they fail, the punishment is the complete destruction of all of Asia, and anyone from Asia is eligible to participate in the mission. The mission also appears for the protagonist and his allies, and Rumi asks him what he plans to do and whether he has a strategy, given that they still have small-scale missions to complete. In the smartest way possible, he states that they will finish their current missions first. Since this is a mission that covers all of Asia, they will need time to organize rewards, sponsors, and other logistics. Until the rewards are officially presented, they will leave things as they are and not intervene. Logically, all of the protagonist's assistants find it odd that he is saying something like this. However, Endo himself explains that missions like this happen simultaneously in various locations around the world. Depending on the rewards, they might abandon Asia and move to another continent. Rumi is shocked by this statement. If they abandon Asia, Japan would be completely destroyed. She asks if he would really allow such a thing to happen. The protagonist bluntly states that everything depends on the rewards. He then assigns Misa Sukuma to be prepared for large-scale contracts, as from the moment the mission started, they had been competing directly with the world's major guilds. Additionally, she needs to select partners, as their numbers alone won't be enough. Even though the Wings of Genesis Guild isn't a bad option, they might find a more affordable guild to collaborate with. A week later at the Gold Farm Guild, we see Misa reporting on the details of the mission contract that had been disclosed. The reward is approximately $500 million per completed mission, and these missions are taking place in 5 locations around the world, 1 in each continent: America, Africa, Asia, Europe, and 1 exception in Australia. Of all these, only Asia and Australia are open for private contracts. The protagonist expected a high value, but didn't imagine it would be around 70 billion won initially for the missions. Since the reward is fixed, they need a contract based on reputation. Misa states that forming a partnership with Genesis was a good idea, since having Tsukino, who is one of the top 10 players, on their side will be a great help. But the protagonist doesn't care about that at all. The truth is, he chose them simply because they were the cheapest option. In this deal, Golden Farm receives 70%, while Genesis only gets 30%. Meanwhile, Rumi was handling the agreement with Tsukino, but she ended up noticing the protagonist and gave him a rather unusual smile. Back to the conversation between him and Misa, Endu questions whether she thinks they should form a contract with them. However, she isn't sure, since in terms of completed missions, combining both Genesis and Golden Farm, they rank around 100th place in the global rankings. Most guilds focus purely on numbers, accepting as many low-level missions as possible to boost their ranking. Guilds like Genesis and Golden Farm, which focus on elite members, are extremely rare. Furthermore, the identity of the top-ranked global player is unknown, and there are even rumors about a player from Thailand clearing a national-level mission solo. To conclude, the international meeting to finalize the teams is in just 2 weeks, so they need to gather information and prepare thoroughly by then. And since this manhwa doesn't waste time with unnecessary filler, we skip straight to 2 weeks later at the international conference room. The protagonist and his assistants are following him, along with Tsukino. However, in the end, only 4 teams are participating. This is logically strange, as the top guilds should be interested, but they simply couldn't gather enough members to participate. For large-scale missions like these, the number of players who are skilled enough is extremely limited. Inside the meeting room, Misa explains that when someone reaches a high enough skill level to participate in expeditions like this, they usually prefer a stable income without taking as many risks as they do. Tsukino comments that it's understandable, considering even they struggle to find volunteers. She then asks how many members from his guild are participating, though we already know the answer: everyone, plus a few extra recruits he picked up along the way. Of course, he asks if they stand a chance against the teams that joined, Blah Vobel and Black Dragon. She confirms, explaining that Blah Vobel is internationally recognized as a prestigious guild. They themselves guaranteed that they would take the mission in Australia, practically securing it. Meanwhile, Golden Farm is directly competing with Black Dragon for the Asia mission. The good news is that they have the advantage, as Black Dragon hasn't even successfully completed a national level mission before. Ruby asks if their victory wouldn't be easy with Genesis on their side, but it still isn't completely completely certain. However, during the conversation, we see the man leading Black Dragon staring intensely at Endo, his eyes glowing as he holds a fan decorated with a dragon. And during the hearing, as expected, Vogel secured the right to the mission in Australia. After the arrogant display of gratitude for something he already knew he would win, the woman delivering the announcement stated that they would now begin selecting the guild to represent the mission for the Asian continent. The selection process would be based on the strategy each team planned to use to clear the mission. The Japanese team began their presentation, led by Tsukino, and the protagonist placed his full trust in her. After she was given the floor, the scene cuts directly to the end of her speech, where she explains that these were the reasons for forming a partnership with Gold Farm, because together, they are fully capable of clearing the trial of the waterfall. Judging by the applause, it seemed like a solid presentation of their plans. However, on the other side, the Black Dragon representative slammed his hand on the table, and even the protagonist knew that the real problem in this room was them. The golden-eyed man wasted no time in acting like an idiot, immediately dismissing Tsukino's presentation as ridiculously boring. He then declared that, to prevent the committee from falling asleep, he would talk about something far more interesting. He argued that the protagonist group had low mobility, weak defense, and almost no offensive capabilities. He insisted that they needed to discuss the true responsibilities of a team. Then he pointed at the girl next to the protagonist and stated that over 70% of group eliminations were caused by members who were healers. So the Luminic simply suggested removing them from the teams altogether. Naturally, Yudo was furious at the suggestion. But the man continued, proposing that not only should healers be removed, but also all fragile classes, including assassins, supports, and others, practically leaving only tanks and melee combatants. He claimed that they had no need for those people. His team consisted solely of swordsmen, staff masters, and martial artists. These classes, he explained, could protect themselves by using aura as armor. In other words, as long as they had aura, they could keep fighting without needing healers or supports. According to him, this was a team without weaknesses. To support his claim, he pointed out that back when the game was active, they had successfully cleared multiple continental-level missions with this party composition. The missions they completed included the Trial of the Storm, the Abyss, and the Eastern Lands. However, despite their accomplishments, they had never experienced the Trial of the Waterfall before. Still, he believed they could clear it easily with this method. This nonsense seemed to convince the idiots watching, the same people who would make the final decision. But our protagonist, who is built differently, just chuckled and asked if he was finally done talking. Tsukino followed up on the protagonist's reaction, pointing out that they couldn't even imagine a team without a healer, especially in a continental-level mission. She then turned to the protagonist asking for his opinion, and the protagonist kept it real. For some missions, this strategy was indeed strong, especially for a trial like the Abyss, where this might be one of the best approaches. However, for the Trial of the Waterfall, this strategy was absolutely terrible. Without a doubt, they would be completely annihilated. Even Tsukino was shocked, realizing that the protagonist had basically just declared that everyone in Black Dragon would die, but he simply stated that this was all the explanation they needed to give. In the end, they expected to be chosen because they were the best option available. The woman making the announcements then declared that all teams had presented their strategies. The committee would now hold a private discussion to decide the results, and the final decision would be announced later. After leaving the room, Rumi approached the protagonist along with the rest of the group, asking if everything would be okay. The UN had gathered extensive data on continental-level missions, and they certainly wouldn't choose a team incapable of handling the task. Endu admitted that he didn't know for sure, but either way, this wouldn't be a bad outcome for them. The problem was that right in front of them, the Black Dragon representative appeared once again, mocking the protagonist and his team, calling them losers. He sneered, saying that he didn't think anyone else would have the courage to join them, and that all their efforts had been for nothing. The man went on to claim that everything had already been decided before they even stepped into that room. The protagonist asked if they had bribed the voters, and the guy basically implied that they had. Finally, he added that in any case, this was doing them a favor because having even a single healer in a team was laughable. But beyond that, he said it was unbelievable that they had a woman as a leader, telling her that at the very least she shouldn't be a useless hen. Tsukino, of course, was enraged. She called him arrogant and brainless, but at the very least she acknowledged that his guild had managed to protect cities and complete missions. However, as a threat, she added that it would be a shame if a guild like his were to be exterminated. She then asked if he wouldn't reconsider and just give up, but the man snapped, yelling at her not to underestimate them because they wouldn't back down. Just from Tsukino's slight implication, he was already preparing his fists, wrapping them in aura, ready to attack. Naturally, Tsukino didn't back down and got ready to charge at him, but the protagonist stepped in to ruin our fun, stopping the man from attacking and telling them both to calm down. The golden-eyed guy was immediately confused because he hadn't even seen the protagonist move. Meanwhile, the protagonist apologized on Tsukino's behalf and asked him to consider her withdrawal request invalid, essentially asking Black Dragon to take on and complete the mission. This confused everyone, and Endu quickly questioned whether they had even read the contract properly. According to the terms, if the guild initially chosen for the mission died or was unable to continue for any reason, the second choice guild would take over the mission. And in these cases, the mission reward would increase depending on the remaining time, meaning, in other words, the protagonist wanted to stack up even more money. The man burst into laughter at the statement, mocking the protagonist for actually thinking he could complete the mission if Black Dragon failed. He called the Genesis Guild a joke for being led by a woman and ridiculed Gold Farm. He laughed, his eyes sparkling as if that would intimidate anyone. Still, he insisted that the protagonist had already lost. He added that it was a shame, because after that declaration, he almost wanted to let them win, just so he could claim a higher reward and, in his words, watch pathetic Japanese people die. Before the argument could escalate, the same woman who had been making announcements earlier officially declared that the guild assigned to the mission would be Black Dragon. Just to be petty, the protagonist started clapping and sarcastically congratulated them, telling them not to rush to their defeat, because the longer they took, the bigger the reward would be for his team. The arrogant bastard simply called them ridiculous again and signaled for his little gang of lackeys to leave with him. Back in the control room of Gold Farm, Tsukino approached Endu, asking what they should do and whether they should return to Japan. But no, he stated that they would head head straight to China since they had already finished their missions there. They would stay close to the trial site, waiting for Black Dragon to lose. The slay bastard immediately asked Misa to book some plane tickets for all of them to fly to China, making it clear that they had to be cheap. But before they could continue, someone rudely barged in, yelling for them to wait. She started speaking exaggerated, forced Japanese, saying she had a request for all of them. She introduced herself as Marie from Blauvogel and immediately grabbed the protagonist's arm, claiming she was desperate. Tsukino stepped in, telling her not to force herself to speak Japanese as they had the shared language skill. If she spoke normally, they would understand her. Hearing that, Marie switched to German and explained that she wanted them to take over Blauvogel's mission. But Misa immediately approached the protagonist and whispered in his ear, reminding him that Blauvogel had 3 top-tier elite players, so completing a continental-level mission shouldn't be a problem for them. The protagonist asked if something had happened after they signed the contract. Marie confirmed, saying they were already in a difficult situation. The protagonist quickly realized they were in deep trouble and decided to teach her a saying since she was learning Japanese. The bastard put on a devilish grin and told her even the trials of hell depend on money, claiming it was the most famous Japanese proverb. Everyone who knew it was a lie just stared at him awkwardly. But since she didn't know any better, she asked if he would accept the mission if they paid him. Without giving a straight answer, the scene jumped to the entrance of the room where the girl's brother was waiting. She let not just the protagonist but his entire crew. Upon entering, she informed her brother that she had brought the Japanese team. The blonde man who had been shown before introduced himself as Daniel Keller, the leader of the Blauvogel Guild. Tsukino introduced herself as the leader of Wings of Genesis, and the protagonist introduced himself as Gold Farm's representative. Daniel was thrilled to meet Tsukino in person, saying it was a pleasure since she was one of the 10 transcendent players. He mentioned that his sister had already spoken about them taking over the Australian mission, and that they were planning to notify the UN about their withdrawal. Of course, that wasn't for nothing, so the protagonist told him to get to the point. Daniel decided to open up since the news would come out soon anyway. Out of the 3 transcendent players they had, 2 had been bought out by the United States. Even though everyone already knew the US was doing this, pulling such a move right before a continental mission was downright dirty. The protagonist understood that Daniel must have realized that having only 1 transcendent level player wasn't enough. Daniel essentially confirmed this, explaining that for this mission, at least 2 of the top 10 transcendent players were needed. And while it wasn't entirely impossible, he preferred to avoid risking such valuable resources on an unnecessary gamble. Endu commented that he was being extremely cautious, but he had no reason to complain since they would receive billions in rewards. The protagonist saw it as a good deal and asked Tsukino for her opinion. However, she immediately apologized, saying she wouldn't be able to participate. She elaborated that the members of Wings of Genesis were already reluctant to take on continental-level trials. Even for this trial, they had agreed to participate, but only with great hesitation. She apologized to Daniel and the people of Australia, explaining that she didn't think her guild members would agree to missions outside of Asia. Completely ignoring everything she had just explained, the king bluntly stated that Gold Farm would accept and complete the mission for them. Of course, that was what he wanted to say, but the reality was that they didn't have enough members for a continental-level mission, especially for the desert trial, where the number of participants was crucial. They needed at least 200 rank B players, but they couldn't even gather half that number. Taking advantage of the situation, the protagonist questioned whether Blauvogel wasn't a mercenary group. Then he asked if they could lend them at least 150 rank B players in exchange for 10% of the total trial reward. Daniel apologized, saying they couldn't lend their players. They always deployed teams with designated commanders to manage retreats or oversee missions, along with a logistics team. However, planning a retreat in a continental-level mission wasn't feasible. That said, it wasn't impossible. With 400 million yen, or even half of that, they could mobilize a decent force of players. The protagonist disagreed, saying the price was way too high, but even Ruby turned to Misa and asked if he hadn't already pocketed 70% of the reward from the waterfall trial. But anyway, Daniel asked if he didn't know that missions cost a lot of money. However, the protagonist was well aware that the equipment was self-financed, and besides, salaries only accounted for about 10 to 30% of the total rewards. Of course, the protagonist became extremely irritated, saying that you wouldn't need such a large army. You and Daniel's sister chimed in, pointing out that if they were strong enough, they wouldn't even need very powerful equipment. In that case, taking only 20% of the reward would already be highly profitable for them. Daniel agreed but whispered to his sister, asking if for some reason they were actually strong. He was aware of Genesis's strength but knew nothing about Gold Farm, especially since they didn't even have a single transcendent member. His sister confirmed that, in her opinion, they were strong, especially Endao. She even claimed that he seemed stronger than her. The protagonist, seemingly well aware of who she was, confirmed her statement. This surprised Daniel, who then asked if he even knew who she was. With his ever so humble ego, the protagonist simply pointed out that Daniel had just said that 2 of his continental-level players had been taken by the United States. Logically, that meant the only remaining continental-level player was her, and exceeding expectations, he directly called her out. Mary Keller ranked 7th among the strongest transcendent hunters. Shifting her personality slightly, she admitted that Endu was right. Then she turned to her own brother and asked if he knew who the protagonist was. Without warning, the lunatic suddenly launched an attack, sending a mass of vines from her arms in an attempt to bind the protagonist. But with swift reflexes, he simply grabbed the vines as if they were nothing, yanked them, and pulled Marie toward him, knocking her to the ground. Even while lying on the floor, the crazy girl's eyes sparkled as she excitedly told her brother that despite launching a total surprise attack, he not only dodged but also countered mid-strike, and he had the strength to throw her down without even using a skill. Daniel, on the other hand, was panicking. After all, Endu was an important guest. He demanded to know what she thought she was doing. What if she had actually hit him? But Marie already knew she had no chance of landing a hit. After all, he wasn't capable of handling her. Then he definitely wouldn't stand a chance against the Vermilion Spider, the boss of the Earth trial. And she also knew that the one who had cleared that trial wasn't Genesis. Relying on her own ability to judge people, she was convinced that Tsukino didn't have the strength strength to pass that trial, which meant there was only one person who could have done it. She looked at the protagonist with an arrogant yet approving gaze, placing him on a pedestal as the true one responsible for completely clearing the Earth trial. Then, with a confident expression, she declared that as long as he was there, everything would be just fine. Inside the desert trial, a large number of heavily armored vehicles filled with soldiers were gathered. The protagonists, Marie and Daniel, were inside one of them, along with the Gold Farm members. After stepping out of the jeeps to prepare for the mission, Marie used a large leaf to shield her face from the sun. Interrupting the two siblings who were talking, the protagonist asked if they could get started already. Some soldiers whispered about the way the protagonist spoke, finding it strange. Apparently, this time, the captain of the operation was from Gold Farm, which left them confused. Why would the leader of a small Japanese guild be in command of them? Of course, they assumed he was just a figurehead, a replacement for the hunters bought by the United States. Putting an end to the soldiers' chatter, Daniel shouted for their attention, explaining that this would be a joint operation with Gold Farm. He introduced the protagonist as the leader of Gold Farm and the commander of the mission. The protagonist, in his usual charismatic manner, introduced himself as Endu Rii, immediately clarifying something important. I will not let any of you die in this battle, and if you ever feel unsure about my decisions, always prioritize saving as many lives as possible. Even though the individual units had their own decision-making authority, any major instructions should be followed through him. This statement makes some of the more experienced soldiers nervous. They doubted that a continental-level mission could be conquered with such an idealistic mindset. Others, however, felt it was better to have a leader with a savior's mentality and to be treated as expendable. The reward was set at $5 million, but for every Balyu Vogel member killed, an additional $10 million would be deducted from the final reward. Yudo considered pointing this out, but they couldn't afford to dwell on it. After all, the desert trial was far larger than any of the casual trials out there. As they continued, the protagonist warned them that from that point forward, monsters could appear anywhere. Their priority should always be safety. With this command, the entire force began advancing. As the Wranglers moved alongside the soldiers, their faces showed concern when a sudden tremor shook the ground. Checking through binoculars, they spotted the source, an enormous grotesque bear approaching from about 2 kilometers away. Even at that distance, one of the group commanders ordered an immediate attack, and so they fired their heavy artillery, a kind of firepower used to bring down aircraft. Not one, but 7 massive shells were fired simultaneously, engulfing the bear in a storm of flames and explosions. Yet even after all that, it still wasn't enough. So they continued bombarding it while mages prepared their explosive magic, launching coin-infused spells at the beast. With the combined power of the artillery and magic, the bear was finally defeated without causing any casualties. Being the opportunist he was, the protagonist immediately approached a soldier, asking how much each of those bombs cost. The poor soldier didn't know the exact number, but he mentioned that they were instructed not to use expensive weaponry, so they were using cheaper projectiles. However, he did mention that each shell contained about 5 francs worth of coins. At that moment, the protagonist used telepathy to contact Miza, who accessed the communications satellite to talk to him. He asked her to check the market price of Vogel's projectiles. The 120mm shells combined with coin explosions cost around 300,000 yen each. But if they factored in the coins, each shot was closer to 1 million yen. This shocked the protagonist in an unbelievable way. This is ridiculous. Wasting that much on such small monsters. He decided on the spot his guild would take over the handling of these situations, and he would also warn the other teams. A soldier quickly relayed his order, cease fire. As soon as they stopped shooting, a small number of creatures approached, only 3 of them. But without any hesitation, the protagonist charged forward like a maniac, eyes locked on the creatures as he stormed across the sandy battlefield. Logically, he wiped them all out in an instant. And yet, in a completely tone-deaf reaction, Daniel started calling them cheap for saving money by not using those million-yen bullets. Daniel admitted that saving money was important, but he found it unbelievable to waste skills with cooldowns instead of using artillery. But his sister, who actually understood the situation, was watching through binoculars and corrected him. He's not even using skills. This left Daniel in complete disbelief, the same kind of soul-crushing disbelief people felt during those 4 damn minutes in the 2022 World Cup. He couldn't believe that the protagonist was handling all those monsters effortlessly, without using any abilities. Once again, Maria confidently reaffirmed, I told you already, he's far stronger than any of us. But amidst all the chaos, a radio transmission came in, an enemy was approaching from the right. And at this distance, even the protagonist would make it in time. So the protagonist called for the second unit, preparing them to intercept the incoming threat. The 3 assigned fighters gave it everything they had, using multiple abilities just to take down a single creature. That's when everyone realized all of the protagonist's teammates were elite fighters. This was truly astonishing. No one would have expected that a small guild from the Far East could be this powerful. And as long as they were here, this mission would be no problem at all. But Marie's turn was coming soon, because the real trial hadn't even begun yet. At a later moment, they are already close to the core of the trial, and some soldiers comment on having prepared the anti-sandstorm equipment. The protagonist has already given the order for everyone to get ready to enter, and Daniel told Roger to inform the other groups. From that point on, detailed descriptions would be completely useless due to the sheer amount of sand, so they would have to rely on their training. However, the protagonist ordered his team to protect the members of Vogel, even though this trial already belonged to them. Additionally, they had to keep their eyes open at all times, using the protective gear only on themselves. The protagonist orders everyone to charge into the middle of a freaking sand hurricane, leaving those around confused, wondering if they really needed to enter as well. The arrogant guy next to them said it wouldn't be a problem since a small guild had managed it without any trouble. As soon as they entered, they immediately realized that the place is incredibly dark due to the sand blocking the light. But in the middle of all that sand, they noticed 2 enormous eyes opening. Along with the eyes, a sudden attack comes, what seems to be a lion, and by sheer luck, they are not hit. Just as they are about to call for help from the fire troop, they realize they have gotten separated from the rest. Now that the 2 of them are isolated from the main force, they have no choice but to fight and give it everything they've got to survive. Since they aren't that strong, they decide to aim for the lion's weak points, its eyes. One of them launches a bunch of iron needles, but they only serve to distract the lion rather than harm it, while the other one unleashes a powerful slash. Unfortunately for the swordsman, the lion was faster and managed to react first, striking dangerously close to him. Even though it missed, he still got injured. His companion rushed to check if he was okay, but at that point, they were pretty much doomed as the lion charged forward, ready to devour them. By some unbelievable stroke of luck, someone appeared before they could become roasted meat and managed to cut the lion into so many pieces that it was impossible to count them. That person was the protagonist, and his biggest concern? Money, since he had narrowly avoided losing 20 million. He orders everyone to get ready and to leave no gaps in their defensive network. Without those people, the soldiers would have certainly died, so they needed to think of each one of them as a bundle of cash worth $10 million. That meant they had to protect them with extreme caution. Everyone seemed to understand, and Daniel quickly ordered the team to reform their positions. Those who couldn't defend themselves properly had to group up, and most importantly, they couldn't lose sight of their allies. If anyone got separated, they would surely die. After some time walking, they finally noticed it was getting brighter because they had successfully passed through the sandstorm. On the other side, after all their effort to get through, they found a massive ancient temple. At its center was a shining golden orb, next to a pillar protected by a barrier. The main pillar had 100% HP. It was the core of this trial. The smaller pillars also had 100% HP, and at the center, the golden orb was actually a miniature sun, completely indestructible. The eerie part was that as soon as they got closer, a strange voice welcomed them as challengers. It was the sun itself with a bizarre face, saying that those who sought death were welcome to continue into its domain. Marie immediately pointed out that the sun wouldn't attack them unless they entered the barrier. She explained that they had to destroy the first 3 pillars surrounding the main one to weaken the creature. The protagonist confirmed that they could attack all the pillars from a safe zone, but the problem was that they needed to deal a massive amount of damage. That was why they needed such a large number of people. Since that was the case, he declared that Gold Farm would take care of the core while Vogel handled the surrounding pillars. Additionally, the pillars wouldn't counterattack, so they could hit them as much as they wanted, like punching bags. They only needed to keep attacking the pillars until they turned red and then maintain them in that state. Marie sighed, knowing her role was coming up, but she found it boring and asked if she could join the fight against the main core instead. She wanted to test whether her plan would work in a continent-level mission. The protagonist, being a total jerk, completely denied her request. According to their calculations, her guild's firepower wasn't that impressive. If an A-class player like her left, they wouldn't have enough strength to turn the pillars red and keep them stable. Marie suggested that the protagonist himself could take her place, but the lunatic pointed his sword at her face and made it clear he was the one giving the orders here. If she disobeyed, she would have to pay a fine of 10 billion. If she was willing to pay that amount, then she could join them in the main fight. Even if she did, though, he couldn't guarantee her survival. Even she admitted that 10 billion was way too much compared to her allowance. Ironically, the protagonist just commented that it was really a shame, and then immediately began preparing everyone to launch the attack. With a purple aura emanating from him, crackling like lightning, he raised his sword, the one with Baphomet's face engraved on it. And that was it. Time for a straight-up brawl with the freaking sun. In the middle of the battle, one of the pillars being attacked by a bunch of Vogel members finally turns red. Not only that, but several others also start turning red thanks to everyone's cooperation. Taking advantage of the situation, since everything is going smoothly, the protagonist orders his team to stop attacking one of the pillars and start preparing to continue with the strategy once the colors stabilize. Mary talks to Daniel, telling him to forget what she had mentioned to him some other day. Of course, this leaves him confused, but the psycho then starts asking if her dear little brother is really going to defy her while wrapping those vines around his neck. With no other choice, he approaches the protagonist, saying he has a favor to ask. He requests that the protagonist allow the Vogel Guild to handle the boss. Naturally, this confuses the protagonist. After all, they were the ones who asked Japan for help in the first place because they thought they couldn't fight it alone. That wasn't exactly the case, though. Daniel just didn't want to fail completely. But now that they had a backup plan in case they lost, they could fight with peace of mind. This irritates the protagonist since they're treating his team as nothing more than a backup. He immediately brings up the contract breach, which is worth more than 10 billion. Even so, Daniel says he is fully aware of it. Realizing he wouldn't be able to change his mind, Endu uses his last argument, pointing out that even if they changed the team division, it wouldn't affect things just because they defeated the boss. In short, he would only be losing 10 million and taking unnecessary risks on top of that. But he doesn't really have a choice, even without any financial benefit, because that little psycho brat wants him to do it. Daniel starts making excuses, saying that they are a large-scale guild, renowned worldwide, and they need experience conquering continent-level trials. The members present that day were the best they had to offer. Since they were putting their lives on the line at the front, completing this trial would likely benefit the entire organization in the future. Marie interrupts the speech, saying there's no need to overcomplicate things. They are just players. She insists that when a challenge is extremely difficult and incomplete, it's only natural for them to want to conquer it. Just because the game has become reality doesn't mean they should start hesitating in a trial like a bunch of cowards. Then she shifts the responsibility onto the protagonist, asking if he can understand her way of thinking. He instantly rejects the notion, saying that as long as they pay the fine, he doesn't care in the slightest. The guy only cares about his money. He's practically Tigrinho too. Daniel is so quick about it that he immediately confirms that he has already transferred the funds to the protagonist's account. Even inside a dungeon near death, this guy still has signal. Meanwhile, I'm stuck in the corner struggling to get a single bar. The protagonist checks and confirms that the payment has indeed arrived. So from this point on, they truly wouldn't interfere with anything that happened. Daniel confirms this and states that they will slightly alter their approach. Now the protagonist and his team won't be exposed to unnecessary danger. The main force will focus on the core, while his group will take charge of dealing damage to the pillars. Endo starts getting suspicious of these actions and immediately uses his soul eye. He sees that Daniel's status contains a C-rank knight fragment that he could extract. Additionally, he notices a status condition, unexpected 10 billion payment. So even he hadn't expected to pay such an absurd amount of money, all because of his his sister's tantrum. In other words, we can't help but feel sorry for Daniel for having such a lunatic sister. The best part? She completely changed personalities out of nowhere without any prior warning. Ignoring that entirely, the protagonist considers that low-ranked souls are easy to place, but a valuable C-ranked soul is extremely rare. He has to obtain it no matter what. Acting like a true schemer, he asks Daniel if he would be interested in taking out insurance. If Daniel paid an additional 10 billion, the protagonist would personally ensure his safety if things got dangerous. Daniel actually finds the offer interesting and was about to ask more about it, until his nosy sister, Marie, interrupts. She immediately declares that it won't be necessary since they are all choosing to fight of their own free will. She even dares to claim that once they cross the line, the enemies won't be able to hit Daniel anyway, and paying 10 billion for such a minor risk is unnecessary. But what's truly unnecessary is her comment. The protagonist simply states that if that's what they want, then his team will focus entirely on the pillars. A few moments later, Marie and her guild begin preparing to enter. The protagonist then explains that the real enemy of this trial is not the sun, but rather the mana pillar at the center. The main team will be responsible for attacking the barrier and the guardians surrounding the mana pillar. Once the main barrier is destroyed, they will unleash everything that got on the pillar directly using Daniel's items, simply by using land missiles. But of course, even so, they cannot let their guard down or relax for a moment after crossing the line, because the sun's attack would start at full force against them. After making sure everyone understands the rules, the protagonist orders them to begin the battle, using his knight's intimidation ability to provoke the sun, getting its attention. As the tank of the team, he attracts the attention of the massive fire monster. The creature, though impressed, merely states that it would grant them the blessing of a peaceful death in the name of the sun. With that, it unleashes a fire ray so powerful that it's almost unbelievable that Daniel's ability was able to hold it off head-on. However, it wasn't just him alone. An enchantment of water was cast around him to help. Even with the enchantment, the ray didn't stop, and Daniel explained that since the enemy's attribute is entirely fire, they could use water abilities to protect themselves a bit more. Mary comments that her brother's provocation effect was being very effective. If they kept the pillars weakened, it would be able to defeat this creature easily, so she called everyone to go on the offensive, using her vines to behave like venom. Daniel takes advantage of everyone charging forward, while he stays behind, blocking the strike to give his allies attack power a boost with his ability. At the same time, the crazy one started using her vine abilities to form several needles, launching them at the barrier along with her allies, who seemed to be more like warriors, attacking with abilities of funny names like Crushing Throw and Obsidian Crack. With her combined attacks, it seems to be having an effect, as finally after so long, the sun is drawn back toward the center, having noticed the damage to its shield. At the very moment it teleports, it begins spawning multiple prisms, telling everyone to get ready as it launches several fire rays similar to the one it shot at Daniel. Marie herself manages to use her vine abilities to dodge and help most of them avoid the attack areas. If it hadn't been for her, most of them would have died right there. This already shocks the screen, as she realizes the number of attacks is so high that even human agility wouldn't be able to handle all of them. This psycho then orders everyone to retreat again, throwing them away, and while doing so, pulls a knife from her inventory and presses it to her own neck, just like a lunatic. Her teammates, of course, wonder what this psycho is going to do, but she does exactly what you would expect, although not in a bad way, at least not for you, YouTube. Get out of here with the demonization, dude. She made the cut specifically to release another ability, forming something like a blood flower coming from her neck toward the sky, and then forming several blood-made arms that looked almost like Marvel's Iron Spider. And she really looks stylish, resembling a massive spider with red petals flying around the place, her eyes also red, with this ability being called Blood Rose. After Marie activated her ability, the sun was already preparing its attack. It launched several rays of fire trying to hit her, but Marie managed to dodge every strike with ease, leaving Yudo astonished. Abilities that trade life for powerful buffs are common, but one is flashy and special, as hers was extremely rare. The protagonist confirmed this, adding that the greatest advantage of that ability wasn't the extreme mobility, but rather the offensive power it carried. After some time, Marie stopped dodging and turned to face the creature, nearly being struck by the rays. She then used her ability to fire several blood spikes at the sun. Meanwhile, Endo explained that each of those blood discs she launched held the attack power of an ordinary player. In this way, she was able to steadily reduce the Guardian Barrier's life. Yudo questioned whether such a powerful ability wouldn't consume an absurd amount of HP. It could be, but Endo explained that she was likely using HP and status buff abilities alongside it to ensure the technique could be used practically. This, in fact, was a strategy often employed by large guilds, which had enough members to cover during cooldown periods. Daniel commented that Endu seemed well-informed, since even among veteran players such knowledge wasn't very common. But according to Endu, the right information was available to anyone who knew where to look. Moreover, someone in the group claimed that thanks to Marie's destructive power, they wouldn't need to rely on heavy military weaponry anymore. Endu disagreed. He knew that the sun's attacks intensified as the barrier's life decreased, reaching the peak of difficulty once it was destroyed. Therefore, the best choice was to focus all their firepower as quickly as possible. While he was considering the high cost of such a plan, the barrier's life finally reached 50%. The ground, which had been flat until then, began to rise and deform, forming what looked like an altar. The creature, irritated, warned all challengers that if they wished to continue, they would have to offer a sacrifice. Immediately after, it fired another ray that struck near Marie. Even she was startled, realizing they had entered hard mode. Still, there might have been a chance with her ability. But when she saw the creature smile, she noticed the number of its weapons had increased. This power didn't make sense, unless all the debuffs were failing. Yet the outer pillars were still standing, so Marie ordered everyone to retreat as quickly as possible, leaving the attack zone. Suddenly, a new barrier rose. The sun repeated that they would need to offer a sacrifice to continue. They quickly realized the barrier wouldn't drop below 50%. To attack it, at least one player had to remain on the altar. Otherwise, the barrier would regenerate back up to 50% every time. This essentially forced someone to stay inside until the end of true sacrifice. Unafraid of the creature, Marie leaped back into the fight, throwing herself at the sun. But it was a bad idea. She was struck squarely on one of its spider-like legs. She blamed the sun's blinding light, understandable, but said her eyes were adjusting. Then she rushed forward again, dodging and striking with blood spikes. Endo found it impressive that they managed to recover from such a sudden attack, since most rookies would have panicked. Daniel asked whether the test's difficulty would increase even further. Someone replied that it wouldn't, at least not until the barrier reached its limit. The protagonist, ever opportunistic, told the blonde boy that if they wanted help protecting Marie, they would have to add another $5 billion to the deal. The boy was desperate, saying the agreement had been $1 billion for protection, but the protagonist simply said he had decided to raise the price, and even warned it would go up again later. Daniel decided to refuse, stating that he trusted his sister and would let her handle it. Inside the altar, however, Marie was fleeing as fast as she could. Since she couldn't attack, the guardian barrier's life didn't fall. When she considered stepping up her pace to strike harder, the sun seemed to have the same idea. It began firing only rays in sequences so rapid they resembled harsh whiplashes. She dodged a few, but soon the barrage became so overwhelming that she was cornered. With no escape, she was struck by several of those solar rays. One of them hit precisely, strong enough to tear off her right arm. Daniel panicked, screaming for his sister and asking why no one else was helping her. But it was obvious. Those members were just extras. They couldn't possibly tank something that even one of the guild's strongest couldn't endure. And the sun showed no mercy. While Daniel screamed, Marie kept trying to flee. Another ray struck her, this time squarely in the thigh. The wound was so severe it was as if her grave had been dug right there. Daniel, in panic, begged the protagonist to save her as quickly as possible. Even seeing the boy kneeling in despair, the protagonist was blunt. He would only save her if Daniel paid $10 billion. Without a second thought, Daniel agreed, saying he would pay whatever it took. The protagonist smiled. The deal was sealed. He leaped forward to save her so quickly that the ground cracked from the energy of his jump. The sun, realizing someone had volunteered to suffer alongside her, opened a grin. The protagonist was so fast that before the sun's final attacks could reach her, he had already grabbed her and carried her back, placing her beside Daniel, who immediately begged for someone with recovery magic. And it wasn't just one person healing her. 3 did so at once, casting wound recovery, divine healing, and extra healing. She ended up losing both her leg and her arm. The protagonist stated that it didn't seem to be a fatal wound, something to be expected from someone focused on durability. Our boy Daniel began thanking the protagonist, but he refused since gratitude wasn't necessary. He had charged for this and only risked his own life for money. Even hell bows to money. According to Daniel, this was the proverb that best defined the protagonist. With the $10 billion paid by the guild, the protagonist reached his goal and obtained a new soul extraction, a Type C Knight soul. While Endo paid attention to this, Marie suddenly burst into laughter like a mad woman, to the point her brother thought she had lost her mind after the battle. In a way, she truly was shaken after fighting something so terrifying. Marie declared that based on the analysis, they might lose 1 or 2 of the 10 transcendents. Her brother tried to encourage her, saying they had come this far thanks to her. But it didn't help much, since she had already used everything she had. Even the blood rose, and hadn't even scratched the creature. She concluded that such a monster wasn't something humans should be facing. Even so, the protagonist cut in, stating that wasn't true. After all, trials existed to be overcome by humans. Marie asked if, even after seeing everything, he still believed they could handle the creature. To confirm, all of the protagonist's companions gathered, and he declared that this was the reason they were there. Fighting against the core of the trial was Gold Farm's duty. Thus, the main group advanced toward the boss battle. Since Marie could no longer help much against the boss, she asked her brother to take her to one of the pillars, which made him worried. But she reassured him, saying she would do nothing more than assist in destroying the pillar to keep the sun weakened. Even in terrible conditions, she could still use her abilities, so there was no reason to remain idle. Besides, her lost limbs could be recovered later. Daniel accepted, understanding that his sister truly wanted to help, and carried her to the pillar. Back on the main battlefield, the protagonist ordered everyone to follow the strategy. One of the group members unleashed several waves of energy against the creature, while the protagonist dodged its attacks. The sun was entirely focused on him, while the rest of the team attacked without pause. The reason was simple. As long as someone was on the altar as the sacrifice, the creature would focus all of its attacks on that person. Therefore, the rest's job was to relentlessly attack the guardian barrier while Endu dodged everything. Rumi, leading the team, ordered everyone to save their long cooldown abilities for the moment the barrier was broken. In a short time, they had already reduced nearly 5% of the pillar's life. It was steady progress, surprising the siblings, who realized that if they had thought of this method earlier, perhaps they could have overcome the trial. But it wasn't that simple. The plan in theory looked easy. In practice, however, the sacrifice had to dodge every attack for an indefinite amount of time, something extremely difficult. Even Marie using the blood rose wouldn't have lasted as long as Endu was lasting. Daniel asked if the difference was just in level, but Marie knew her mobility was even greater. The real issue was that Endu could predict and anticipate the attacks instantly, something that required absurd skill. In other words, he relied more on his technique than on his abilities. Daniel even boosted the protagonist's morale by asking if he might be the last of the Transcendents. They couldn't claim that yet, but it was undeniable he stood on the same level as them. The protagonist continued striking the pillar while dodging. With the team's support, the Guardian Barrier was finally destroyed. Wasting no time, Rumi shouted for everyone to focus all their firepower on the main mana pillar before the sun could counterattack. All the mages unleashed their full strength at once, casting a devastating sequence of attacks against the pillar. The explosion was so intense it looked like a fireworks show. At that moment, the solar creature, in the height of its rage, announced to everyone that it would personally guarantee their deaths. The system then notified any strike from the creature would now result in instant death. The group panicked, questioning if that was real. But before the fear could spread, a storm of purple and blue energy, intertwined with black lightning, cut through the sun's heat. There was the protagonist, activating his abilities, preparing for the most brutal, one-sided beatdown in the entire story. With the dagger in hand and his eyes glowing, the protagonist protagonist only made the creature even angrier. The sun unleashed all its attacks in Endo's direction, and he didn't even try to dodge, leaving his allies terrified as they watched him being completely pierced through. Even impaled, the protagonist explained that those attacks killed without damaging the body, and that was precisely why he was the perfect target. But to the misfortune of our friend Flaming Ball, he had already activated his skill Soul Reserve, which simply put, delayed death by 10 seconds. Wasting no time, in just 1 second, he counterattacked with a powerful strike. After 3 seconds, the sun still hadn't reacted and Endu struck again. With Soul Disaster, he unleashed multiple simultaneous slashes, and finally, after 6.2 seconds, the protagonist sliced apart the main pillar. He still had 3.8 seconds left to spare, leaving the sun completely helpless, unable to even react. When the sun finally realized what had happened, its body began to distort. In its desperation, it was also torn apart, collapsing to the ground and shattering into hundreds of pieces. In less than 10 seconds, the protagonist had defeated the final challenge. The creature's core fell to the ground, and the desert trial was completed with the fewest casualties possible. Everyone celebrated for finally destroying the main pillar. Even the protagonist smiled, since they had performed better than he expected. Thanks to everything he had done, the system appeared to give him a little salute. Not even the protagonist himself expected it. The pillar had been classified as a boss. With congratulations, the system announced that he was the first player in the world to complete a continental-level trial. For that, he received the title and achievement of the first conqueror. But at the same time, the system informed him that he already possessed that title, and so the two were automatically combined. The new title granted was Ancestral Conqueror, which allowed the protagonist to deal 100% more damage to any boss or large-scale trial. In other words, he dealt double the damage of any normal player, completely broken. Even Endo himself admitted that the title was already strong, but now it was absurdly overpowered. If that existed during the game era, balance would have been thrown straight into the trash. With the destruction of the trial area beginning, the system asked who had defeated the boss. Both Blau Vogel and Gold Farm were registered as a joint team. Meanwhile, in Sydney, Australia, at Vogel's branch office, Daniel was already calculating the protagonist's payment. The total reward was $500 million, minus the cost of ammunition and Vogel's personal expenses. The final result was 62.25 billion yen for Gold Farm. With an additional 10 billion for saving Marie, that would be 72.25 billion yen paid to the protagonist by the end of the day. And still, Daniel had the nerve to ask if he had any objections. The protagonist replied that yes, he did, questioning whether Vogel could really pay 70 billion so easily. Daniel admitted that even with a net loss of 20 billion yen, it wouldn't be enough to sink the company. Besides, his little sister was worth far more than what they were paying. Marie, who already had her limbs restored, said it would still take a week for her to fully recover and be able to use her abilities again. Leaving that aside, she questioned the protagonist about the strategy used, since it had been very well thought out for each individual's qualities. She asked if there wasn't a more direct method. He answered that yes, there was. In fact, the trial itself had already revealed the method. The sun had stated that they needed to offer a sacrifice in order to continue. In short, a player would have to run across the barrier while the high-damage players attacked. It was literally a sacrificial altar. Daniel complained, saying it was absurd. But if it was to save an entire continent, the scales were obvious. The government could even use death row prisoners, throwing them onto the altar. As long as there was a sacrifice, the abilities didn't matter. However, carrying out such a plan in modern society would be practically impossible. This trial didn't just evaluate the strength of players, but society itself. In a certain way, it was a simple judgment. Either way, the protagonist, always thinking about profit, declared that anything was worth it as long as he was winning, already holding the contract in his hands. Now on a plane bound for China, the protagonist was traveling for the first time in first class. He looked at the menu while Yudo, also on his first trip, remarked that the luxury was excessive. Even so, it was strange. There was no one else aboard besides the members of Gold Farm. But considering they were heading to a country that could be destroyed by a trial, it wasn't that strange after all. Meanwhile, online news reported that all flights to Australia were fully booked. The protagonist knew why. Australia was the only country with no risk of being destroyed by a trial anytime soon. Yudo commented that probably only conquest teams, like them, were leaving Australia. The flight attendant appeared, asking if the protagonist would like a drink. Without hesitation, he ordered the most expensive one available. But right in the middle of the order, the poor man spilled everything because of an extremely strong turbulence. Experienced, the protagonist realized something was wrong and went to check immediately. Soon after, the pilot asked all passengers to remain in their seats and fasten their seatbelts. They didn't even have time to think when the plane began to shake, suddenly rising and dropping without any apparent reason. The protagonist quickly asked Rumi if she had any skill in her arsenal to stabilize the plane. Since she didn't, he shifted the responsibility to Yudo, asking if he could do something to help. But the problem was obvious. Yudo was nothing more than a fake Flash without any real skills. He then suggested that Endu should use his levitation ability. The thing was, for small things that might have worked. But with an airplane, the story was different. The weight was simply absurd. Everyone began to panic, questioning if no one could do anything, except for Endau, who rushed immediately to the cockpit. Once there, the pilots explained that the aircraft's elevator had jammed in the upward position, and no matter how hard the pilot pushed, he couldn't bring the plane back to normal alignment. The protagonist was shocked. Surviving a boss's one-hit kill attack was one thing, but dying in a plane crash was another story. He only asked if he needed to push the control down, already sprinting toward the rear of the plane. Even the pilot panicked, demanding to know what he was planning. If his idea was to leave the plane, it would be madness. The temperature was minus 30 degrees, the atmospheric pressure was 0.3, and of course, the speed exceeded 1,000 kilometers/a. Worst of all, the protagonist didn't even think twice before pulling the door's latch. In his mind, high-level players like him could survive a fall like that. As for those he mockingly called dairy cows, not so much. The attendant behind him was horrified, explaining that the door couldn't be opened due to the external pressure difference, and even if it could, he would be instantly sucked out. But the protagonist was only thinking about the money. Without fear, he hurled himself out of the plane, tethered by his ability Soul Web. To prevent cabin decompression, he asked Yudo to close the door the moment he stepped out. The flight attendant was stunned by his strength. Opening a door under dozens of tons of pressure with bare hands and throwing himself outside was simply impossible for a human. Outside, tethered to the plane with energy, the protagonist knew he had to solve the problem quickly, since resources were limited. He reached the tail of the plane and once again used his golden webs to hold the elevators, like Spider-Man trying to stop a train. Through sheer brute force, he managed to reposition the elevators. The plane stabilized to everyone's relief inside. They had almost expected this from him, but the speed with which he did it was what impressed the most. Meanwhile, he used telepathic communication with Misa to explain the situation. Before she could panic, he asked her to stay calm. After all, he was holding the plane steady with his webs. The problem was keeping it that way. Misa was furious that he had gone out without even consulting her, but she went to the captain to gather information. Entering his mind directly without ceremony left him startled. She relayed the situation back to the protagonist. It would be best to destroy both elevators, since they weren't responding. The protagonist even asked if that wouldn't be a problem, but since the captain himself confirmed it, he didn't think twice. He unleashed the strongest soul slash in his life, destroying both elevators, which then plunged into the ocean. Afterward, he returned to the plane, surrounded by people asking if he was okay. The pilots confirmed that he had saved them all, still unable to believe he was human. With the problem resolved, it was now up to the pilots to land the plane safely. Everyone prepared for an emergency landing, seatbelts fastened, oxygen masks in place, and tension filling the air. The water landing surprisingly went smoothly. Then they deployed inflatable rafts to move away from the aircraft. They even laughed as the protagonist used a net to catch some fish, asking Yudo which ones sold best. The members of Gold Farm who watched couldn't understand how those two idiots could be so calm in a situation like this. Ruby informed the protagonist that Sukuma had made contact, confirming that rescue would arrive in about 2 hours. They were thankful to have escaped an accident that could have been much worse. All thanks to the pilot and, of course, to the protagonist. Endo, suspicious, asked Misa if there was any information about the cause of the accident. She revealed that apparently some planes traveling from China to Australia had been tampered with, equipped with devices designed to jam the elevators. The fact that only their plane had been affected made it clear the target was Gold Farm, but it was strange that this had gone unnoticed during airport inspection. While Yudo asked for the dagger to clean the fish, the protagonist commented to Misa that for a player, sabotaging a plane wasn't very difficult. Even so, they had been lucky it hadn't exploded mid-air. Ruby added that the modifications were made with tiny items since anything larger wouldn't have passed inspection. Yudo, listening in, remarked that for something on this scale to happen, there must have been a huge organization behind it. The obvious conclusion was that the Dark Guild had tried to sabotage them because of the Asian trial. Normally, profits from quick stock sales would be intercepted by government measures. The problem was that no one knew how far their current methods of profit went. The trades were too big for mere speculators, so there had to be another motive. Maybe even revenge, since they had destroyed a Dark Guild base in Japan. Even if the plane had exploded mid-air, it would have been hard to kill the top players of the protagonist's guild. Even their enemies knew that and would rarely attempt such a plan. The protagonist thought that maybe the real objective wasn't to kill them, but to delay the team, since they needed to arrive before the deadline to enter the waterfall trial. When he asked how they would manage that, Misa was offended, as if he didn't already know what she was capable of. She declared that she would find a way to get them there, no matter what. Meanwhile, in Japan, in front of the Asian Continental Trial, a news report covered the events at the site. Not long ago, several vehicles had entered the area, but now there was no more movement. Even with the arrogant Black Dragon Guild claiming that it was very possible to complete the trial, the population remained worried. Only 3 days were left and nothing had been accomplished. This left the Japanese people in pure despair. All flights and ships departing from Asia to other continents were completely full. There were even cases where a single seat was sold for 20 million yen. In some places, the commotion among citizens was so great that it prevented planes from taking off. People physically fought each other to secure a spot. The less privileged population was the most stressed, since if the rich died, the poor would die along with them. In some cases, there were even players helping to destroy planes to prevent escapes. And it wasn't just in Japan. This chaos was happening all over the world. This entire news report on the global scenario was being watched precisely by our automatic gold farmer, who deep down knew that, in the end, everything would fall on him. Inside the waterfall trial, the overall view revealed the trial's world. It began on layer 1 and rose up to layer 11, where the waterfalls formed. Beside it, there was still an unidentified area. The Black Dragon team had already entered a cave near one of the waterfalls. A drone followed them, capturing every moment of the adventure. And worst of all, the leader was a streamer. He spoke directly to the broadcast, introducing himself as the Dragon King, leader of the guild. According to his predictions, the entire trial could be completed in half a day. As soon as they stood before the waterfall, monsters began to appear. From below, several marine creatures advanced against the guild, climbing up the first waterfall. The leader didn't even move to attack. He only commanded his warriors to intercept the monsters. Far too theatrical, a show to pose as a hero. Using their abilities, the warriors counterattacked. One of them unleashed an energy slash, slicing a monster in half. The second launched a devastating energy fist. The third, wielding nunchaku, brutally crushed another fish. The ordinary players who were assisting were astonished at the guild's strength. They already knew they were powerful, but not to that extent. Even so, their presence was strange. It didn't make sense to bring so many weak players, ones who had already been discarded in other tests. But according to leaks, there was some place within the trial that required a large number of people. The enemies of the first layer were completely annihilated. The path to the next area opened, but it would close in 10 minutes. Once it closed, the test would begin. Chains sprouted from the walls, forming climbing ropes so they could ascend. Thus, they advanced layer by layer. After defeating various creatures and completing challenges, they reached waterfall number 9. The leader explained to the broadcast that there were only 12 waterfalls in the trial, but just as they were nearing completion, the transmission signal was cut. Even though the leader told viewers not to worry, Rumi, who was watching from outside, asked the protagonist if there was any type of communication with those inside the trial. He denied it. The strange part was that signals usually passed through the trials. This could only mean deliberate interference. Even Yudo questioned why they would use signal blocking. The answer, according to the protagonist, was simple, so that what was about to happen would not be leaked. Inside the trial, the Black Dragon leader looked at his comrades, who confirmed the interference. Not even cell phones worked anymore. He cast a menacing glance at the secondary members, who became frightened. In short, continental-level trials were different from normal ones. Some possessed special weakening mechanics even before the actual combat, and the disposable players served that purpose. Excited to finally be useful, they asked how they would help. But, in a macabre way, the leader simply replied that they should die right there. At that very moment, a gigantic fish leaped from the water toward them. While some were devoured, other monsters surged from the waters. The leader explained that in the waterfall trial, the difficulty decreased as more people died inside it. Thus, useless people like them could finally contribute as sacrifices. Some tried to flee, but the leader laughed maniacally, saying they could run as much as they wanted as long as they had the skill to escape alive. But that wasn't the case. The fish reached them quickly, erasing them in a matter of moments. On the 10th floor, with all the secondary members discarded, the enemies had become ridiculously weak, to the point that they didn't even need to use skills to win. The Dragon King stated that sacrificing lives was the correct strategy for all continental trials. Even though things were easy now, the next waterfall would be far more difficult, so they shouldn't let their guard down. At the 11th waterfall, the leader finally began to fight alongside them, using his martial arts against some of the fish. Up until that moment, they hadn't even needed to use their long cooldown skills, but the happiness wouldn't last long. One of the fish, practically dead already, suddenly lunged at one of the members, almost catching him, until another companion saved him. They'd wonder how that fish was still alive in such a state. But not only it, all the other defeated monsters began to transform. The severed parts of their bodies turned into smaller fish, which swarmed against the guild. With the creatures biting everyone, the leader ordered them to stay calm. As long as they used aura to protect themselves, they wouldn't take damage, so they should focus on destroying them. But it was pointless. No matter how many smaller fish they killed, they kept multiplying. In the middle of the chaos, a huge fish leaped out of the water, devouring one of the team members. That left the leader confused. If the sacrifices had already been made, the monsters shouldn't be multiplying this much, unless some had survived. At that moment, he activated his special ability, Martial Aura, blasting the smaller fish away with a golden aura. He ordered everyone to use area of effect attacks, since targeting them one by one was useless. The team managed to deal with a large portion of the creatures, but the numbers didn't decrease. On the contrary, they only grew. And since everyone had used their skills at the same time, they were now on cooldown. Amid the desperation, a system message arrived. The monsters would continue to appear until the target number was reached. The problem, it was 300,000 fish. And so far, with all their effort, they had only defeated 6,612. It was impossible to deal with. The leader ordered everyone to retreat, but they couldn't. The creatures blocked their escape. Outside, news outlets across the world announced the failure of the Black Dragon Guild. The leader's whereabouts were unknown, and the International Players Federation treated the incident with extreme seriousness. Elsewhere, with the protagonist group, Rumi commented that it was exactly as the Prota had predicted. He only nodded. For him, that trial was never something Black Dragon could complete easily. And with his usual arrogance, he still thought to himself that he'd like to know what happened to those who failed. The answer came shortly after. The Dragon King, desperate, was running through Vietnam believing he could escape. He was already realizing that if even his guild couldn't complete it, maybe even Gold Farm wouldn't be able to. But it was already too late. Suddenly, he heard behind him fatal penetration. Without time to react, a sword pierced his skull. A man enveloped in golden aura appeared, floating above the blade, and reported through his communicator that punishment had been delivered to the Black Dragon leader for trying to flee without completing the trial. On the other end of the line, someone replied that he had done a good job, but also criticized the Dragon King, calling him a fool for believing he could endanger the entire continent and still escape. The conversation then shifted to another point. Gold Farm. The interlocutor asked about them, and the butler reported that they were arriving at the trial later that very day. He also mentioned that some members of Genesis were missing, but the main ones remained intact. Gold Farm had requested additional compensation to complete the trial. Amid the global crisis, the International Trial Committee and even the UN proposed an extra sum of $300 million. But the protagonist considered it insufficient. However, it was decided that they would add the 200 million seized from Black Dragon, totaling $500 million for completing the trial. At the entrance, Tsukino congratulated the protagonist for the good work, but confessed that she had been frightened when she heard about the plane attack. Still, she was sure that Gold Farm's elite squad wouldn't die so easily. The protagonist, without ceremony, celebrated. He had pressured the Federation and increased the compensation by 200 million. For him, they should even be thankful to whoever sabotaged the plane. Finally, he asked if the trial was scheduled for the next day. Tsukino, however, asked if he would be willing to move the mission up to that very day. Even though he was tired from the long trip, they would need to rescue the survivors abandoned by Black Dragon. Although he wasn't happy with the proposal, the protagonist accepted, but he imposed one condition: the fate of the rescued would be left in Gold Farm's hands. Inside the waterfall trial, after the protagonist group entered together with the Genesis Wings Guild, they were soon confronted by the massive number of fish. The protagonist even questioned if they were sure this was the first waterfall, making it clear that with the strength they currently had, completing it would be extremely difficult. He also emphasized that he would take no responsibility for whatever happened. With no room to complain, Tsukino simply accepted, but took the opportunity to ask about Genesis' missing members. According to Misa, they had fled out of fear of losing their lives and escaped to America. A shame, since they had lost a good healer. To make things worse, the sorcerer needed for the 11th waterfall had also run away. They had brought only a fire mage, but they would still need another to complete the trial. This trial, in particular, was unnecessarily difficult. Since reinforcements were needed, Tsukino ended up convincing a girl to accompany them. Her name was Fumika, a blood sorceress exclusive to Genesis. She arrived with a smile, cheerfully introducing herself, saying she had run away despite her mother's disapproval, all because Tsukino insisted too much. Tsukino apologized for practically forcing the girl to risk herself. She also admitted she felt guilty about the others fleeing, seeing it as her failure in leadership. Endu asked her to stop blaming herself. Fumika agreed, saying they should focus on what they could accomplish with the members they still had. Even in that situation, the protagonist asked if it wouldn't be better to wait a day. After all, if half of the survivors from the previous incursion died, the difficulty would decrease considerably. Tsukino, however, had already considered this. The problem was that if she acted that way, her guild would lose the very purpose it had been created for. Even faced with risk, she could not abandon those she could still save. The protagonist smiled at her attitude. Even so, Tsukino apologized for dragging everyone into danger because of her selfishness. He of course didn't mind. Helping players could be profitable, especially because it meant getting new cash cows to generate benefits for Gold Farm. While they talked, the protagonist's team had already completed the first test. Now they only needed to keep the pace and advance through the next waterfalls. It didn't take long for them to pass from the first up to the 10th waterfall. That was when interference began. The small fish were dead, but no visible survivors could be seen. The protagonist quickly sensed something was off. With cell phones malfunctioning, he deduced they must be hiding somewhere, and soon found a hidden cave. As soon as they entered, they noticed the place was different. The system itself explained that this space was a refuge. While inside, 5% of their life would be consumed every hour and no healing skill could be used. This meant that someone with 100% life could only last 20 hours. And of course, without healing, the situation became even harsher. To make matters worse, a group of survivors armed with bows and arrows appeared. Their leader asked if the group was part of the Black Dragon Guild. Without waiting for an answer, he charged at the protagonist, ready to strike him down. Fortunately, an ally intervened, preventing him from being crushed by Endu. The man looked puzzled, asking why his ally had stopped him and whether they really looked like Black Dragon members. When he realized they didn't, he asked if they might be a rescue team. The protagonist confirmed they were, but of course he first pulled out a contract. They would only be rescued if they agreed to become anicaps for Gold Farm. The protagonist explained that he would teach them how to profit as players. In exchange, they would give up half of everything they earned. He even showed examples of Gold Farm players who were already cash cows. The survivors thought it was absurd, reminding him that they had been betrayed by Black Dragon, and now, even when finally receiving help, they would still be exploited. In the middle of the argument, one red-haired survivor asked for calm and questioned whether the boy among them was also one of Gold Farm's cows. Upon hearing that he was, the man was shocked. But the protagonist explained that player handed over about 90% of his earnings and still wore a 2 million yen watch on his wrist. Surprised, the survivors asked how, even giving up 90% of his earnings, he could still afford such an expensive item. The protagonist answered for him. The player had made 21 million yen in the previous month. After deductions, he still kept more than 2 million net. Endu confirmed the information, which impressed Tsukino. When it came to money, no one knew more or remembered more than the protagonist. Returning to the main point, they asked if the boy hadn't already been strong before joining Gold Farm. To everyone's surprise, he said that before, he earned only 130 to 140,000 yen per month. Now, thanks to the protagonist, he flaunted luxury clothes and jewelry. With this simple demonstration, all the survivors signed the contract without questioning further. Even if it looked like a pyramid scheme, it wasn't a lie that they would profit more than before. After everyone signed, the protagonist asked how much life they had left. All of them were around 20%, which meant 4 hours remaining before they died. And that was when the protagonist confidently declared he would complete the entire trial before they fell. Hey everyone, did you enjoy the story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys.